Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a complete breakdown compilation of House of the Dragon Season 1. As we dive into Season 2, we wanted one place to point all of you for our in-depth analyses of all 10 episodes that we did back in 2022 for Season 1. The vicious kills, the non-stop incest, the piece-by-piece crumbling of King Viserys, despite the eternal agelessness of Sir Criston Cole. If you've already seen the breakdowns that we did in fall 2022, you really don't have to watch these again, but we're doing this after a lot of you asked us to recompile them into one video because a lot of you just like to watch one long YouTube video. And so, asked and answered, this video is over 3 hours long, but we helped you out by segmenting it up into chapters for you to digest it bit by bit at your leisure. But we've also added a new bonus chapter at the end of this video to break down the most important changes from the source material, Fire and Blood, to the House of the Dragon series. We've never really had time to do this before for House of the Dragon, and it's actually really helpful to understand how this series is clarifying and altering the Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones history, and what theories and lore we can still really hold on to for Season 2 and beyond. Now, these past videos have been edited slightly to remove a few bits that, looking back, I think might have been a bit too spoilery for Season 2. We also had to censor more of the violence because YouTube has gotten way more strict about that in the past 2 years, but I'm leaving in the theories and the hot takes that ended up being wrong because we wanted to preserve these the way they were, warts and all. And before we get into this compilation, our friends over at Nerd Riot are working on some amazing designs for House of the Dragon Season 2. Keep an eye out for them. It's the best way to support what we do here in New Rockstars and to celebrate House of the Dragon. So with that, take it away, Erik from August 2022, who's about to freak you out further by flashing back to Erik from May 2016. A flashback within a flashback. Here we go. Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of the first episode of House of the Dragon, a Game of Thrones prequel series adapted from George R.R. Martin's Fire and Blood. I actually started on this channel writing all of and eventually hosting the Game of Thrones analyses. And look how young and innocent that widow boy walked. He had no idea what laid before him and how a career in YouTube would plague him with social disorders. But hey, I'm still excited to return to Westeros, not just to list a random number of Easter eggs, but really to dig into the deeper thematic subtext, analyze the interesting cinematic details, and make that HBO flavored violence even sexier and that HBO flavored sex even more violent. This episode opens with narration from adult Rhaenyra Targaryen, who will be played by Emma Darcy in future episodes. She's recounting the Great Council of 101. The dynasty of Aegon the Conqueror went Aegon, then Aenys, then Maegor, and now Jaehaerys. Jaehaerys' first son Aemon had died 9 years prior, leaving behind Aemon's daughter, Rhaenys, but she was the queen who never was, passed over for his second son Baelon, who had just died of a burst appendix. Warring factions began to rally, so Jaehaerys gathered this council to decide his heir and prevent civil war. But a difference from the book here, it did not come down to Viserys and Rhaenys. Rhaenys made a claim, but was immediately discounted due to her being a woman. It really came down to Viserys and Rhaenys' son, Laenor Velaryon, whom we will meet later in this series. But here they emphasize Rhaenys getting slighted to connect this history to the similar succession drama that goes down with Rhaenyra. This setting is Harrenhal. You remember that from Season 2 of Game of Thrones. It's the largest structure in Westeros that was chosen to house these 1,000 lords. Notice how the Targaryens' hair blows in the wind, as this castle is in a ruined state, exposed to the elements. Why? Because a century earlier, Aegon's dragon Balerion torched this place to the ground. Really, the fact that Viserys was the final Targaryen prince to ride Balerion, who had died 7 years before this, was a major factor that led to him being chosen as Jaehaerys' heir. And now, with his hair blowing in this wind, he really does fit the bill of a dragon rider who torched places just like this. Also, a prince who uses conditioner. Maybe he's born with it. Or maybe he's got dragon dreams. Rhaenyra's voiceover says,
"In those days, House Targaryen stood at the height of its strength, with 10 adult dragons under its yoke.
Under its yoke? Yeah, right. Viserys reveals that the Targaryens' actual control of the dragons is an illusion. Also, yolk, as in that of an egg. An egg does become a key symbol later this episode. The scroll that Jaehaerys reads is stamped with the sigil of the Order of Maesters, a ring of chains. Notice how the Maesters of this series wear chains that are more varied than the chains worn by the Maesters in the Game of Thrones series, really because each link is meant to represent mastery of a completely different field, kind of like merit badges. Though I don't know if these Maesters really deserve one for OBGYNing. The opening title shows the Targaryen sigil of the 3 dragon heads and music from returning Game of Thrones composer Ramin Djawadi. Yeah, you'll notice the end has that same bass string tremor that Djawadi would use in the House Targaryen theme in Game of Thrones right before a dragon would Dracarys.
Dracarys.
And you'll notice we don't really get a classic Game of Thrones style animated game board opening. However, I do think we get a nod to that Game of Thrones game board hidden interestingly in this episode later on. Then we jump ahead about a decade later as Rhaenyra rides her gold-colored dragon Syrax through the clouds. Yes, it took multiple seasons in Game of Thrones to get to dragons, but this one starts right off with them. A way bigger budget's always a beautiful thing. Notice on the Red Keep, some construction scaffolding is visible. This castle was completed decades earlier, finished by Maegor the Cruel, who also ordered the construction of the Great Dragon Pit, which you can see in the background here, still beautiful and intact. The ruins of this dragon pit were seen in Game of Thrones, where in season 7, Daenerys talked about how locking the dragons in this pit destroyed the Targaryens.
This place was the beginning of the end for my family. We weren't extraordinary without them. We were just like everyone else.
A reality that Rhaenyra admits using the same words at the end of this episode.
Without them, we're just like everyone else.
As Syrax lands, the Elder Dragon Keeper uses his staff to halt the younger one, and they speak in High Valyrian commands. Dohairis, meaning I think to serve, as in Valar Dohairis, but I think in this context maybe it means obey. Then Umbas, not really sure about that one, maybe it means in line. Rybas, which means listen or hear, and then later Nyot, which means forward. Rhaenyra's friend is Alicent Hightower, who says,
Syrax is growing quickly. She'll soon be as large as Caraxes.
That's almost large enough to settle too.
Caraxes is Daemon's dragon, nicknamed the Bloodworm for its extra long neck. You'll notice these dragons wear saddles, which makes sense for animals one would ride. Daenerys never used a saddle to ride Drogon in Game of Thrones, and when they asked how Daenerys could stay on this dragon, some people who worked on the show told my colleague Joanna Robinson over on the Ringerverse podcast that apparently it had to do with Drogon's spikes and the way a hat sits on a hook. I know. But yes, Rhaenyra does mention a saddle for two, and this episode does end with a two-seated saddle, just on a different dragon, Caraxes, as Daemon and Mysaria leave. But notice how we cut back to Syrax here and realize that only then did this dragon turn back into the pit. Syrax was watching these two girls for their whole conversation, as if not trusting Alicent. The carriage rolls past a statue of Balerion the Black Dread. Remember that was Aegon's dragon, last ridden by Viserys several years prior. These are the Red Keep courtyard. This looks like the same location Cersei Lannister would later convert to the map floor in the later seasons of Game of Thrones. Over all of this, Jawadi's main Game of Thrones melody plays because, you know, HBO really needs us to remember the good times. And Queen Emma's chamber, incense burns, and a maester writes a desk. This guy's likely working on those moon charts that Melos will later update the king about. A septa lights candles in front of wall art that depicts several characters apparently in an orgy. This chamber is covered in porny imagery, maybe to encourage fertility. Some nurseries have like plush toys. This one has handjob art. Emma says,
"This discomfort is how we serve the realm."
I'd rather serve as a knight and ride to battle in glory.
While Rhaenyra is presented as a Daenerys figure, here she echoes Arya.
You will marry a High Lord and rule this castle.
No, that's not me.
Emma then says,
The childbed is our battlefield.
an important foreshadowing line, because later director Miguel Sapochnik will intercut between the bloody fight in the tourney and the even bloodier scenes of the childbirth. Because whereas tourneys are pretend wars that often end in a knight yielding, Emma didn't have that option. Her childbed was a literal battlefield where they tried to decide kings, and ultimately, like many battlefields, no one really walked away from it. On to the king's small council.
I said to him, well, I believe you might be looking up the wrong end.
Yes, Viserys finishes a dirty joke. Maybe even the punchline to Tyrion's never-ended joke from Game of Thrones.
I once brought a jackass and a honeycomb into a brothel.
Silence! What happened next?
But if you look online, there are actually quite a few really great possible answers to that one. Notice how Viserys eats a boiled egg. Now, a dragon egg will become a major plot point with Daemon later on this season, but this episode also draws a parallel to Viserys' unborn child and an egg.
After this miserable pregnancy, I wouldn't be surprised if I hatched an actual dragon.
Now, this is a cruel parallel, but Viserys eats a boiled egg here, while his baby egg does not survive and ends up getting cooked. Viserys' small council includes his hand, Otto Hightower, Master of Laws, Lionel Strong, Grand Maester Melos, Master of Coin, Lyman Breezebury, and Master of Ships, Corlys Velaryon, Lord of Driftmark, his sigil the Seahorse. He's husband to Rhaenys. He and all the Velaryons have silver hair because the Velaryons are really kissing cousins to the Targaryens. Both Emma and Viserys smelled dragon on their daughter. I love this detail because it gives a new sensory weight to creatures that otherwise would just come off as VFX nothings. But like any riding animal, dragons would have a scent to them. I'm gonna guess it's smoky. Otto brushes off Corlys's warnings about Kragus the crab feeder and the stepstones, and Otto tries to redirect to a lighter subject of the tourney, but since this tourney is in honor of Viserys' unborn son, the subject is actually even more serious because notice how Corlys refuses wine from Rhaenyra so that he can listen closely to the Melos' updates about the health and sex of that child. Later in the episode, you'll notice after Emma's death, Corlys pours wine, but isn't surprised when Otto brings up the succession matter. He's like, motherfucker, I want to be sober for this stuff. Sir Harold Westerling takes Rhaenyra to the throne room.
He passed through the Red Keep's gates at first light.
Does my father know his head?
No.
Good.
We just learned quite a bit about Prince Daemon, his reputation preceding him. Daemon is a massive celebrity, yet somehow he managed to sneak into the Red Keep with very few noticing. Master of sneaks! This tells us that Daemon has some pretty tight connection with the City Watch, that Viserys has a blind spot for his brother, that Rhaenyra likes having secrets with her uncle, and that Daemon might know some hidden passageways around the castle that others don't. Maegor the Cruel actually had the builders of this castle killed to keep its secrets, but maybe Daemon has learned some of them. Daemon sits on the Iron Throne.
God be good.
Notice how the Iron Throne is a larger nest of swords than it was in Game of Thrones. It's now closer to the description in George R.R. Martin's text, where it's supposed to be more of a mound of swords, but still to connect it with its look in Game of Thrones, they essentially just added a briar patch of swords surrounding the throne. But by designing it this way, you can see how Aegon recklessly just tossed more and more swords into that pile and just had Balerion melt it with dragonfire, making this a bit of a historical deconstruction to that grand design of the Targaryen dynasty. It actually seems more like a hasty scramble, as this sloppy dynasty more truly was. George R.R. Martin's The Rogue Prince said of Daemon, "In his day there was not a man so admired, so beloved, and so reviled in all of Westeros. He was made of light and darkness in equal parts. To some he was a hero, to others he was the blackest of villains." Similarly, notice how it takes us a moment to see Daemon in the light, as this uncle and niece speak in High Valyrian. The throne and the surrounding swords cast Daemon in shadow, giving him a deceitful look about him. Also notice how he leans forward and to his right, unlike his brother who leans back and leans on the left armrest when he sits on the throne. Daemon seems to instinctively know how to sit on this throne without getting cut, because their ancestor Aegon the Conqueror designed it in such a way with exposed, still sharp swords that would make it really uncomfortable to sit in and make the Iron Throne not much of a desirable seat to want. Daemon gives his niece a necklace.
It's Valyrian steel. Like Dark Sister.
Dark Sister is the name of Daemon's sword, first carried by Aegon's sister Visenya. Notice how, as he yanks that necklace back, he grips it in a fist, like a chain wrapped around knuckles as a kind of weapon. Valyrian steel is extremely rare, since the art of forging it was lost in the Doom of Valyria. So to use it for jewelry, therefore, just seems insane. But symbolically, it links these two in a kind of relationship that will be a weapon wielded against many others in this series. Rhaenyra and Alicent sit in the Godswood. You can see the red leaves of the weirwood tree and its face with the bleeding eyes and the white trunk behind them. The weirwood trees represent the old gods. These were carved by the children of the forest, and many of these were cut down by the first men, who believed that the children's greenseers could use these trees' faces to spy on men. And the fact that Rhaenyra and Alicent have this little disagreement over the value of Rhaenyra's royal position in the presence of a weirwood tree is significant, as if the old gods are watching these two future queens begin to square off as friends. Alicent quizzes Rhaenyra about Princess Nymeria, the namesake of Arya's direwolf, and the warrior queen who led the Rhoynar and conquered Dorne and took Mors Martell as her husband. Turns out Rhaenyra does know this history, but she tears the page out of the book, showing how she is unbound by historical precedent. But ironically, it is these kind of historical textbooks that bring Alicent in between Rhaenyra and her father Viserys. Viserys is treated for a wound.
It's a small cut from sitting the throne. It's nothing.
Otto tells Mellos to keep it quiet because getting cut from the swords of the Iron Throne is meant to be a bad omen for a ruler. As Daemon said earlier, you are all cursed with me. And notice this cut is on Viserys' lower left back, the side that Daemon leaned away from the Iron Throne when he sat on it. The Maester attendant says,
"It's a wound that refuses to heal, Grand Maester."
The unhealable wound is a Jungian archetype in fiction, a physical malady representing a spiritual curse that a character must bear. For Viserys, this unhealable wound is really a manifestation of the curse of his family's exploitation of dragon power and the folly of their dreams, which is really the deeper theme of this episode. Emma tells Viserys that Rhaenyra declared the baby a girl.
She even named her.
Dare I ask?
Visenya. She chose a dragon's egg for the cradle that she said reminded her of Vhagar.
God be good. This family already has its Visenya.
Remember, Rhaenyra told others that she wanted the baby to be a son for Viserys' sake. So we learn here that Rhaenyra actually lies, depending on who she is talking to. Now, Visenya was Aegon's sister wife, carrier of Dark Sister, rider of the dragon Vhagar. Vhagar, by the way, still alive, and it was Visenya who produced Maegor the Cruel. Both of these were really considered to be the unstable branch of Targaryens. So Viserys here is saying, we already had one Visenya in our history, but also Visenya's spirit lives on in Daemon. Viserys said he dreamed that the baby was a boy wearing Aegon's iron crown.
And I heard the sound of thundering hooves, splintering shields and ringing swords. And I placed our son upon the Iron Throne. As the bells of the Grand Sept tolled, and all the dragons roared as one.
Dreams are incredibly important to the Targaryens, not just Aegon's dream that Viserys reveals later. The Targaryens first came to Westeros from Valyria because of a dream. Daenys, the dreamer, dreamt that Valyria would be destroyed in an apocalyptic event, and the people of Valyria mocked her and the family. But her father, Aenar, believed her, and the family fled to Dragonstone. 12 years after that, dreams confirmed. Valyria was destroyed in an earthquake and volcano, leaving the Targaryens as really the only dragon riders left in the world. And the Targaryens walked away from that as a family obsessed with dreams and prophecy, a curse that will poison every generation of Targaryens after this. Daemon unleashes a city guard on King's Landing. These gold cloaks just cherry pick targets and butcher them. Now, we will have to censor this visually, but I'm pretty sure the guy they castrate lets out a nervous fart when they strip off his pants. No! I swear we did not edit the audio of that. Daemon's helmet is designed to look like a dragon with its wings folded in, but this does not look like his dragon, Caraxes, which is red and has a long neck. Rather, this looks more like Balerion the Black Dread. So with his armor, Daemon is really trying to cast himself as an inevitable heir to Aegon's dynasty. The small council meets again, but this time with Daemon present, still smeared in blood. They mark their presence with balls on plates. The set decorator and production designer came up with these as a way of punching in for work, but I like how this gives each member's place setting an intentionality to it. 4 members to Viserys' left, Corlys at the far end, furthest away, having to shout to be heard, and then in the hand of the king, Otto alone on Viserys' right. His casual whispers most effective. Now in the brothel with Daemon and Mysaria, we start this scene with other women peeping in at them through the slots in the wall. This indicates that nothing Daemon does at these brothels is private, and for us, it connects the viewer with the voyeurs rather than with the participants, because that's what we are. We're pervy little voyeurs. Mysaria offers,
I could bring in another. I could even arrange one with Silveria.
Yikes! This tells us that Daemon has in the past requested a partner who looks like she's related to him. So that moment with Rhaenyra wasn't so pure, was it? As Rhaenyra enters the king's booth at the tourney, notice Master of Coin Lyman Beesbury has a massive coin pouch in his crotch, obviously to place bets, but you know, that's a bit of a thirsty way of showing what's important to you, Lyman. But interesting that Rhaenyra is late, and notice Corlys signals with his hand right as she sneaks behind Rhaenys, as if these two might have some kind of connection. Now in the opening joust, Sir Criston Cole clashes with the Tarly Knight. All the major houses are represented here. You see a Baratheon stag, the Manderley eagle, the Stark direwolf, the Bolton flayed man, the Tully fish, a squire dressed with Lannister lions. On either side of the royal booth, notice are Valyrian seahorses, meaning Corlys's entourage has to sit outside the royal box. Poor guy, always getting bad seats. Daemon selects his opponent, Sir Gwaine Hightower of Old Town, making a dig at Otto of House Hightower. This is his son. Worried for her brother, Alicent bites her thumb, and later we see her picking at it till it bleeds. An interesting motif with some of these characters, always having some bloody fingers. Corlys and Rhaenys comment,
I wonder if this is how we should celebrate the birth of our future king. With wanton violence.
It's been 70 years since King Maegor's end. These nights are as green as summer grass. None have known real war.
These violent delights intercut with the true battlefield of this episode, Emma's childbed. Melos tells Viserys that he must either sacrifice Emma to try to save the child or lose them both.
A technique is taught at the Citadel which involves cutting directly into the womb to free the infant.
To free the child? It's like saying the wretched womb is trapping the child. Medical malpractice! While Emma's screams initially bleed over into the shouts of the tourney, when we cut back to her later, her screams are muted, while all we hear are the sounds of the fighting. It's like her whole identity is being muted and cruelly snuffed out. This brutal realism contrasts with Sapochnik's stylized shots of the joust, using the dividing pole as a camera track line to follow Daemon along as his back grinds along against it. I also appreciate the contrast between these two warriors. There's a lot of close-ups of the fine armor of Daemon and his horse, contrasting with the simpler and scuffed armor of Sir Criston. Ultimately, Daemon is brought down by his showboating. While Daemon was more focused on his ego in the crowd, Criston never took his eyes off the prince. Victorious, Criston removes his helmet.
Gods, he's Dornish.
Another change from George R. R. Martin's text. Originally, Sir Criston's a Stormlander, but this series makes him a Dornish, son of a steward of Lord Dondarrion, making the southern realm of Dorne even more important to the series. With its proximity to the Triarchy's advances in the Stepstones and Rhaenyra's knowledge of Nymeria's marriage to Mors Martell of Dorne. I assume that's gonna come up. Summoning some inner authority, Rhaenyra commands Syrax to ignite the funeral pyres.
Dracarys.
Actress Millie Alcock rolls that first R, unlike the way Daenerys would say it.
Dracarys.
Which makes sense. 200 years earlier, High Valyrian wouldn't have been as watered down. Otto gathers the small council to discuss Viserys' succession, but we now see Daemon watching from the shadows.
Daemon has ambition, yes, but not for the throne. He lacks the patience for it.
Master of Sneaks! This makes us wonder if every time Daemon was absent, he might have actually been listening from this hidden spot. Viserys snaps.
My wife and son are dead! I will not sit here and suffer crows that come to feast on their corpses!
Yeah, nice word choice there, working in an allusion to A Feast for Crows. Otto seals a message to send to Old Town, presumably to set some plans to wed his daughter Alicent to the king. He creepily instructs her to comfort the king in his chambers.
You might wear one of your mother's dresses.
Ugh, yikes, the men of this world. Viserys toys with this carved model. This depicts Valyria, his ancestral home, meaning he must have recreated it from his dreams. With its multiple tiers and layers, it's all part of the same base. Makes me wonder if these kinds of models could end up being part of that Game of Thrones opening title game board. Was that all carved by poor Viserys in his sad, lonely train set? Now, to me, the most interesting moment of the episode, Daemon's speech in the brothel is intercut with Otto reporting it back to the small council.
The gods give just as the gods take away.
He toasted Prince Balon,
To the king's son.
styling him the heir for a day.
Now, the editing made it seem like we were going to cut back to Daemon for that last part, but we hear Otto say it. Why didn't they cut to Daemon for that? Well, notice how Daemon doesn't deny saying it in the next scene, but he doesn't explicitly admit to it either.
The heir for a day. Did you say it?
We must all mourn in our own way, Your Grace.
George R. R. Martin wrote Fire and Blood as an in-universe subjective historical text compiled by an archmaester from accounts from Septon Eustace, who is biased because he doesn't approve of Rhaenyra, and accounts from a fool named Mushroom, who gives his own biased, salacious anecdotes. Like all of history, it's just based on what people say. We don't really know what the objective truth was. And I bring up this detail with Otto and Daemon because we don't know for sure if Daemon actually said those precise words of heir for a day in the brothel. But he may have said something similar, or he may have said something even worse. Maybe he just feels guilty for being in the brothel at all. And the Master of Sneaks knows that Otto had him followed and spied on, and nothing he says in this moment is gonna calm his brother. Also, he's kinda pissed at his brother. Now, Viserys clutches his sword, Blackfire. This is a Valyrian steel sword of Aegon. Notice how its pommel has a 7-pointed star of the 7. Daemon says,
You're weak, Viserys. And that Council of Leeches knows it.
Council of Leeches, a fitting term, as leeches were brought up as a possible remedy with the maesters earlier to treat Viserys' unhealable wound. Physical leeches on Viserys' wound from the throne, metaphorical leeches on the king's waning influence. And Viserys cuts himself again, this time his pinky finger on the armrest. Now, it's interesting to note that both of his wounds are on his left side, the side of his body that Daemon sits at the small council table.
Why do you cut me so deep?
Viserys summons Rhaenyra to the skull of Balerion the Black Dread, and he tells her,
The idea that we control the dragons is an illusion. They're a power man should never have trifled with. One that brought Valyria its doom.
I love it. Viserys is echoing one of my favorite quotes from Game of Thrones, spoken by Varys.
Power resides where men believe it resides. It's a trick, a shadow on the wall.
Viserys says,
You are the very best of your mother.
And I like how this line plays over a shot of Alicent sewing Rhaenyra's dress on and holding her like a mother would, as Alicent is slowly transitioning from Rhaenyra's best friend to her stepmother. Daemon introduces Mysaria to his dragon Caraxes. I love the breath from the dragon's mouth blows back Daemon's hair. It's just a nice practical interaction between the physical environment and the VFX, just to make this dragon more than a CGI effect. But Viserys dispels the narrative that Aegon conquered Westeros purely out of ambition. Really, Aegon was motivated by a dream.
And just as Daenerys foresaw the end of Valyria, Aegon foresaw the end of the world of men, just to begin with a terrible winter, gusting out of the distant north.
I love that when Viserys mentions the North. Of course, that's when we finally cut to the Starks, the begrudging Rickon Stark, and of course, a reminder of the Stark words, winter is coming. Now, Viserys says that Aegon saw in his dream the threat that we would later identify as the White Walkers, and concluded that a Targaryen must sit on the Iron Throne to unite all of Westeros against this northern threat.
Aegon called his dream the Song of Ice and Fire.
And yes, that is Aegon's Valyrian steel dagger, the same dagger that Arya Stark will use to slay the Night King, and the one that was given to the assassin to try to kill Bran Stark years earlier. This dagger is freaking cursed, and of course it's gonna play a very important role in episodes of this series as the Civil War unfolds. But it's just interesting to learn that Aegon was motivated by the same doom that the characters in Game of Thrones will face. However, his prophecy was flawed when you think about it. Targaryens like Dany and Jon certainly play an important role in defeating the White Walkers, but while Jon was king in the North, a Targaryen did not sit on the Iron Throne when that happened. Cersei was sitting on it. Really, it was Arya who dealt the killing blow, and the throne is just gonna end up getting destroyed while Bran Stark gets named the king in the aftermath. But to me, this flawed thinking is just another example of the curse of the Targaryens being their own dreams. I mean, lots of things brought down the Targaryens. Of course, their own dragons, each other, their diminishing shadows. But at the root of it all, I think their paranoia over their prophecies, the mistaken belief that they must be the heroes of this story, is what drove them mad. So now, in this series, we're gonna get to see what happens when madmen convinced that their fire is what will keep us safe, compete to see who can burn everything down around the fastest. This episode closes with a mirror of the succession council that opened the episode, but this time a supposed correction of that historical wrong that denied Rhaenys her claim. Now a woman is named heir, breaking historical precedent in a significant way. But since this succession was born out of the Targaryen curse, like the Lords of Harrenhal, the only thing these heirs of the dragon will inherit will be ashes. We here at New Rockstars love one-shot energy, but we also love one-shot focus chews and one-shot voice drops. It just depends on what mood you're in. I need a one-shot energy chew. Chew, 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 chew. Huh? I need a one-shot focus chew.
Eternity.
I need a one-shot voice drop.
One-shot energy chews, one-shot focus chews, and one-shot voice drops are all natural, delicious ways to make it through your day.
Stock up on one-shot today by going to oneshotenergy.com/newrockstars for 10% off your order. This is a breakdown of House of the Dragon episode 2, where marrying a 12-year-old is unspeakable, but a 15-year-old, hey, well, so long as she brings you toys. Viserys is like, that's what I love about these Westeros girls, man. I get older, they stay the same age. The look of this series just gets better and better, so let's break down the cool visual details, the deeper layers of meaning you might have missed, starting with Because I Am Crazy. What exactly is going on in this opening title sequence? It's set to Ramin Djawadi's Game of Thrones theme music. Using the same song does cynically suggest the petty games played by the Westerosians 200 years from now are the same ones about to be played by these a-holes. Compared to the map imagery of the Game of Thrones opening, this one uses stone dials as blood snakes through each dial, forming a symbolic chain of violence begetting violence, but also a family tree, a literal bloodline. Each dial represents a specific member of the Targaryen family tree. The fact that it's a dial that turns suggests that with each link of this chain could directionally change the vector of the bloodline based on what their moral alignment is. Notice the recurring crown on many of these dials. This is the one worn by Viserys, and before him, Jaehaerys. This is the crown of Aegon the Conqueror. This crown represents whoever the king is on that generational tier. And you'll notice that crown is usually paired with another dial representing a marriage union. The blood drowning each dial represents these rulers' deaths, but that death begetting a new generation of bloody rulers. The first dial, of course, is Aegon's dial, depicting dragonstones swarmed by dragons. These dragons are not a loving family, but rather in combat with each other, according to the audio description. Thus, we are going to begin every episode of the show with dragon versus dragon. The gates of Dragonstone pop upward, and the tableau sinks, allowing blood to pour in and blood to flood outward to drown the whole realm. This blood river forks down a wall with engravings showing dragons torching infantry, cavalry, and archers. This is likely Aegon's conquest, and it flows into two dials, representing Aegon's two sisters, Rhaenys and Visenya. Then onto another dial that floods. This is Rhaenys' son, Aenys. Now notice we do not see a dial for Maegor the Cruel, as that would be Visenya's son and would be on the other side of that left dial that we saw before. Then the bloodline zips to two paired dials for Jaehaerys and Alysanne. The blood explodes then into branches, as the Targaryen family tree did at this point. We glide upward to two dials that are already drowned in blood for Jaehaerys' late son Balon and his wife Alyssa, who were Viserys' parents. The blood river now pours off a ledge, while in the background it snakes toward a blue-colored wall with a dial showing the Valyrian seahorse for Corlys Velaryon. So the blood that the dial touches here is Rhaenys, Aemon's daughter, the queen who never was, who gets married to Corlys. Meanwhile, another branch of the river flows into a crown dial that does not flood. That represents the current king, Viserys, unflooded because he's still alive. For now. Beside him is the sigil for House Aaron, flooded for Aemma Aaron, his late wife who died in episode 1. But notice though that Viserys' bloodline branches to the left toward that green wall where the Greens, aka the Hightowers, are, foretelling Viserys moving on to Alicent in this episode. But then we cut to a shot where the bloodline flows into a dial with the House Hightower lighthouse representing Alicent, soon to be queen, and you'll notice to the level above her is a dial representing her father Otto. Now next we see three interlocking circles of the Valyrian steel necklace that Daemon gave Rhaenyra last episode. This one obviously representing Rhaenyra, this dial rising high above the blood to stay untouched by it. Then we quickly pass under a gate showing a dragon fanning its wings over the houses of Westeros. I believe those sigils are Baratheon, Hightower, Blackwood, Dustin, Starpike, Lannister, Velaryon, Stark, and then maybe Greyjoy. Some of these are important, some of them are lower houses, whatever, they all look cool. Lastly, we see that all of these dials rest upon the layers of Viserys' stone model of Valyria, proving our theory correct last episode that that model might be part of the new opening title sequence. Running down the middle of that model, you can see pairings representing the marriages through the ages through which the royal lineage ran, but then closer to the bottom of it, a few isolated ones where the bloodline ends, because we are not yet sure which of these characters will bear the heirs to the crown. But we are sure if you look at a family tree, just don't, you'll spoil yourself. And yes, I will be monitoring this sequence closely for updates to it as characters die or produce new heirs, because I'm crazy. And we end the main title showing the golden Targaryen sigil, all of these blood rivers feeding the fire beneath. Fire and blood, the Targaryen house words and the title of the novel that this is based on. The opening shot shows two hands impaled on wood as crabs pick at them. This parallels the gnawing of flesh from King Viserys' hand by maggots later. From a nameless casualty to the king himself, these are all corpses on borrowed time. Crabs pick at a barnacled skull like the barnacled bust in Corlys's chamber later at the end of the episode. This dramatic crucifixion imagery we are seeing now is really through Corlys's existential fear. This is his song of ice and fire, or really we should say, I guess, his song of sea and crabs. Crabs pick at a gash on a man's foot, his bone is exposed, but he stirs, he's still alive. He's being eaten alive by crabs as a victim of Kragus the Crab Feeder, leader of the Triarchy ravaging the Stepstones currently. The wide shot shows that these stakes are set up in the path of the tidal river, where crabs would come in, like the opening titles, a river of blood bringing death. But we smash cut to another red river, an overhead shot of an empty cup as Rhaenyra pours in wine, the red liquid pouring into a golden pit, like the blood pouring into the Targaryen sigil in the opening credits. The small council's discussing the death of Sir Ryam Redwine, that bearded Lord Commander of the Kingsguard who appeared in the background last episode. Corlys comes in late wanting to hit back at Kragus and his Triarchy, who are funded by the Free Cities, many of which we saw in Game of Thrones, including Braavos, Lorath, Lys, Myr, Norvos, Pentos, Cohort, Tyrosh, and Volantis. Notice how Master of Coin Lyman Beesbury says,
In all of its history, my lord, the Seven Kingdoms have never entered open war with the Free Cities.
What reason does the crab feeder have to fear us?
Yeah, Corlys is focusing his anger on Moneybags Beesbury, a man who likely takes money from the Iron Bank located where? The Free City of Braavos. Major conflict of interest on this small council. And notice throughout this meeting, Corlys's punch card ball stays on the centerpiece. It's never moved to his plate, reflecting how he was never really part of this meeting. And at the end of this episode, we'll leave this council. When Rhaenyra gets booted from the meeting for pitching the one good idea, the doors are shut behind her, closing her out, an homage to the final shot of The Godfather, where Michael shuts out Kay. Sir Harold goes through the Kingsguard candidates, each represented by a figurine, some ornamented ceremony to mark the seriousness of the Kingsguard in this era, consistent with the way this show uses dials and balls and other tokens to represent people. Everyone is a piece on a game board. There's Sir Desmond Caron, Sir Raymond Mallister, House Corbray, House Crakehall, and House Tarley. Otto reminds us the Mallisters of Seaguard protect against the Reavers from the Iron Islands, referring to the Greyjoys. Sir Criston has no heraldry because while he comes from House Cole of the Stormlands, he's actually a Dornishman. Notice how his figurine is a simple pillar, unadorned. Otto lurks in from behind while Rhaenys watches from the balcony, more interested in how the named heir makes her first official decision. In all the shots of Rhaenyra with Otto, Rhaenys can be seen snooping in the background because this queen who never was is deducing that if Rhaenyra was booted from the small council meeting, she and her husband Corlys might be able to play to the king's succession anxieties. Get our 12-year-old into hair and makeup stat! Rhaenyra inquires,
You saw combat in the Stormlands.
Dornish marches, Princess. I fought for a year as a foot soldier against the Dornish incursions. Sir Arlen Dondarrion knighted me after we raised two of the watchtowers along the Boneway.
The Dornish marches are areas between the Stormlands and Dorne. The Boneway is a treacherous pass through the Red Mountains. Aegon the Conqueror's attempt to conquer Dorne actually failed. This campaign killed his sister wife Rhaenys and her dragon Meraxes. And now Rhaenyra, offering Syrax to the Stepstones and wanting a Kingsguard who's actually seen combat, Rhaenyra is a natural wartime ruler. Viserys describes Valyria,
The Dragon Lords, the highest of the nobility, lived here, at the volcanic face, closest to the source of their magic and power. And this was the Onogrion, where the blood mages worked their craft.
The Doom of Valyria was believed to be an eruption of the 14 Flames, a chain of volcanoes interconnected by mines that all erupted simultaneously and sunk the whole peninsula. Many believe this might have been triggered by magic, either by accident or by design. Viserys says,
The glory of old Valyria will never be seen again.
So Viserys bleakly believes that humanity's best days are behind them while breaking a dragon figurine, reflecting his house's broken future. He dropped it though because of his wounded finger, which is also visible bandaged during his speech to Rhaenyra at the end of last episode, a literal form of his family's unhealable wound, the lie of their dragon power and their mad dreams. But the low sun silhouettes Viserys and Alicent here, it actually hangs low throughout the episode, foreshadowing Viserys' sunsetting reign. In nearly every shot of Viserys, even in the close-ups, the hilt of his Valyrian steel dagger pokes up into frame. Aegon's Song of Ice and Fire, always on his mind. Alicent and Rhaenyra pray in the sept. Above the altar is a statue of one of the seven. The audio description calls it a woman, suggesting this is the mother, which makes sense because they are both praying to their dead moms. At times, we cut to a high angle of these two with the mother statue not visible in these frames, meaning we are seeing these two daughters from the point of view of the mother above. Alicent places her hand on Rhaenyra's arm, and you can see Alicent's thumb is still raw from her picking at it. These past 6 months of lying to her friend about moving in on her dad have filled her with anxiety. Even this supposedly sweet moment between the two friends is actually manipulation that was at Viserys' request.
When I wish to talk with him, I know that I must make the effort.
Corlys asks Viserys again to intervene at the Stepstones, dropping this line:
To elude a storm, you can either sail into it or around it, but you must never await its coming.
It's a really great analogy for a seafarer who's adrift on a vessel, but not for a land-bound castle dweller like Viserys, a guy who gave up dragon riding years ago and now just sits in place, in fear of a blizzard that is unavoidable, according to his great-great-grandfather's dream. While Viserys and Rhaenyra dine, his model of Valyria frames them in the foreground. Viserys is trying to prop up his dynasty upon the ruins of Valyria. Also, the secret moments that he's been sharing with Alicent is what is bringing this father and daughter together. It's almost like Alicent is in the room with them, chaperoning them. Now, Viserys' small cut last episode has completely festered into this infection. Do they not have bandages? Seriously? A freaking paper cut? But no, this is further proof that the cuts from the Iron Throne are uniquely unhealable and cursed in a way. There actually is a long-running theory that the Archmaesters, who hail from Old Town along with the Hightowers, Old Town being the former seat of power in Westeros before the Targaryens arrived, these Maesters could be conspiring in an Illuminati-type plot to weaken the power of the dragons and the influence of magic in the world, with science-backed duplicitous advice and medical malpractice. Think about it. There is a maester in every castle, and they all talk to each other. Could that be connected to the message that Otto sent back to Old Town? Now, we here at New Rockstars have to admit that what we call conspiracy is often more likely incompetence. But I don't know. The king's slow rot could be one of these deaths by design that Melos warned of last episode. Otto's necklace is a chain. Its design reminiscent of the chains worn by the Citadel Maesters. Maybe he is another link in the chain, and that all of these Old Town oldies are connected. But I do like how we see the difference in his tactics compared to his rival Corlys. They both have the same strategy ultimately. They're both trying to push their two young daughters on the Widower King to raise their family station. But while Corlys aggressively pushes his agenda and doesn't make any secrets about it, Otto is sneaky. He just kind of slips his daughter into the room and uses his own dead wife to appeal to Viserys' grief.
And to be compelled to replace her for duty's sake. You are the king, but I do not envy you.
In rhetorical criticism, this tactic is called enthymeme. It's an art of persuasion in which you never explicitly state what you want the person to do. You just use a highly charged emotional argument so that they draw the conclusion in their own heads, and they think it was their own idea. So the too young Lyanna chats with Viserys about the lost dragon Vhagar. That was a massive, still alive dragon ridden by Aegon's sister wife Visenya.
But Vhagar still lives. Somewhere. The workers at Spice Town report hearing her song at times. They say it is a sad thing.
I imagine even dragons get lonely.
Now, of course, Viserys is actually talking about his own loneliness, and these talking points were truly fed to Lyanna by her father, Corlys, who falsely assumes that Viserys is lonely because he no longer rides the dragon Balerion. So maybe by hinting Driftmark folk know where Vhagar is, that could be a benefit that House Valerion could give the crown. But not so fast, because what the Balerions don't really realize is that Viserys thinks dragons shouldn't exist at all. They're all too large for the world. Behind Rhaenyra and Rhaenys is more smutty artwork, what looks like a hookup between humans and a dragon. It was actually believed that among the dark magic practiced by the blood mages of old Valyria was crossbreeding humans with dragons. So all that messed up stuff that led to the doom of Valyria is now being celebrated by their doomed descendants in the Red Keep. Alicent's gift of the fixed dragon figurine is perfect for Viserys, a symbol of her ability to mend the fractures of his family, but also it represents dragons as he wishes they would be, lifeless, cast in stone, and small enough to fit in his hands. As he holds the figurine, notice how it covers the hilt of Aegon's dagger. But when duty comes to knocking, Viserys stiffens and the dagger sticks out now, and he deepens his voice.
Come.
I mean, come on. This castle has literal bestiality porn on every surface. Don't tell me that there's not sexual undertones to Otto walking in on these two. The Dragon Keeper reports in Valyrian,
Atroxios sintroro macitas exis nuis.
Yes, there's a Westerosi custom of naming the hours of the night after animals. The hour of the bat is right after sunset. So after we saw the Master of Sneaks sneaking around last episode, Daemon proves once again that he knows Maegor's secret passageways in King's Landing that no one else does. Rhaenyra asks,
Skoriodro
Dromon Daemon Leitas.
Dromon hidrotso iles daridoros.
So Dreamfire was a dragon ridden by Rhaena, older sister to Jaehaerys. Rhaena married their brother Aegon, and they were attacked by Maegor when he made a bid for the throne. When Aegon died, Maegor took Rhaena as one of his black brides. So there is a history in Dreamfire being used as a kind of pawn in these games by these rogue princes grasping for the throne. As we swoop into the foggy Dragonstone, we pass the Crown flagship with a mounted dragon head on the bow, as well as grasping dragon claws. Maybe these help prevent the ship from crashing against the rocks. This meetup on the bridge between Otto's detachment and Daemon's gold cloaks is framed from overhead, almost like two bloodlines meeting midstream. Like in the opening credits, only one bloodline can ultimately flow forth, the other is damned. Like, you saw what I did there, like, you know, damned up, but also like in damnation. Notice how Daemon's first gesture here is to toss the egg casually from one hand to the other. If he truly cared about this egg as a nest mate for his baby, he would not be so loose with it, proving that this is all really a stunt. He asks,
Where is the king? I don't see him.
His Grace would never lower himself to entertain such a mummer's farce.
Ah, the reaction shots. Sir Harold was in frame when Otto stopped Viserys from going himself. Now he notes that Otto wanted the win for himself. Or maybe Otto really wanted the king to be left alone with his daughter for a night. But then the dragon Caraxes enters. So this series distinguishes its dragons much better than Game of Thrones did, not only by appearance and color, but in the way they sound. Our colleague Joanna Robinson on the Ringiverse podcast quoted Paula Fairfield, who created the dragon sound design for both Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. Fairfield said Caraxes' whistles and clicks were based on a specific mix that she made for young Drogon in that episode of Astapor in Game of Thrones. Fairfield also said that Miguel Sapochnik said Caraxes should sound like a dragon with a deviated septum. She actually expanded with her own hilarious backstory for the dragon. And notice as Caraxes roars, you can actually see down his gullet and how his windpipe quivers in this awkward way to produce this sound, as a deviated septum would. But the fact that sound designer considered this a pathetic love song for Syrax tells us that Daemon's true affections may reside with his niece. Notice how Caraxes still wears his Targaryen Mark's saddle. These dragons are always wearing their saddles even when they're not being ridden in that moment, as an attempt to tame them, but also to let all others know who these WMDs answer to, or at least they want them to think they answer to them. Then we hear a second roar. The fog parts like ocean waves, like the cresting of a great white shark or Godzilla. As Syrax passes the low sun, the sun's dim light peeks through its translucent wings, a visual effect interacting with the physical environment to make it more lifelike. I love it. Rhaenyra confronts her uncle.
Siculant.
Rasilari Tubi.
Earlier, Otto called this a mummer's farce, and Rhaenyra sees right through these theatrics. Mysaria is not pregnant, therefore there's no crib for the dragon egg. This is actually a change from the book, where Mysaria is with child. So this way, Daemon is more of an agitator, and Rhaenyra is a bolder fixer. Daemon consoles Mysaria in a room that actually looks a lot like the one in Game of Thrones that contains Aegon's painted table of the map of Westeros. That table would exist at this point in history. It was created by Aegon, but it's not in this room right now. Maybe it's a different room that just looks a lot like it. Or there's a shot from a glassy surface in the foreground. Maybe that is a painted table. It's just tucked in a corner. Before announcing his marriage intentions to the small council, notice Viserys is gazing out the window at the dragon pit, foretelling how this decision will lead to the dance of the dragons that will turn dragon against dragon in years to come. Viserys first checks in with his daughter. Good gods, once again, the reaction shots are perfect.
I intend to marry. The Lady Alicent Hightower.
Yes, just by how long her father's looking at her, you can see the smile just slightly fade from Rhaenyra's face as she suspects something. But then Viserys looks at Alicent, and Alicent looks at Rhaenyra, and from that, Rhaenyra already knows before he says anything that these two formed a relationship without her knowing. And as the tears well up in her eyes, Rhaenyra connects the dots. Alicent's constellations of the Sept were all manipulations. She has no friend. Her father didn't really know her at all. And even the hall she storms out into is lying to her because they forgot to digitally remove some of the blue screen there. Then on a Driftmark. On Corlys's desk are sea maps with compasses. There's a dragon skull, various seashells. Then this barnacled bust that I mentioned before, a visual reminder for Corlys of the fate of his men in the Stepstones, which this episode circles back to as Kragus nails a man to the stake to feed to the crabs. Corlys says,
We are the realm's second sons, Daemon. Our worth is not given. It must be made.
Now, Corlys does not have an older brother, but he's referring to House Velaryon being the metaphorical younger brother to House Targaryen. The Velaryons passed over because they are not Dragon Lords. Now, this episode's title is The Rogue Prince, from George R. R. Martin's 2014 novelette about Prince Daemon and his relationship with Viserys. This episode's new bloodline-themed opening suggests that this dynasty was formed by marriages, but really, if anything, stable marriages have been the exception to the rule. Maegor was a rogue prince who stole the Iron Throne from its rightful lineage. The rightful Rhaenys was passed over for another rogue prince, Viserys. So Daemon really knows that his is a family of rogue princes, and ultimately fortune will favor the bold. This is a breakdown of House of the Dragon episode 3, which shows how you can win over any cookout by serving up pork or crab. And thanks for your patience on this one. I don't get advanced screeners for the show, and we didn't want to force anyone to work on a holiday, but here it is, my scene-by-scene analysis of all the visual details and deeper layers of meaning you might have missed in this episode. Now, last week when I went frame by frame through those opening credits, I promised that I would be laser focused on the opening titles in case anything got updated, and yep, there was one sneaky change. Last week, the bloodline on the Green House Hightower side of everything flowed from Otto, his dial marked with the Hand of the King icon, to Alicent, marked with the Old Town Beacon icon, and then stopped there. But now the bloodline flows from Alicent and meets Viserys' bloodline, marking the birth of a new possible heir, young Aegon. As the camera pans down, you can see another dial waiting for Aegon, but for now it is still untouched by the blood, because he has not yet been named the heir. The opening image of the episode shows the sigil of House Velaryon, the seahorse, on a burning sail as the Triarchy ravages the Velaryon fleet. This seahorse is not the seahorse fish that we know. It's a rearing mammalian horse with the lower half of a fish and fins that resemble wings. Together with the embers, this foreshadows the true savior of this episode's closing, the fire of a flying Velaryon dragon, Sea Smoke. Even its name parallels what we are currently seeing in this opening, smoke on the sea. The Velaryon knight screams at Craigis Drahar, the crab feeder.
The sea snake will have your boxy f***ing head!
By poxy effing head, he was referring to the fact that Craigis has grayscale, which you could see on his face and his shoulders last episode, hiding under his golden mask, which is also the mask of the Sons of the Harpy. Those were the assassins who threatened Daenerys' rule over Meereen in Game of Thrones Season 5. Now, these Game of Thrones winks are new to the character in this series. Presumably, Drahar acquired his Harpy mask from piracy in the Free Cities, and if you remember in Game of Thrones, the men in the ruins of Valyria had grayscale, which does make Craigis in a way doubly representative of the rot that infests the Targaryens' ancestral home and a future threat of the ambitions of their descendant Daenerys. This poor Valyrian knight hails the arrival of Prince Daemon and his dragon Caraxes.
Save me!
Oof, they even VFX the knight spewing up blood, and based on the length of its tail as it swipes out the bonfire to the right, they probably also swept away that guy's corpse. Say Daemon's bravery has nothing to do with the good of the realm, it's all about his pride. The crab feeder and his men hide in their caves, and this is exactly how the Dornish managed to stave off the Targaryen dragons during the failed conquest of Dorne. Also, the fact that they took out Aegon's sister wife Rhaenys and her dragon Meraxes with a scorpion weapon definitely helped as well. Now, as we fade in on the king's feast, the first words we hear are those of young Aegon. And what's for dinner? Pork! Foreshadowing a game-changing game that will be brought in during the hunt. Now notice how the nobles say,
He has your hair, your grace.
He does have my hair.
He has your eyes, your grace.
Yes, he does. And you have my nose, don't you?
And baby Aegon pulls away from Viserys' hand because notice how throughout this scene and throughout this episode, Viserys has now lost 2 of his fingers on his left hand. It's like with every episode, a new piece of this guy is dropping off. And as always, the Valyrian steel dagger of Aegon the Conqueror, which yes, again, plays a huge role throughout Game of Thrones, continues to jut into frame, which is especially ironic now since his withering left hand would be the one to draw that dagger. Pretty soon, all it's gonna be able to grab it is a stump. It's just as every year of his rule renders him less and less worthy to carry Aegon's legacy represented by that dagger. Also, yes, I have to point this out. The frame that we cut to Aegon, that kid is totally looking at the camera. These child actors, they always see us. Otto Hightower speaks with his older brother, Hobart, Lord of Old Town. We actually saw him swearing fealty to Rhaenyra in episode 1, which makes his assumption that Aegon would be named new heir pretty brazen.
He's the king's firstborn son. I don't know that his grace sees it so clearly. Then it lies with you to make him see it.
So we see how Otto pressuring his daughter Alicent to influence the king is really a trait passed down to him from his Hightower elder. Tyland Lannister is the new master of ships, replacing Corlys, who resigned last episode, noticed as Lannister Lion. Tyland and his twin brother Jason Lannister are both played by actor Jefferson Hall, who played Sir Hugh of the Vale in season 1 of Game of Thrones. I love how he plays Tyland as a worrywart and Jason as a proud braggart. Shots later in this episode actually Winklevoss him in twice, side by side. But there's a fun edit out of this scene.
Can someone tell me where in the seven hells Rhaenyra might be?
Under the dragon's eye.
Yeah, the jump cut to the Bard's song answers the king's question with an answer he might not like. His daughter Rhaenyra is under the dragon's eye, as if she might be the destined descendant in Aegon's Song of Ice and Fire dream. Additionally, Rhaenyra is in the Godswood beneath the red leaves of the weirwood tree, anointing her destiny from the old gods as well, the divine forces in Westeros that predate the Targaryens, which plays a key symbolic role later. Now, this Bard's song is about Nymeria and her 10,000 ships, the historical warrior queen who was referenced in this same location, episode 1. You can actually see the name Nymeria when the page turns at the top of that paragraph. So either Rhaenyra had this book mended to replace the page that she tore out, or she could be reading a new book about this person, who, if you think about it, would likely be the only woman in her life that she now feels companionship with. And by the way, HBO is developing a Nymeria 10,000 Ships spinoff series, so you know, the show's just trying to incept Nymeria in our brains. Oh, you want a 10,000 Ships show now? Well, we got one for you. Now, this singer is named Samwell, like Samwell Tarly, who in Game of Thrones coins the title of Song of Ice and Fire for his history of these recent conflicts, which is ironic that he would pick the same phrase Aegon the Conqueror used to describe the dream of White Walkers. But the fact that we focus on this bard so much in the scene, like him stretching his sore hand, makes me wonder if this could actually be the show's version of the character Mushroom, the mummer in Fire and Blood, who provided the salacious details of the subjective historical account that George R. R. Martin intended Fire and Blood to be. Naming him Samwell could be a nod to that meta aspect of an in-universe character later playing a role in documenting the history of it. Now, the castle walls' torches are held by dragon mouths so that the torches, when lit, would look like a dragon breathing fire. I love that touch. A more tasteful decor than the literal bestiality porn on every other surface of this castle. Whereas before these two young women laid together beneath this tree, even the actresses admitted that they were doing so with an intentional flirty undertone. Now Rhaenyra will not even look at the queen, yet the blocking suggests she's using the eyes of the face in the weirwood tree trunk as the eyes in the back of her head. In a way, Alicent is under the dragon's eye. Viserys and Alicent encourage Rhaenyra to bear children.
It's not so bad. The days are long, but Aegon came quickly and without fuss.
Yeah, those nurses got some tea. Clearly, Aegon's birth was rough for this teenage bride, and like many queens in the Middle Ages, especially ones now focused on popping out the next kid, she doesn't really get to spend much time mothering her toddler. Young Aegon looks at camera again and pushes that dragon figurine on the floor.
All screw like children when they're being slaughtered.
Your Grace, he also has your love of dropping dragon toys. Yes, in this episode, Rhaenyra goes from hating the sound of a screaming boar, the editing of her line there, syncing with Aegon's shout, to, at the end of this episode, stabbing a screaming boar. I wonder who Rhaenyra was visualizing stabbing there. As they arrive at the hunting camp, we see the Red Keep in the background of the shot. Compared to the Game of Thrones season 1 scenes that take place in the Kingswood, I just love the visual context we get here to anchor us in the setting. Ain't it nice when your TV shows got bigger budget? Master of Laws Lionel Strong applauds their arrival, flanked by his two sons, Larys Strong with a club foot, and his brother Sir Harwin Breakbone Strong, who's going to be an important character throughout this series. Hobart Hightower declares,
Hail, hail, Aegon the Conqueror bade second of his name.
Second of his name is the title of this episode, and for Hobart to shout it here in front of everyone is a huge breach of protocol, as Aegon would not be called Aegon II, aka second of his name, until the king officially names him an heir, which he has not done yet. Despite the patriarchal customs of this society, Rhaenyra remains the proclaimed heir, whom, again, Hobart swore fealty to. So that conflict of whether Aegon should be the second of his name is at the heart of this episode. And while it is his birthday that they're celebrating, really this episode is the name day for other Targaryens, each of whom entered this world in a new way by the episode's end, baptized in fire and blood. As Rhaenyra walks into the red tent, we see her new hair braid at the back of her head, which matches the interlocking circles of the Valyrian steel necklace that Daemon gave her. This one always got eyes in the back of her head. Rhaenyra walks in on Keira Lannister dropping some exposition.
Lady Joanna was reported to have been abducted when one of Lord Swan's ships sailed through the Stepstones.
What will happen to Lady Joanna?
She's to be sold to a pillow house in the Free Cities, if you believe the rumors.
Joanna Swan was kidnapped and sold into sexual slavery in Lys, but in the text becomes a beloved courtesan named the Black Swan and essentially rules the city of Lys. So don't worry, Joanna's gonna be fine. Lady Jocelyn Redwine gets shut down by Rhaenyra.
And how have you served the one with late Lady Redwine? Waiting cake.
Now actually, before Olenna Tyrell, our heroine from Game of Thrones, married into the Tyrell family, she actually came from House Redwine, so this dog-loving woman is her distant ancestor. Jason Lannister puts the moves of Rhaenyra by bragging about Casterly Rock.
The rock is thrice the height of the High Tower in Old Town, taller still than the wall in the north.
It's fitting that Jason would brag about how tall the castle is, when famously Casterly Rock's best features are really the tunnels and mines within the rock that not many people know about. As tall as the castle is, Rhaenyra could always fly higher than it on Syrax, which Jason even knows that she did because Rhaenyra visited Casterly Rock with her mom as a girl. I just bring this up to compare Jason to another boastful character like Daemon, a guy whose greatest strength so far in the series has been his knowledge of the secret tunnels and passageways hidden within the castle, beneath the surface. And I love how when Jason first approach Rhaenyra is framed in the raging bonfire behind her. Fire has always been a symbol of strength for the Targaryen family, and it's almost like Rhaenyra is able to brush off Jason because she is fueled by this fire that she doesn't yet let explode out of her. Otto breaks up Viserys and Rhaenyra's fight with...
The Royal Huntsman has sent a report, Your Grace. There's been a sighting of a white hart. The stag is the king of the King's Wood, Your Grace, a regal portent for Prince Aegon's name day.
Yes, the White Stag is a creature of legend in the King's Wood. It was actually the same stag that Robert Baratheon was pursuing on his fateful hunt in A Game of Thrones. Sir Howland Sharp later tells the king,
Before the dragons ruled over Westeros, the White Hart was the symbol of royalty in these lands.
I've never been one for signs and portents, Your Grace, but if the gods did wish to show their favor...
So for Viserys, this stag represents one symbol of fate grounded in nature, something real, as opposed to his unreliable dragon dreams. It's a sign of power that preceded Aegon's conquest that still eludes this Targaryen king. During their time together, Sir Criston tells Rhaenyra about his name being added to the White Book. You remember that's the book containing the Hall of Famer Kingsguard knights that we saw in the Game of Thrones series. Jason Lannister gives Viserys a golden spear, a Lannister weapon to kill a stag, the symbol of House Baratheon. Obviously some symbolic parallels there with the future Lannister treachery against King Robert on his hunt. Otto suggests Rhaenyra marry young Aegon, while Lionel Strong smartly suggests Laenor Velaryon. Lionel's pick would heal the division with the Velaryons, the wealthiest house, while Otto's pick would prevent a future succession crisis and civil war. Perhaps Lionel just sees that crisis as inevitable and wants Velaryon closer to the crown, rather than having them on the outside looking in. A boar attacks Sir Criston and Rhaenyra, which we know rulers should be worried about. And of course it was a boar that fatally wounded Robert Baratheon. But Rhaenyra stabs this boar to death. She's unafraid of its childlike squeals, and she coats herself in blood. The fire that was gradually building Rhaenyra throughout this episode finally explodes and takes the form of blood. And so through fire and blood, her true self emerges. And we cut directly from this to the shot of Viserys by the campfire with the flames crackling in the foreground, as if he's trying to draw strength from these flames. But without getting a single drop of blood on him this episode, he feels powerless.
Many in my line have been dragon riders. Very few among us have been dreamers. What is the power of a dragon? It's the power of prophecy.
So we see how Viserys sees the distinction between dragon riders and dreamers. Dragon riders, like Daemon and Rhaenyra, act brashly and overwhelm their enemies with shock and awe, whereas dreamers are more cautious. They use their belief in prophecy to try to stay a step ahead. For Viserys, it wasn't Aegon's conquest that inspired him, it was Aegon's dream. And before that, Daenerys' dream that saved his family from the doom of Valyria. Viserys saw more power in those dreams and fashioned himself a dreamer. But now he's beginning to doubt himself, because as he shares with Alicent his dream of a son wearing Aegon's crown, the dream that he told Emma about, he now admits that he only dreamt that image one time, and he could never again will it into a recurring prophecy-style dream. And it's interesting to note that Viserys' dream showed Aegon wearing the Conqueror's crown, not the crown he's currently wearing. The crown worn in the series by Viserys and his predecessor Jaehaerys, which are seen on their dials in the opening credits. That is not Aegon's crown. Aegon's crown is a circlet of Valyrian steel with square-cut rubies in it. That crown encircles the dial that represents Aegon the Conqueror that starts off the opening credits and was last worn by Maegor the Cruel. Without spoiling anything, Aegon the Conqueror's ruby crown does come back in this narrative. But for now, Viserys thought naming Rhaenyra heir was his way of quitting that whole dream obsession. But now, with Aegon's birth, his dream is actually coming true again. And now this White Hart legend is supporting that destiny. He doesn't know which signs to heed. So it actually comes to a bit of relief to Viserys when Breakbone Strong is trapped a different normal stag.
He may not be white, Your Grace, but he's a big lad.
Viserys uses a Lannister spear to stab the stag, but he misses the mark and requires a repeated jab. It's actually pretty pathetic. A contrast to Rhaenyra and Sir Criston, who faced a beast without any help and killed it a lot faster. The way Viserys puts down this stag, it's almost like he's putting himself down. Also, I love this detail. Notice his left ring and pinky finger are lifted in his glove because those fingers have rotted off and those parts of the glove are empty. So when your fingers aren't filling the glove, it just kind of sticks outward. I love this detail because the actor Paddy Considine had to consciously act it with his fingers out to imply empty glove fingers, just to show attention to detail appreciated by only the folks who break these down on YouTube. Rhaenyra looks down over the Kingswood camp, and in this same unbroken shot of her gliding over it all, the camera pans over to reveal the legendary White Hart presenting itself to her. Yes, the white whale that eluded both her king father and will elude Robert Baratheon in the future appears to this Targaryen heir who is anointed in blood. The fact that Rhaenyra spares it though is interesting because you could totally imagine her descendant Daenerys slaying that white hart and proudly dragging it back into camp to show off her power. But this move by Rhaenyra can be seen as a gesture of restraint or compassion, but I see it as a heedlessly contrarian refusal to play the games of her father and his men. She's literally over all of them. So by letting this white hart flee, she leaves it as a secret known only to her, while to her father, it remains a maddening mystery that he'll never know whether or not it was even real. All her father has now are his bullshit dragon dreams, but Rhaenyra knows as a secret in her own heart that she had a physical sign from nature that her claim to the crown is destined. And I cannot help but see a parallel with another queen and a stag, the climax of the 2006 film, The Queen, with Helen Mirren as Queen Elizabeth II shooing away a long sought after stag during a hunt to mirror her softening compassion for Princess Diana. Rhaenyra instead returns with a victory that was all her own, and pork is on the menu! Unlike her father, Rhaenyra is covered in blood, proving to all these lords watching that her kill was not ceremonial. She earned it. I love how particularly Breakbone Strong gives her a huge grin as he skins that rabbit. Otto tells Alicent that Aegon should become heir over Rhaenyra.
The road ahead is uncertain, but the end is clear. Aegon will be king.
I love this as a meta line for this whole prequel series. Like, you can look at a family tree and know where this ends. I mean, even if you've seen Game of Thrones, you know where it ends. But it's really the uncertain road ahead, the snaking bloodlines that branch and how they flood stuff that's gonna make this interesting to watch. On to the Stepstones. There is a 52-second shot showing 3 Valyrian ships and Daemon's dragon Caraxes in a battle against the Treyarchy forces. One of those fireballs hits the center of a ship and sinks it. Another fireball appears to go through the gap in the sails of the leftmost ship. So it's really by luck that it was able to escape that. Corlys says,
"We must press the attack. Continue sending the dragons."
Yes, he said dragons. A little signal that during all this time, they definitely had more than one dragon at their disposal. They had Caraxes and Laenor's dragon, Seasmoke. So it's not like Seasmoke came out of nowhere. Corlys debates strategy with his son, Laenor. Remember, he was the younger kid of the tourney with his sister, Lyanna, in episode 1. He's also talking with Corlys's brother, Vaemond. He's the one who sent the notice to the crown. Notice how their map board uses crab claws for Kragas' forces, as well as fish jawbones and other fish figurines. But when Laenor suggests an offering of flesh to draw out Kragas from the caves, Daemon arrives in that moment and plops his dragon-designed helmet on the table. Even though he hasn't made this decision yet, he is going to end up volunteering himself as the bait, and his helmet in this moment serves as his figurine, putting himself on the game board. Daemon reads the king's letter and then pummels the messenger, Adam, and later we hear Viserys' voiceover reading it as Daemon rows alone toward the shore. So we realize that the only thing stopping him from doing this until now was just his pride. He's only moving on to this last resort tactic because his brother's about to steal the victory from him. As Viserys even said, Daemon would sooner die than let that happen, and he's about to risk doing that. And I love this shot of Daemon rowing out from behind burning ship wreckage, making it look as though he is emerging from the fire. Just another example of a Targaryen this episode being anointed from fire and blood. Now Daemon appears to surrender, and Kragas watches him with only one eye since that other eye has been rotted by the grayscale. Maybe that's why he had trouble seeing Seasmoke and all that smoke and fog, because he didn't forget, he was searching the sky for those dragons. It's just this dragon had a convenient color tone to it. Daemon cuts through the Treyarchy men with his sword, Dark Sister, but eventually his plot armor runs out and he gets tripped up by one soldier and then plugged with a bunch of arrows. When he's pinned, we actually get a few extreme close-up of Dark Sister's hilt. You can see how the crossguard forms outstretched dragon wings. I love all the little production design details of the show. As the screen fills with more and more smoke and fog, it masks the reveal of Seasmoke, Laenor's dragon, colored silver gray, and releasing a roar that's actually pretty unlike the roars of Syrax and Caraxes.
Dracarys!
Now, Laenor, remember, is the son of the Targaryen queen who never was, Rhaenys. And since she's a dragon rider, her kids are dragon riders. Now, Seasmoke as a dragon is a bit younger and is more targeted with its attacks. Notice how it breathes a perfect U shape around Daemon, but doesn't torch him in particular? Whereas Caraxes just stomped a friendly earlier. Seasmoke even grabs 4 Triarchy fighters from a melee mess, including both sides, and manages to avoid grabbing any of their own men. It's kind of like blind reaching in a bag of Starbursts and pulling out 4 pinks. What are the odds of that? And Daemon emerges from the cave with the top half of Kragus' torso, hopefully grabbing part of the skin that didn't have grayscale on it. But like his niece Rhaenyra, he is fully covered in blood of his hunted game, earning the loyalty and respect of all in sight. Both Daemon and Rhaenyra, without any help from the king, have brought home the bacon and scored victories through fire and blood. But I will leave you with my favorite detail from this entire final sequence. It takes up 12.5 minutes at the end of the episode. Throughout all of this, Matt Smith never utters a single word of dialogue. All of his emotions he conveys through his face and his physicality. In fact, the last line that he spoke in this episode was in the opening scene when he called out Kragus from the caves. It's almost like he was letting that reverberate until the man was able to accomplish his task. This is a breakdown of House of the Dragon episode 4, in which this series defies Game of Thrones tradition of normalizing incest by, wow. But did it actually happen in this story told by unreliable narrators? Yeah, kinda. But does that even matter if the maesters hook you up with that good old plan T? Let's do what we do here at New Rockstars and go deeper into the visuals than anyone else cares to, and expose the deeper layers of meaning that you might have overlooked in this episode. Starting with a very easy to miss update to the opening title sequence, the bloodline around Alicent's dial, which last week was updated to now meet Viserys' bloodline, now in episode 4 branches downward, but doesn't yet touch the dial below. The opening shot shows a Valyrian steel necklace that Daemon gave Rhaenyra, the symbol that's been on Rhaenyra's dial, and notice how she fondles it, foreshadowing the suitor that she really wants to fondle this episode. Ugh, I'm sorry. Other suitors line up to propose to Rhaenyra. We see one from House Frey, that's a sigil of the twins. There's a House Tully fish behind him, and then House Strong. Meanwhile, the old man speaking, according to the captions, is named Barrick Dondarrion, who of course is not the Lightning Lord from Game of Thrones era, but this earlier Lord Dondarrion says,
Walls, Blackhaven, are unscalable battle stone. The castle is surrounded by a deep, dry moat. It is well fortified against any future Dornish incursions.
Yes, Blackhaven is the home of House Dondarrion in the Stormlands to the west, where Dornish incursions would be a big issue. Actually, this is likely the same Lord Dondarrion to whom Sir Criston Cole's father served as steward. This was before Criston fought in some of those Dornish incursions. That rumble of thunder that we hear tells us that we are at Storm's End, the home of House Baratheon. Actually, that's Lord Bormund Baratheon, sigil of the stag, seated beside Rhaenyra. The Baratheons and Targaryens at this point in history are pretty good friends, with Lord Orys Baratheon becoming the hand to Aegon the Conqueror. The young Lord Blackwood's collar shows 2 ravens. Actually, that house's sigil is a flock of ravens surrounding a dead weirwood tree. He says his house descends from the First Men, the First Men being one of the 3 ethnic groups from whom Westeros humans descended along with the Rhoynar and the Andals. The First Men formed the pact with the Children of the Forest and adopted the Children of the Forest's old gods, thus the weirwood tree in the Blackwood sigil. Lord Blackwood claims that his family helped Aegon the Conqueror, referring to House Blackwood siding with Aegon when he torched Harrenhal and conquered the Riverlands. As we saw in the series opening scene, 'twas Dragonfire that killed this beast, so yeah, young Lord Blackwood is trying to ride some coattails. And bullying him is Lord Bracken. Notice the red stallion of House Bracken. The Blackwoods and the Brackens have long hated each other. Actually, in the text, Samwell Blackwood and Amos Bracken duel for Rhaenyra's affection, but during her visit to the Trident. Turns out this Blackwood is not Samwell Blackwood. HBO confirmed it is Willem Blackwood. And I think they changed the setting of this duel because they wanted to establish Storm's End as an important location for major events later in the series. And for all you book readers out there, it does make us wonder, will fated duels at Storm's End go down the same way in this series as they do in the book? But that's a question for like season 3. Anyway, Blackwood totally defeats Bracken here. So points on the board for the blood of the First Men. Just an interesting recurring theme on the series so far, that indigenous Westerosi virtues, weirwood trees, the White Hart, First Men bloodlines seem to bear more strength than the currently more valued virtues like dragons and Valyrian blood. There's probably some metaphor here in invaders, colonialism, and imperialism, but I'll let you draw those conclusions. A little detail I love, as Bracken spews up blood, little Blackwood takes in his first kill and he looks like he's about to vomit. Don't worry, kid, I often feel the same way. Caraxes shoulder checks the boat. You can actually spot Daemon riding on Caraxes' back there, so he did this on purpose, and Rhaenyra smiles as if to say, challenge accepted, uncle. We see a close-up of Viserys' crown, underlying the significance of crowns in this setting, and how wearing anything resembling a crown is an affront to the monarch. Viserys dons this and carries Blackfire, the Valyrian steel sword of Aegon the Conqueror. Rhaenyra enters with this eager crowd, and notice how she tries to hide herself behind the onlookers, but Viserys does notice her arrival. We see the moment he frowns, because yeah, Rhaenyra still had another 2 months on this suitor tour that he spent all this time arranging for her. Daemon enters the room for the first time since he was banished in episode 1 with shorter hair and a crown made of wood, carrying the hammer of Kragus the Crabfeeder. Rhaenyra follows him through the crowd as he approaches the king, setting up her following this Pied Piper uncle throughout this episode. But Daemon offers the hammer to Viserys.
Add it to the chair.
The Iron Throne is of course composed of weapons wielded against the Targaryens, but in a way this is also a kind of insult to Viserys, as this hammer would be a more blunt instrument, less likely to cut the cursed king than all the swords he keeps cutting himself on. And at first, Daemon keeps them guessing in his loyalty.
Once we smash the Triarchy, they name me King of the Narrow Sea. But I know that there is only one true king, Your Grace.
But Daemon ultimately offers Viserys' crown, as if it's a meaningless honorary thing that was given to him by others, but notice that massive ruby wired to the front of the crown. Targaryens regularly adorn their pieces with rubies. Rubies on Rhaenyra's necklace, rubies on the Conqueror's crown. So Daemon clearly made this crown himself, in the fashion of the Conqueror. The crown that Viserys said was in his dream. So this is a total power move by Daemon. It's meant to insult Viserys, but Viserys lets it go and hugs his brother, and notice how the bottom 2 glove fingers, again, fold emptily. Just another example of Paddy Considine doing some limp glove work to show how his ring and pinky fingers have withered off. And the guard analysis suggests,
perhaps Prince Daemon would care for a tour of the gallery. He hasn't yet seen the new tapestries gifted to you by Norvos and Cohor.
Norvos and Cohor are the 2 inland free cities of Essos, meaning they weren't part of that maritime triarchy and likely wanted to curry favor with the crown to separate them from Mir, Lys, and Tirosh. I actually wonder if Norvos and Cohor could be the ones supplying those horny bestiality tapestries that covered the Red Keep. Rhaenyra and Daemon discuss royal marriages for men versus women and bring up Daemon's current wife, Rhea Royce, in the Vale.
No. No, che se creni un tenco, totaluti ombriago rus na jumban.
Despite Daemon's reputation as a womanizer, this series has so far only ever shown him as impotent. It was not working with Mysaria in episode 1, he lied about her being pregnant in episode 2, Rhea Royce is without child, and he struggles with Rhaenyra in this episode. So is Daemon's impotency a temporary obstacle that he's meant to overcome in the series, or a tragic curse that he's destined to doom himself on in a series of bad choices? In this scene, Daemon seems to suggest it's the latter. Rhaenyra's chat with Alicent earlier about being trapped in a castle with screaming children, having to squeeze out more children, is shown in the middle part of this episode. Meanwhile, with Rhaenyra, the girl goes wild. Starting with Daemon's note to Rhaenyra, written in High Valyrian. This is a written form of this language, developed by the linguists of this series and of Game of Thrones, David J. Peterson, the guy who also came up with the ins and outs of Dothraki. And while he based the spoken language of Valyrian partly on Latin, when it comes to the written form, he went in a different direction. Because notice how, unlike English writing, which uses a glyph for each consonant and vowel, High Valyrian is a logographic system in which a single glyph can represent an entire word. At a recent expo, Peterson actually said they developed 365 unique glyphs for this series. Now, I do not know all 365 of those glyphs, but by looking at Peterson's Instagram posts, it looks like the 3rd and 4th line of this note that Daemon wrote Rhaenyra have part of his glyph for the word brick, which is likely an instruction to push a specific brick to open the secret passageway. And yes, I have been pointing out how Daemon is the master of sneaks, who knows all the secret passageways that his ancestor, Maegor the Cruel, had constructed in the Red Keep, and then killed off all the construction workers to keep that secret. And now, according to this drawing, this passageway opens up in Rhaenyra's bedroom right beside her bed. And if your uncle telling you that is not creepy to you, I don't know what will be. So Rhaenyra passes through the basement containing the skull of Balerion, the Black Dread. A close-up of its teeth shows some mice nibbling, showing how various sets of eyes are going to be on Rhaenyra tonight that she is not aware of. Actually, later, Alicent sees a mouse on the bedpost, signaling that these passages from the royal quarters to the tunnels below are open and she's missing out on the fun. Daemon and Rhaenyra stroll through the city, intercut with these shots of a burst of flames from a metal dragon head. This is the one that's actually used in the alley that leads to the corner where the mummers are doing their play. Rhaenyra passes a blind woman who offers offers to tell her her death. To Rhaenyra, this woman would be the literal form of the crone, one of the seven. And when you pair this with all these recurring shots of dragonfire, I don't know, that might be part of Rhaenyra's future. We get this moment with Viserys and Alicent at the bath, an interesting parallel with Viserys and Emma at the bath. The bath precedes the fall, because notice here he has cuts and wounds all over his arms and shoulders and back, likely each of them different cuts from the swords of the Iron Throne. When Viserys later makes her join him in his chamber, we see his entire back, and it's now covered in festering scabs. Rhaenyra and Daemon watch this play satirizing their current royal succession drama. The Daemon actor is mostly shown in the background of the scene, reacting the way Daemon in the series is lurked in the shadows, saying very little. And you'll notice how all the actors are male, which was the tradition in real-world Elizabethan times, but a contrast with the mummers that we meet in Game of Thrones 200 years later in Essos, the city of Braavos, the troupe that includes the actress Lady Crane. Rhaenyra mirrors Arya Stark a lot in this episode, dressing as a boy and sneaking out of the Red Keep through the same tunnels that Arya did. And like Arya, when she saw that mummers play in Braavos, this highborn lady is learning the oversimplified truth of how the common folks see all this royal drama. It's not exactly what they'd expect. As she runs, Rhaenyra runs into the captain of the City Watch, Sir Harwin Strong.
Sir Harwin.
Princess,
Don't.
you take care, boy. Next time you might not be so lucky.
You remember Sir Harwin? He joined the hunt in episode 3 and gave Rhaenyra that approving grin when she returned with the slain boar. Now, in her private quarters, the bed that Alicent sleeps in is the literal same bed and headboard of the bed that Queen Emma died in. Now, it's understandable that Alicent would have the same room, but they couldn't change out the bed? Come on, why would you do that to Alicent? Now, thanks to YouTube, we won't be showing or really describing most of the sexual imagery in the brothel sequence, but director Claire Kilner did describe how she tried to shoot the sex scenes of this episode from Rhaenyra's point of view, as opposed to from the male point of view, which traditionally is how a lot of sex scenes have been shot. So you'll notice as this intercuts with Alicent, we actually spend most of the runtime on close-up reactions from Rhaenyra and Alicent, and their contrasting excited and bored expressions. The sex that both of them are experiencing is really framed through the way they're emotionally processing it. But really, including Rhaenyra and Daemon's hookup at all in this show is hugely important, because it lends a bit of objectivity to something that was, in the text, presented as unreliable gossip from the account of a mummer named Mushroom. But notice how this scene is shot with hardly any lighting and really a lack of clarity over how far exactly it goes downstairs. Like if you rewatch the scene yourself, not here, you'll notice that Daemon does lower Rhaenyra's trousers, he presses himself against her, but there's no like thrusting, and soon after that she just turns around and takes the reins in her advances, and that's when Daemon totally disengages. So it's tough to watch this scene at first glance, and well, it's actually just tough to watch it, period. Ugh. But it is difficult to watch this scene once and come out of it with a clear understanding of how far these two actually went. Therefore, in the context of this brothel, any witness to this hookup couldn't truly testify with certainty over how far it went either. So that way, this series, you could say, maintains the unreliable narrator element from the book. All we know is that this uncle and niece definitely went too far, but that only the two of them actually know how far it really went, and that afterward, each of them made separate decisions on how to recount that truth to others. I feel like I'm gonna get a lot of emails yelling at me for that one. I'm just saying, I don't think anyone who watched that scene for the first time could look at that horrible lighting and say, I know exactly what happened there. Now we see this shaggy-haired boy outside who follows Rhaenyra. He was likely also among those peepers on Daemon and Mysaria in episode 1, part of the network who reported to Otto that Daemon called Baelon heir for a day, something that we also did not see Daemon objectively saying on screen, but he took credit for anyway. Rhaenyra goes home and seduces Sir Criston, which is also an alteration from the unreliable account that's in the book, which claims that Daemon coached Rhaenyra into seducing Sir Criston. But here, it is fully Rhaenyra's own choice. And that's proven with, I think, my favorite detail of this episode. The next morning after sleeping with Sir Criston, and for the rest of the episode, notice how Rhaenyra has now switched out the Valyrian steel necklace that Daemon gave her, the one that she was touching in the opening shot. Now she shelves that necklace and has reverted to a simpler golden necklace because she no longer needs Daemon to have power in this episode. Now Otto meets with that shaggy-haired boy, whom we learn is a messenger from someone called the White Worm, and this same boy in the next scene passes money to Mysaria, and she is dressed in a slender white gown. So it is confirmed, Mysaria is the White Worm, Otto's primary contact, who has been passing Otto intel on Daemon with the help of these child spies. Like Varys and like Qyburn, she has a League of Little Birds, which makes sense because this character will go on to become a Master of Whisperers. I like this shot where Daemon's blindness to her is reflected with the blinding sunlight behind Mysaria as she hands him the hangover tea. Now, despite all this, we still do not know if Mysaria's reports are objectively true or just some salacious gossip that paints Daemon in a scandalous jealous light, and Daemon just doesn't deny any of it. Actually, one could argue that Daemon knows Mysaria is feeding this gossip to Otto and allows it to happen, knowing that Otto will spill this tea to Viserys, embarrassing the king and forcing Otto to admit that he is using spies, which makes him look pretty bad, which would ultimately force Viserys to choose between his hand and his brother, which Daemon might have plotted to remove both himself and Otto as morally corrupt equals. Really, it comes down to how smart do we think Daemon is? I don't know, he may just be a self-destructive prat, but I just love the way Matt Smith plays this with such cryptic glances, very few words, and the way this character is written to just own up to the things that would hurt his brother the most. Otto mentions the Hour of the Owl, calling back the Dragon Keeper's reference to the Hour of the Bat in episode 2. So the hours through the night go after sunset, the Hour of the Bat, then the Hour of the Eel, then the Hour of Ghosts, then the Hour of the Owl, then the Hour of the Wolf, and then the Hour of the Nightingale. So in the Godswood, the scene with Rhaenyra and Alicent, my favorite scene of the episode, because Rhaenyra responds perfectly to the accusation. She admits to drinking and to partying with Daemon, but when it comes to having sex with him, she feigns disgust.
This is a vile accusation. Is it? You Targaryens do have queer customs. And Daemon certainly knows no limit. Alicent, your Grace, sister, you must know I would never. You cannot believe such gossip.
I love the contrasting communication compared to these two in the previous episode, because in episode 3, Rhaenyra cold shouldered the queen in the same location, but now Rhaenyra comes to her, appealing to her by name, and then by her formal title, Your Grace, and then through their sisterhood companionship. And as Rhaenyra did when she was making out with her uncle, she so deftly shifts, first from the defensive, but then to the aggressor.
My father is no gossip.
Well, certainly he's been misled. He could not have witnessed such a thing.
Why not?
Because it did not happen.
He was told.
Told?
And Rhaenyra catches Alicent for basing this on an anonymous third-person account, one that Alicent was not even supposed to hear. She was eavesdropping. Dropping eaves! So Rhaenyra, knowing she has her, crosses behind her, closer to the judging stare of the eyes of the weirwood tree. She is literally on the higher ground now, like a judge in a courtroom. In this way, if you think about it, Rhaenyra also avoids having to herself look into the eyes of the weirwood tree, because she is totally lying through her teeth in the scene.
I am the princess. To question my virtue is an act of treason.
Yes, and now by turning the tables on the queen, Rhaenyra has control over the conversation, and she can feed Alicent whatever version of the events that she wants, and Alicent will be forced to at least hear her out. Meanwhile, Daemon takes a very different strategy against the accusations.
She is just a girl. Your niece.
Rhaenyra's a woman grown. Better her first experience would be with me than Summer Hall. I want Rhaenyra. I'll take her as she is and wed her in the tradition of our house.
Yeah, so Daemon totally owns it, but he also lies. Just on the other side of the truth. He lies about his impotency. He claims that he fully did the deed. And why? He does it to enrage his brother and to make a power play. Viserys shows Rhaenyra how Aegon's dagger contains glyphs hidden by pyromancers in the Valyrian steel.
From my blood come the prince that was promised, and his will be the song of ice and fire.
This inscription officially merges the two prophecies in Game of Thrones that we all pretty much assumed were referring to the same thing at this point. We learned in episode 1 that the Targaryen belief in the Song of Ice and Fire was something passed down from Targaryen ruler to Targaryen ruler, from Aegon the Conqueror, maybe even before. But the prince that was promised referred to a prophecy from believers in the Lord of Light, Azor Ahai reborn, the wielder of Lightbringer who would vanquish the darkness. Melisandre initially believed it would be Stannis Baratheon, but then when Stannis died, she then thought it was Jon Snow. Meanwhile, Daenerys learned that the High Valyrian word for prince was actually gender neutral and believed that she could be the princess that was promised. Game of Thrones final season arguably deprioritizes these prophecies. While Jon and Dany were important to the defeat of the White Walkers, Arya cast the killing blow, and neither Jon nor Dany sat on the Iron Throne during this war. So I don't know, maybe George R. R. Martin has different plans for the ending of his A Song of Ice and Fire novels that he's trying to set up in this series. But either way, the description in this dagger proves that the root of those two strands of the same prophecy were really the same. The pyromancers of Valyria and Aegon, his grandfather Aenar the Exile, who was one who fled Valyria with his family after the dreams of his daughter, Daenerys the Dreamer, and who knows how far back that dagger goes, but wherever it was, that root inspired both the Targaryen bloodline and the followers of this culty religion in Essos. So Rhaenyra ultimately concedes to wed Laenor, but only Viserys removes his hand Otto from the High Council. And since Viserys has been slowly losing his literal hand over these 4 episodes, it seems inevitable that this would happen. Rhaenyra and Daemon were successful in removing their most effective obstacle to the throne, Otto Hightower. But House Hightower's got more tricks up their sleeve, I'm sure. But if the Maesters have been part of a deliberate plot of medical malpractice, we should be concerned about this holy hand grenade of Plan BT that Mellos brings Rhaenyra to prevent a pregnancy from Daemon. But considering Daemon was impotent, Rhaenyra would not need this for Daemon, but what about for Sir Criston? Has her masquerade truly worked if the king still thinks she sullied herself enough to need this? I think what scares Rhaenyra here is that through her political victory, she has still outed herself as an impure game player, and she no longer has that shield of innocence to hide behind. This is a breakdown of House of the Dragon episode 5, where the green wedding ends with a white knight capping a series of fumbles by losing it on the sidelines. As always, this episode was filled with subtle visual details and deeper layers of meaning, so let's break down everything you might have missed. The opening credit sequence continues to evolve slightly episode by episode. This week, the bloodline that branches forth from Alicent's dial, compared to the single branch last week, now splits into 2 branches. Alicent does have multiple children, currently Aegon and Helena, and soon more kids like Aemond and then Darren. Next week, when this show jumps ahead 10 years, we will meet some of these. The episode opens at Runestone, the home of House Royce in the Vale of Arryn, where we finally meet Rhea Royce, aka Daemon's wife, whom he has called his bronze, which now we see is for her literal bronze armor. The Royce's armor is stamped with runes, aka runestone, to mark their descendancy from the first men. To get these specific runes, the costumer pulled them directly from the Codex Runicus, an animal skin manuscript from the year 1300, one of the oldest and best preserved texts of Scanian law, Scanian referring to an old dialect from present-day Swedish. Her cousin, Sir Gerald Royce, carries a unique sword. Now, depending on Gerald's relationship with the family, this may be the Valyrian steel sword of House Royce, Lamentation, which does play an important role in the hands of Sir Willem Royce in the coming Civil War. The Royce house words are, "We remember." So what Daemon does may come back to haunt him. Gerald asks,
"What's today's quarry? Rabbit?"
"Deer."
Oh, fine challenge.
So Rhea is on a stag hunt, just like Viserys and Rhaenyra were, but instead of a white hart, she finds a white fart blocking her path. Daemon's hooded appearance makes him look like the stranger who represents death, and gets a shout out at the end of this episode. Rhea says,
"Or have you at last come to consummate our marriage? The Vale sheep might be willing, even if I'm not. Our sheep are prettier, after all."
So word travels fast from Daemon's line in a small council meeting in episode 1.
In the Vale, men are said to fuck sheep instead of women. I can assure you, the sheep are prettier.
Dear me.
Daemon spooks this horse, and it's almost by chance that Rhea's fall paralyzes her. Later on, Rhaenys justifies this by saying,
"The gods are cruel."
The gods and the humans who act like they're gods. Now, there's only one quick mention of Rhea's death in the text of Fire and Blood. There came a tragic mishap of the sort that shapes the destiny of kingdoms. The bronzed brr of Runestone, Lady Rhea Royce, fell from her horse whilst hawking and cracked her skull upon a stone. Showrunner Ryan Condal interpreted that to mean Daemon must have murdered her, though we still do not see the actual death on screen, and notice that Daemon does not say a single word in this sequence, just as he didn't say anything in the final sequence of episode 3. Like then, it remains a mystery what his true motives are, and not saying anything makes him even deadlier in a weird way. But Rhea does kind of invite this killing.
"I knew you couldn't finish."
A knowing jab at Daemon's impotency. The man truly does have a problem finishing. Now, by the way, if the shooting location looks familiar, it is the same pass in Derbyshire in England where they shot the Princess Bride scene, where the princess and Wesley roll down the hill together. On Viserys' ship, we follow a close-up of the royal puke bucket, which Viserys waves off, but then retches anyway. Lionel Strong, we learn, has been promoted from Master of Laws to Hand to the King, and like all hands of the king, the hand wipes. Viserys' body has sort of become a harbinger for the health of the entire realm, like he has contained all of the rot inside of his body up until this point. Yet when he dies, you know that rot is going to spread to everyone. Otto Hightower's men depart King's Landing marked with the Hightower sigil of a watchtower. Despite the rain, Otto ditches the carriage to just set out on horseback. I assume to put on a dramatic show after getting sacked. Fine, I'll leave and I'll give myself pneumonia. You'll notice Otto's saddle shows the watchtower beacon burning green, which gets explained later this episode.
The beacon on the high tower. Do you know what color it glows when Old Town calls its banners to war? Green.
Green fire almost certainly means wildfire, which the maesters of the Citadel in Old Town likely would have helped craft for the Old Town leaders to give their calls to war a unique verdigris. Now, I may be wrong, but in the text, House Hightower's sigil description, I don't think ever mentions the flame being green. It's just kind of a watchtower with a flame. But of course, Alicent's green dress is a hugely significant gesture that goes on to define this whole faction in the coming Civil War. The Hightower is considered the Greens because of this moment. But this show goes further to retcon the color green as part of her family war cry before that. So now this is really Alicent deliberately siding with House Hightower against House Targaryen. And it could be that seeing the green flame on her father's saddle as it left King's Landing could have inspired that choice. Otto warns his daughter,
"And if Rhaenyra succeeds him, war will follow. Do you understand?"
The realm will not accept her, and to secure her claim, she'll have to put your children to the sword. She'll have no choice.
Yeah, the way Rhys Ifans growls "war" pairs with the torch fire behind them so that it looks like he is breathing fire into his daughter with this advice. This episode's title is We Like the Way, the words of House Hightower, words that do not get explicitly spoken this episode, only implicitly with fashion choices. And here in this moment, Otto instilling in his daughter that beacon-esque leadership. On Driftmark, Viserys' carriage approaches the Velaryon castle high tide, rolling down this paved causeway. This causeway, when it is high tide, is the only way you can reach that castle. And notice how the castle roofs are beaten silver in order to shine in the sun and make this castle easier to locate from Dragonback up in the air. Viserys arrives to find Laenor and Joffrey Lonmouth sparring in the yard, but no Corlys to greet him. Lyanna shows up and says Corlys is in the Hall of Nine, named for the treasures Corlys has acquired over his 9 voyages. Inside, these helmeted skulls are on display, and it looks like there are exactly 9 of them, maybe trophy skulls of a pirate that Corlys killed on each of those voyages. I would say they could be his ancestors, but no, the Velaryons bury their dead rulers at sea. Now the music underneath all of this at least evokes It's Always Summer Under the Sea, aka Shireen's song, the creepy song that Stannis Baratheon's daughter heard from the Patchface boy on Dragonstone back in Book 2, A Clash of Kings. Many believe this song's cryptic lyrics predicted events to come in A Song of Ice and Fire, and the traumatized Patchface boy sang these words to creepily talk about when he nearly drowned. This song's context and its connection with prophecy makes it perfect music for Viserys here, a wannabe prophet feeling like he is being dragged into the depths of the sea, much like his doomed kingdom of Valyria was. Back in the Godswood of the Red Keep, Larys Strong greets Alicent.
Malvales, rare bloom, indigenous to Bravos. Yet, by all rights, it shouldn't be thriving here. Nature, such mystery.
A compliment to Alicent as an outsider thriving in the Red Keep. Hobart Hightower actually later echoes this metaphor.
I worried that, given leave of your father's shadow, you might wither in King's Landing's sun. But you stood tall.
But Hot Goss Larys spills some tea.
The Grand Maester delivered a tea to the princess's chambers.
A tea?
Yes.
And we know Larys loves to gossip because in episode 3, he voluntarily joined the women in the tent to be part of that tea party. Now, along with that row of skulls in Corlys' throne room, we see that he has his own dollhouse model, the way Viserys does of Valyria. His collections also include the Mask of Kragus the Crabfeeder, which one of the directors confirmed to me was inspired by the mask of the Sons of the Harpy. Rhaenys arrives and grabs Viserys' rotting hand, causing him to wince. Eve Best does a great job showing some mental math of how long Laenor and Rhaenyra would have to wed in bed before a succession crisis created by Viserys' death would kick in. Viserys allows any kids born of Rhaenyra and Laenor to bear the name of Velaryon upon birth at first, but he says the firstborn must take the name Targaryen when they ascend to the Iron Throne, which Corlys and Rhaenys agree to, probably because they know Viserys will be dead at that point and they'll have more freedom to sway what name the new monarch takes. Rhaenyra and Laenor speak in code about their appetites, and Rhaenyra proposes that they marry, but with a discreetly open relationship. After Rhaenys returns from Viserys, she washes her hands, something not commonly done in this whole unsanitary world, but it signals that she totally senses his coming death rattle loud and clear, and Rhaenys warns that bloodshed is inevitable.
Knives will come out, for her, her husband, and for their heirs.
Remember, Otto similarly warned Alicent that children would be put to the sword, but Rhaenys says knives, not swords, as her concern is that young princes and princesses won't be attacked by soldiers with swords necessarily, but perhaps a more treacherous, more intimate attack, as gets hinted at in the trailer footage for this season. But Corlys reasons,
our house controls the realm's navy and half its dragons.
So far, the series has shown us the dragons of Syrax and Caraxes, and one scene of Sea Smoke, also a new dragon this episode, but overall, it's just a reminder that the Velaryons control half of the overall dragon power in Westeros. Laenor's lover is Joffrey, aka the Knight of Kisses. Seen at his side during the Stepstones War Council in episode 3, he says,
"Think of the tournament, but the feast, the battles at sea."
His mention of the tournament alerts some book readers because in Fire and Blood, it's at the tourney when Criston attacks Joffrey, so this show totally surprises us by moving it up to the pre-wedding feast. Sir Criston approaches Rhaenyra on the sail back with his armor removed, as Rhaenyra did to him that first night they hooked up. He mentions the port of Sunspear with ships filled with oranges and cinnamon heading to Essos. Sunspear is a seat of Dorne at the southern tip of Westeros. But Rhaenyra turns down Criston's proposal to run away with him.
I am the crown, Sir Criston. The Iron Throne looms larger than me, larger than anyone in my family. Aegon the Conqueror, united, 7 kingdoms and put them on a path.
Which is interesting because Rhaenyra used to be a girl eager to flee responsibility and eat lemon cakes for the rest of her life, but now she mentions Aegon the Conqueror, suggesting Viserys' lectures about Aegon's Song of Ice and Fire, inscribed into the dagger, have sobered her to the weight of her duty. Alicent summons Sir Criston to ask if there was some truth to Rhaenyra and Daemon, but Sir Criston dull confesses to sleeping with her himself.
I would ask only this, that rather than gelding me and having me tortured, you would sentence me mercifully to death.
Despite the text of this moment focused on Criston's willingness to die, we focus on Alicent's face. Actress Emily Carey conveying her betrayal that Rhaenyra would lie to her in the Godswood. Remember, Rhaenyra swore on her mother's soul over that. In Viserys' chamber, there's some close-ups of old Valyria model. We see that city surrounding Viserys as he lies gasping weakly, sinking into his chair, as if he is sinking with that kingdom into the sea. The younger Maester Orwyle says,
"If I may, Grand Maester, I took the liberty of preparing a fresh set of herbal poultices that might be more effective."
That will not be necessary, Orwyle. The leechings have always brought His Grace relief.
But Melos denies an alternative herbal remedy, instead preferring these medieval leechings. Just another example of the Maesters of Old Town accelerating the king's death, either by incompetence or by design. Viserys speculates on how he will be remembered, since he never fought or conquered or suffered a defeat.
It hardly makes a good song, does it? To be sung at feasts in 100 years. 500.
By wondering what kind of man he'd become had he been tested in a crucible, Viserys unwittingly makes an argument in favor of living one's life removed from the concern of legacy. That if people tell stories about your life 100 years from now, it really means that your life was filled with drama, and if you're a ruler, a lot of people likely suffered as a result of that drama. There's just something to be said for living a boring life. Yet, as Viserys falls asleep in the milk of the poppy, we cross-dissolve into the clouds and dragons. It's almost as if Viserys is drifting into another dragon dream, and that is one way he will be remembered. Viserys the dreamer. It was his dreams and his indecision over what they meant that really best defines his legacy. We see these 2 dragons soaring toward King Landing, Laenor's dragon, Sea Smoke, who we met in episode 3, and this new one. This is Rhaenys' dragon, Meleys, a she-dragon with scarlet scales and pink membranes on the wings, but also they added streaks of gold, as if to show how the queen who never was deserves a golden crown but never received one. Sir Harold Westerling announces the wedding attendees, starting with the Lannisters, Jason Lannister leading that group, and his brother Tywin Lannister to his side. Jefferson Hall plays both of these brothers, and you can see how they use VFX to double his face and map it onto Thailand. Rhaenyra, with rubies in her hair, finds a way to insult Jason's pride.
Thank you, Lord Jason. I could think of no better man than Sir Laenor.
Sir Gerald Royce cuts in front of the Hightowers, but both are caught up by the arrival of the Velaryons. As Laenor steps forward, there is a shot from the throne's point of view showing Sir Criston in the bottom right-hand corner, throwing his head back in agony and frustration. Then Daemon crashes the party, and right after Viserys signals for a new seat to be added, the shot frames Rhaenyra to be perfectly lined up with the Iron Throne, as if to say through Daemon will ultimately be her path to acquiring and securing that throne. Also notice that at the end of the table, Daemon now faces directly across from Laena, so these two are seated directly looking at each other, able to make eyes. Then Alicent interrupts the king's speech with her show-stopping arrival wearing Hightower green, and while most see this as scandalous, the guests from House Hightower immediately stand up proud. Hobart with a wide grin. Actually, when Alicent first stood in that doorway, she now most aligned with the Iron Throne, showing how for her, this is her at her most regal. And while everyone in this hall stands for the queen, Daemon remains seated the whole time, even as she passes by. Viserys continues with the speech, how he hopes to usher in a second age of dragons, which gets a round of applause, but notably not from Vaemond Velaryon, that's Corlys's brother who argued against Daemon's dragon tactics in episode 3, and not from Hobart Hightower, who, as the Lord of Old Town, only has a begrudging respect for dragon power in Westeros. As they dance, the bride and groom say,
I was never much of a dancer.
It's not much different to combat.
I shall hope for a different outcome.
Foreshadowing the way this wedding dance will transform into bloody combat, but also following the motif of a dance of the dragons, which is the term for the Civil War. As Hobart tells Alicent that Whole Town stands with her, in the bottom left corner, you can see Daemon staring daggers into her back. Sir Gerald approaches Daemon to accuse him of killing Rhea, but Daemon says he plans to petition Lady Jane Arryn for his inheritance of Runestone. Lady Jane will have an important role to play in the upcoming conflict. Daemon and Laena make eyes at each other and meet on the dance floor.
Has anybody ever told you you're nearly as pretty as your brother?
Laena's golden necklace pattern looks a lot like the interlocking circles of the necklace that Daemon gave Rhaenyra, and I'm pretty sure that's by design. Joffrey Lonmouth deduces from Criston's longing stares that he must be Rhaenyra's side piece, and he tells him
that we should swear to each other to God then,
and their secrets. Because if those are kept safe, then so are we all.
So what just happened in this close-up? Was it Joffrey passing too close, requiring Criston to move his sword? Did Joffrey brush his hand past Chris's ton in a suggestive manner to try to close off the loose ends of the square? Sir Harwin Breakbone Strong tries to dance with Rhaenyra, but Daemon cuts in. But Daemon and Rhaenyra now openly challenge each other in Valyrian, a language that you gotta imagine at least some of the Velaryon cousins will know. They're doing this in plain sight of everyone, even Viserys spots them through the crowd when Daemon forcefully grabs her head before they disappear behind all the other dancers. This episode then pulls an awesome bait and switch with these sudden screams, which we assume at first come from Rhaenyra or a woman watching something horrible happening to her, but nope, it is Sir Criston going apeshit on the Night of Kisses. Again, in the text, this fight takes place in the tournament days after this, when Criston hits Joffrey in the helm with Morningstar and puts him in a coma for 6 days until he dies. The fact that it happens here isn't just a surprise to book readers, it's a stain on the wedding of Rhaenyra and Laenor, and bloodshed between knights and early factions of the Civil War. Lionel Strong wordlessly signals to Breakbones to go retrieve Rhaenyra, and Breakbones plows through this crowd, ultimately throwing Rhaenyra over his shoulder and rushes her out. You could also read this as a non-verbal go-ahead from Lord Strong for his son to make a move on this princess in other ways. At least that might be how Breakbones interprets it. Criston caves in Joffrey's face, and we won't show you, but we can show you this woman behind Sir Criston who, upon looking at Joff's face, nearly faints. And Laenor reveals his true affections in his response to Joffrey. Yeah, notice Joffrey's hand totally moved on its own there, so the guy may still be alive, at least barely, for this final moment, or maybe it's just rigor mortis. Either way, the name Joffrey will remain important to Laenor for years to come. So instead of a wedding ceremony 7 days after this, Viserys decides to move it up to that night, before the mess is even cleared. He may be reacting to the nosebleed he got during this scuffle, not sure whether he has hours to live or not. So the Septon prays,
Father, Mother, Warrior, Smith, Maiden, Crone, Stranger.
Yes, you'll notice warrior is spoken right over the shot of Sir Criston unsheathing his sword in the Godswood, making this both a wedding prayer and a funeral prayer. But Alicent stops Sir Criston from killing himself, though you'll notice Alicent also appears at Rhaenyra's side during the wedding vows. So even though the editing makes it seem like it's happening at the same time, this moment in the Godswood must have happened before the ceremony, and Alicent has already forged a new relationship with Sir Criston before that wedding scene, and done so behind Rhaenyra's back. The king collapses again, and as they attend to Viserys, Joffrey's blood remains pooled up on the floor in the foreground, and a rat crawls up to slurp it up. A vampire rat, I guess, because it's ignoring the bounties of food on all the tables still. Remember, we saw rats in the Red Keep last episode, and the teeth of Balerion's skull, and on the bedpost looking down at Alicent. And like those rats, this rat represents the rot that is now spreading and spreading in this house. Like the rat in the final shot of Martin Scorsese's The Departed, this world does not really belong to the living ultimately, but to the scavengers who have to pick up the pieces after these self-interested a-holes kill each other off. This is a breakdown of House of the Dragon episode 6, where our cast grows up so fast, the kids are not all right, and Ladybug Laris is loose. So much to break down, no time to waste, let's get started. And really the first thing to point out, HBO's new banner poster for this series features Olivia Cook and Emma Darcy with the giant dragon Vhagar behind them. Its golden eye has the iris slit in the shape of Aegon the Conqueror's dagger, a dagger that will literally come between these two women next episode. Now, since we've jumped forward 10 years, the opening title's bloodline imagery has a ton of updates, where before we saw Viserys and Emma's dials, now we see Alicent's dial on the high tower green side in the far background, with 4 branches snaking down for her children, Aegon, Helena, Aemond, and we don't see him in this episode, but there is a 4th kid on the way at least, Darren. In the foreground, we see a new bloodline flowing into a new dial for Daemon Targaryen, depicting his dragon-winged helmet. Blood flows from that to a blue-colored dial behind him, which we then see in close-up, depicting the braid of Lyanna Velaryon, Daemon's new wife. Her bloodline flows to 2 blue ring dials with dragon eggs in each for their twin daughters, Rhaena and Baela. The dial depicting Rhaenyra's Valyrian steel necklace now branches off toward an engraving depicting dragons over a fleet, but major detail here, her bloodline is connecting with another dial on the far right, and that is not a Velaryon dial, that is a dial of Sir Harwin Breakbone Strong, with the 3 rivers of the House Strong sigil representing the green, red, and blue forks of the trident, because obviously Rhaenyra's sons are Harwin's kids. And this river of blood also forks into 3, Jacaerys or Jace, Lucerys, or Luke, and Joffrey, or Joff. All three of these have a pale blue ring, since they are Velaryons in name, but their symbols are all their own, and will have greater significance as this story unfolds. Miguel Sapochnik returned to direct this episode, since with the new cast, it's pretty much a second pilot for the series, whereas episode 1 featured Emma's tragic childbirth sequence. This episode opens with Rhaenyra's. And you'll notice Sapochnik shoots this in an excruciating, unbroken 3-minute take, though he might have hidden a cut in the quick pans or when something breaks the frame, but still, this take, followed immediately by another 2-minute and 40-second tracking shot through the castle, has the effect of centering us on Rhaenyra's pain, delivering that child, and then immediately having to go on a long walk all the way to the Queen's chamber. If you think about it, the reason Rhaenyra does this walk is she knows who the father is, she knows Alicent wants to check the hair color, and she does not want to part ways with this baby in case its hair color exposes him and her other 2 sons to the sword. She's not taking any chances. And really, these opening minutes occur in real time with the new Prince Joffrey's life in this world. We open on Black as he crowns, and we see how he spends roughly the first 8 minutes of his life. Last episode ended with the death of one Joffrey. This episode opens with the birth of the boy named after him. But the moment the baby comes out, notice the nursemaid's reaction.
Boy, princess.
Brave mother.
Yeah, her face says it all. She's reacting to the color of the boy's hair, a dark brown, like both of his older brothers, because as this nursemaid knows, this is another bastard and more royal drama to follow. Rhaenyra and Leonor's walk through the castle again, a nearly 3-minute unbroken shot, is impressive mostly because it shows how large of an interior set they actually built for this show, with a grand staircase that actually leads to a higher level, which is really rare in TV shows. Normally the stairs just kind of go to nowhere and then they cut to a different set where they're upstairs. But Sapochnik wanted to inhabit this set properly and introduce the characters at an older age by forcing us to spend some time with them.
The moment Rhaenyra gives birth until she meets Alicent was not in the original script. I thought, well, if we're going to have this set, I would like us to inhabit it properly, which is why the opening actually follows our characters in a single continuous take all the way through.
This guy, Lord Caswell, congratulates them.
If I may be of any service.
The day may yet come, my lord.
Yeah, Lord Caswell will play an important role in the conflict to come as a supporter of Rhaenyra, so she will call in that favor. And guarding the Queen's door is Sir Criston Cole, who inexplicably managed to keep his job in the King's Guard despite murdering someone on these two's wedding day, including assaulting the groom, which just goes to show how little the Crown really cared about Leonor and his Night of Kisses, and really goes to show how powerful Alicent has become. The fact they have to pass Sir Criston at the doorway here likely is what led to Leonor naming that boy Joffrey after the guy Sir Criston killed. It almost seems out of impulse to force the Queen and her bodyguard to remember this name. King Viserys joins them, looking like mid-montage Smeagol, one hand short of the comfort level I would need to give a newborn to.
A fine prince. Sturdy. You will make a fearsome knight.
Sturdy, or another word for strong. Outside this chamber, Sir Criston now has his back to them as they pass, the ultimate cold shoulder. Rhaenyra says,
"You don't think to consult me before you name my child."
He's our child, is he not?
Only one of us is bleeding.
This and Rhaenyra saying Leonor has not been interested in her affairs as of late. Yeah, not exactly subtle. Neither is the literal trail of blood leading back to Criston and the Queen. Just a reminder that those blood rivers in the opening titles aren't just about succession, they're about the bloodshed that comes with it. Rhaenyra finds her sons Jace and Luke back with their real father, Sir Harwin.
We chose an egg for the baby.
Ah, that looks like the perfect one.
I let Luke choose. Thank you, Jace.
Yeah, that little thank you from the younger brother to the older, and the way that the older brother grabs his brother's hand to keep him from getting burned. These boys aren't total shits, at least not yet. There's just something to be said for mixing non-Valyrian DNA into this bloodline. In the Dragon Pit, Jace meets his dragon, Vermax, whom he and the Dragon Keepers command with High Valyrian words like Mbas, meaning hold, and Dohaeres, meaning serve, as in Valar Dohaeres, all men must serve. You'll notice Alicent has dressed her sons in Hightower green, whereas Rhaenyra's sons wear Valarian blue. But none of these kids wear the Targaryen colors of red and black. Jace successfully binds with Vermax, who torches a lamb. Now, Aegon has already binded with his dragon, Sunfire, and Jace's younger brother, Luke, has already binded with the dragon that goes unmentioned here, but in the text, it's Arrax. So as the oldest who's gone through this a couple times, Aegon yawns at Vermax, and it is clearly his idea to prank Aemond with the Pink Dread, a play on the dragon, Balerion, the Black Dread. So Aemond, humiliated, wanders deeper into the pit where he runs into a chained up dragon, and right as that dragon begins to breathe fire, you can see its scales are a pale blue color. This dragon is Dreamfire, the bluish silver she-dragon whose eggs Daemon stole one of in episode 2. This is a dragon that will bind with Aemond's sister, Helena. We meet Helena, who has a case filled with beetles and moths and scorpions, and she fawns over a millipede.
It has eyes. I don't believe it can see.
And why is that so, do you think?
It is beyond our understanding.
I suppose you're right. Some things just are.
Yeah, this series is doing something different with Helena than in the text. I think we're gonna learn that Helena is a green seer and or a warg. You remember green seers like the three-eyed raven, they can see into the future. Wargs can transplant their minds into animals. Both are associated with the magic of the children of the forest, and the faces in the weirwood trees are believed to be how the green seers are able to do their green seeing. Just notice how Helena's words are deeply prophetic.
Aemond, what have you done?
He did it again.
They said they found a dragon for me.
The last ring has no legs at all.
You will have a dragon one day.
He'll have to close an eye.
I know it.
Yeah, book readers know what he'll have to close an eye refers to, and we're gonna see it next episode. But I think the last ring having no legs could be a reference to the Green Seer King Bran the Broken, a kid who Helena would get along great with. Because Helena says that each ring has 2 legs, 60 rings creating hundreds of legs, which I think is a metaphor for each generation of rulers needing a king and a queen, the bloodline being the leg to the next branch, as every episode of the series has begun by showing us. This line of succession is gonna continue to the last ring of the story, Bran, someone who cannot walk. And Sansa says that he cannot bear children. Therefore, the wheel, or in this case, the ring, is broken. Helena says the millipede has eyes but cannot see, and I think that's just her way of saying these rulers are cursed with literal eyes but don't have the proper vision of green sight. But she likely does, and so does Bran, and maybe so do others in this story. Remember, Helena's dragon will be Dreamfire, and I think she inherited the Targaryen skill that Viserys wishes he inherited from his ancestor, Daenys the Dreamer. In this case, it is Helena the Dreamer. Viserys' pathetic model train set of Valyria has expanded now with various structures topped with stone dragons like the one Alicent gifted the king. I love how Sapochnik frames that V-shaped insert of the tall structure so that a background torch is perfectly framed in the valley of it, creating the illusion of a volcano, like one of the volcanoes that destroyed old Valyria. Alicent questions the parentage of Rhaenyra's sons, and Viserys sends away a stonemason who's named Eddard, a meta nod to Eddard Stark in Game of Thrones, who spent most episodes on a paternity crusade of his own that also involved a bastard named Joffrey. Alicent says,
To have one child like that is a mistake. To have 3 is an insult.
And as she says this, notice the hilt of Aegon's dagger is right by her hand, foreshadowing a move she will make with that dagger next episode to act on this suspicion. But Viserys refuses to see the truth. He compares this to a black horse he once had that bred with a white stallion, as silver as the moon on a winter's night, producing a fall the color chestnut.
Nature is a thing of mysterious works.
Yeah, you can't see a parallel with his expectation of a silver-white stag just to find an unremarkable brown one. I think that was the episode when he really gave up on trying to read into signs and portents. Sir Criston calls Rhaenyra the C word, and Alicent says,
I have to believe that in the end, honor and decency will prevail.
Followed by the most ironic jump cut to Aegon making a mess out the window. Ah, the things we do for love. And the fact that Alicent doesn't really react to him doing this suggests that he might be doing this all the time. But really, the bigger concern for Alicent is the preservation of her bloodline.
You are the challenge! You are the challenge, Aegon! Simply by living and breathing!
The way all of their dials are pre-engraved into the stone in the opening credits shows how these characters are really destined to be in conflict with their relatives the moment the bloodline flows into them. They don't really have much control over what's ahead. Over in Pentos, Daemon rides his dragon Caraxes, but finds himself in the shadow of a much larger one, Vhagar, ridden by Lyanna, who actually referenced Vhagar in episode 2.
But Vhagar still lives. Somewhere. But too large for the dragon pit. The workers at Spice Town report hearing her song at times. They say it's a sad thing.
Yeah, Vhagar's sad song might foreshadow the dragon's repeated losing of her lady riders. If you think about it, Lyanna's first and final word of this episode is Dracarys. Vhagar is the largest living dragon currently, who was once ridden by Visenya, Aegon the Conqueror's sister wife. Notice how Vhagar's wings have holes in them from old age, and I love how they just use the scale of Lyanna's body on Vhagar's saddle compared to Daemon on his saddle, just to convey Vhagar's immensity. Prince Reggio Haratis says,
Lamb hearts are excellent.
Yeah, remind us of that roasted lamb heart that the dragon Vermax ate earlier. We learned that the Triarchy has joined forces with Dorne, and Reggio wants their 3 dragons for defense. Daemon considers it, but Lyanna doesn't want to be used.
We are not minstrels or mummers who play at the pleasure of an alien prince. We are the blood of old Valyria.
Mummers is essentially what they were earlier, putting on a Dragonfire show for the crowd, and Daemon may be remembering his own 2 small parts in the Mummers play back in King's Landing in episode 4. Sir Criston oversees a sparring session in the yard with the boys after his mother's warning. Notice how Aegon has gone from yawning to swinging hard on that dummy. Jace shoulder checks Aemond, and Aegon pats Luke on the shoulder. Just an interesting contrast in the status and respect among these 4 kids. Aegon, the oldest, and Luke, the youngest of the 4, were the first 2 to bind with dragons, leaving Jace and Aemond with this rivalry rivalry, both of them avoiding being the last one to bind to a dragon. Sir Criston puts Jace and Aegon together.
Eldest son against eldest son.
Yeah, Lionel's reaction says it all. He knows Jace and Luke are secretly his grandsons, and he doesn't really like how Sir Criston is setting up this conflict, putting it on display for everybody. During their fight, Aegon shoves the dummy over on Jace.
Foul play. I'll deal with him.
Yeah, we hear Sir Criston's advice to Aegon, but not what Sir Harwin says to Jace, leading everyone to get suspicious. So Sir Criston takes it out on Jace by letting Aegon go crazy on him, and when Sir Harwin complains about it, he dickishly drops his sparring sword for Harwin to have to reach over again and pick it up. And Sir Criston taunts Harwin.
Most men would only have that kind of devotion toward a cousin, or a brother, or a son.
Aegon's hair is blocking his face, but he is flashing a wide grin under there. And as Harwin is dragged away from punching Criston, Aegon continues to smile in shock, showing how this kid is old enough to get the subtext, and is probably going to continue to use this against his cousins. Laenor comes in singing with Sir Carl Corey, who immediately sobers up when he sees Rhaenyra in the room, because Carl probably knows what happened to the last of Laenor's male lovers when he overstepped. This guy has a smarter head on his shoulders than Joffrey did, so just keep an eye on him. Laenor drunkenly rants about the chance to fight in the Stepstones.
He says there is a Tyroshi general there, a giant, they say, who dyes his beard purple and wears women's frocks.
Yes, this Tyroshi general is Recalio Rendoon, described by George R. Martin as one of the most curious and flamboyant rogues in the annals of history. I don't think we're gonna meet him on the show, but I'm glad he got mentioned. Lyanna shames Daemon.
You spend your time here, in the library, reading accounts of the same dead dragon lords whose legacy you claim has no hold on you.
Didn't know I was being so minutely observed.
Remember earlier, Lyanna caught him teaching Baela how to speak High Valyrian. So despite his prodigal exile in Pentos, his dragon legacy keeps calling him back. At the small council meeting, both Rhaenyra and Alicent now join, each with their own punch card ball. They discuss a dispute between the Brackens and the Blackwoods and the Riverlands. Those are the long warring families whose young lords dueled at Storm's End at the beginning of episode 4. They mention Lord Grover Tully. George R. R. Martin actually named Lord Grover after the Muppet Grover, along with Grover's grandson, Elmo, and great-grandsons Kermit and Oscar. I'm not kidding, those are actually their names. Alicent wants to leave this as a local matter, but Rhaenyra presses on.
And yet, the Brackens and the Blackwoods will use any excuse to spill each other's blood. This dispute bears looking into. There will be country folk who know where the lines have been drawn for generations.
That is easy enough.
Yeah, already showing a difference in the leadership style between these two queens. One wants to be hands-on and preemptive, deal with problems immediately. One is a more passive leader who wants to stay out of these conflicts. Lionel tries to move on to Tywin Lannister's Stepstones report, but he still reacts to Alicent's hostility, and poor old Lyman Beesbury just struggles to keep up.
If you ask me, I think the Blackwoods have the upper hand.
We've moved on to the Stepstones, Lord Beesbury.
Yeah, we got a new Archmaester, Orwyle. We actually saw him last episode. He was the kid then who recommended an herbal remedy to Melos. The fact that Melos is gone now might actually be the reason Viserys has been alive the past 10 years and still able to walk, because he was not looking good at the end of last episode. I think it just shows that it was really Melos' treatment that was holding him back. The new Master of Laws is Jasper Wilde, nicknamed Ironrod. Some say because of his unyielding respect to the rule of law. Some say because he sired 29 kids. Rhaenyra stands to apologize, and while all the others sit, Alicent does not. Rhaenyra offers Alicent to marry Jace to Helena. Really the nicest of her boys to the Green Scene Bug Girl. A niece to a bastard uncle. Not great, not terrible. And if her dragon Cyrax gives more eggs, she offers to give Aemond his choice of them. So Alicent's response is really grounded in stubbornness and a personal grudge toward Rhaenyra. Instead of hearing her out, she shuts her down as a hormonal mother.
Rhaenyra.
Alicent says to Viserys,
She feels the earth washing away beneath her feet, and now she expects us to ignore her transgressions and for me to marry my only daughter to one of her plain-featured sons.
Yeah, she almost said to one of her bastards. And she goes on,
You may do as you wish, husband. When I am cold in my grave.
And I like how the staircase railing separates this married couple in the frame. Lionel Strong tries to resign, but refuses to verbalize his reasoning. Alicent passes a maid who giggles at her when she passes. Alicent probably sees this as another reason to feel paranoid that the whole crown is laughingstock now that the Strong rumors are going around. We learn that Lord Larys Strong has been sort of a master of whispers for the queen. Learning that his father and brother are headed to Harrenhal, he recruits a murderer, a deviant, and a traitor to the crown for a mission. His cane is marked with his sigil, which according to HBO's prop listing is a firefly. They actually designed this cane head so that it looks like the firefly is stuck in tree sap. And kind of like John Hammond's Amber Cane in Jurassic Park.
What a little jolly flea circus you've created, Lord Varys. Spared no moral expense.
Now, if Larys is so smart, I don't know why he'd show his face to these criminals instead of using like a middleman, or why he'd mark these arsonists with brooches of the same firefly sigil on his cane. Meanwhile, Lyanna struggles to give birth, and the surgeon says,
We couldn't lay open the wound
try to remove the infant by way of the blade. But I cannot say for a surety whether it lives.
Would the mother survive it?
No.
But Lyanna hears this, and she pushes away, intent on not suffering the same fate as Emma. So she orders Vhagar to Dracarys, giving herself a dragon rider's death. Harwin says goodbye to the boys and to Rhaenyra.
I will be a stranger when we meet again.
Now, he means a stranger to this boy, but it's also a signal that he's about to meet the stranger, the one of the seven who represents death. Jace cuts to the chase.
Is Harwin strong, my father? Am I a bastard?
You are a Targaryen. That's all that matters.
Of course, she doesn't say yes or no, but she's pretty much signaling to Jace the truth because Rhaenyra has given up trying to keep this secret. She tells Laenor that they are leaving on a midnight train to Dragonstone, but she tells him he can bring Sir Carl, who ends the scene by sliding a dagger in its sheath. Lionel and Harwin Strong burn alive in Harrenhal, which was a mystery in the book that readers have ascribed to Daemon, maybe the ghost of Harrenhal, but now we learn it was orchestrated by Larys and his Firefly mutes. His voiceover posits that children are a weakness, a way for people to try to form a legacy beyond death, but it ultimately leads people to make poor choices.
You may know what is the right thing to be done, but love stays the hand. Love is a downfall.
Maybe this is just me rereading Fellowship of the Ring right now, but this reminds me of an exchange between Gandalf and Frodo about Gollum. Frodo says, "What a pity that Bilbo did not stab that vile creature when he had a chance." And Gandalf responds,
"Pity? It was pity that stayed his hand. Pity and mercy, not to strike without need."
And he goes on to say,
"My heart tells me that he has some part to play yet, for good or ill, before the end. And when that comes, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many. Yours not least."
The idea is similar here. Larys says love stays the hand, and that because of love, people make blind choices that shape the fates of many. This series is, at its heart, about how love stays the hand and dooms us all. But that ultimately is just the mysterious nature of things. The closing montage shows the burnt remains of Lyanna and Harwin, Rhaenyra's lover and Daemon's lover, the lovers standing in their ways toward each other, both claimed by fire. Viserys still holds onto Emma's ring and he kisses it on his finger, but he sees the rat spying on him from this room. This rat keeps showing up again and again. He was spying on Rhaenyra from the skull of Balerion the Black Dread as she snuck out of the castle. He spied on Alicent from her bedpost. He was weirdly sipping on Joffrey's blood during Rhaenyra and Laenor's wedding at the end of last episode. YouTuber Joe the Magician posted a fascinating theory that Larys Strong might be a warg or a greenseer. Larys somehow knew that the Archmaester brought Rhaenyra the tea. Larys might be warging into that rat to spy on everyone and to gather this information. He did have that meaningful moment with Alicent by the Weirwood tree, and their home of Harrenhal is situated beside the God's Eye Lake, which has the Isle of Faces in the middle that contains a grove of weirwood trees. It is a hugely spiritually significant location to the Song of Ice and Fire lore that we have yet to visit in live action, and I think we actually see that island in this episode in the wide shot of Harrenhal. Larys' sigil of the Firefly could connect with Helena's interest in insects, maybe something he instilled in her as he nurtures her green-seeing abilities. To top it all off, the writer of this episode, Sarah Hess, actually said about Larys in the Inside the Episode featurette,
"He's a player and he's looking into the future and seeing what she is going to be."
Larys ends this episode funneling that same red flower from Bravos that he brought up to Alicent in the Godswood last episode, talking about how an outside species of flower could grow so well here inside the castle. We thought he was referring to Alicent. Really, he was referring to himself, how he is growing strong. On one hand, this series has a clear destination of the well-documented Dance of the Dragons and which Targaryen's gonna win it all at the end, which of them are gonna die. But on a deeper layer is some additional lore and mythology that's not really touched on in Fire and Blood, and I'm so excited to explore that. This show is doing a good job keeping both people who read the book and didn't read the book invested. This is a breakdown of House of the Dragon episode 7, where Miguel Sapochnik says, "You thought the Battle of Winterfell was hard to see? Ha! Hold my coffee cup. Don't worry, it may be the hour of the owl, but I got the eyes of one. And neither have been sliced out yet by my nephew, so I'm gonna break down this episode frame by frame for all the details you might have missed. The opening credits were updated again, this time showing Laena's dial filling with blood, which is what happens when a character has died. Also, now we know that her braid sigil is a rope pattern that borders her sarcophagus. The fact that this was her sigil in the last episode's credits before she even died suggests a pretty dark view for all of these characters' fates. Their fortune and peril is all destined, set in stone before life even flows into them. A similar fate has befallen the dial for Sir Harwin Strong, once visible to the right of Rhaenyra's bloodline, flowing into hers for their sons, now flooded to mark his death last episode. We open on the funeral of Laena Velaryon on Driftmark. Driftmark is the title of this episode episode. We actually start with a close-up of rope threaded through an eyelet. Laena's rope will actually prove critical this episode, for it is her rope that forms the reins Aemond grabs to take control of Laena's dragon Vhagar, and also take the symbolic reins of power as the battle looms over which faction of the family will ultimately reign. The mourners are spread out across the rocks, including 3 women whose faces are shrouded in black. These might be other mourners like Rhaenys, who also has her face shrouded like this, but their positioning and the fact that there's 3 of them there makes me wonder if they are Silent Sisters, an order of women from the Faith of the Seven who oversee funeral services. Their association with the stranger who represents death, and there being 3 of them, reminds me of the Fates of Greek mythology, who share one eye among the 3 of them, or even maybe the 3 prophetic witches of Macbeth. In either case, fitting harbingers for this episode of fate, doom, and one-eyed vision. Vaemond's High Valyrian words reference the Merling King. This is a mythological figure from whom, Corlys's legend has it, he was granted the Driftwood throne. Otto Hightower has returned, reclaiming Hand of the King. Now that Lionel Strong has been taken off the board, Vaemond uses some strong words here.
Bilario anogrore lopo ojares, ilvon cumbliares, ilvon tregi yares, sidore vaginigon ilvon bebilis.
The Valyrian speakers all react to what Vaemond is saying, Viserys, Rhaenyra, and Daemon with his laugh, because Vaemond is implying that Laena's daughters are of trueborn Valyrian blood, unlike Rhaenyra and Laenor's sons. It's a charge that Daemon irreverently laughs at, I don't think out of disrespect for his late wife, because there was a deleted scene from last episode that showed that he loves his family deeply. Really, I think he's just laughing at the insanity that someone would use this occasion to make legitimacy accusations. But also, yeah, Daemon is totally a troll. Laena's sarcophagus gets dropped into the sea, and we follow it to the depressing bottom, where it lands among a heap of others from House Velaryon, making this essentially a mass grave. There really is little dignity here. 5 dragons appear on Driftmark. The highest in the sky is either Meleys, who is Rhaenys' dragon, or Seasmoke, Laenor's dragon. I don't think it's Vhagar because there's no holes in the wings, and also later when Aemond sees Vhagar, that dragon is even larger despite being above the cloud layer. So yeah, I think it's either Meleys or Seasmoke. Then directly over the castle is Caraxes, that's Daemon's dragon. The golden one that flies over us is Syrax, that's Rhaenyra's dragon. The golden one that's sitting on the cliffs is Sunfire, that's Aegon's dragon. And then the blue one sitting above him is Dreamfire, that's Helena's dragon. That's the dragon that scared Aemond last episode. The dragon whose egg Daemon stole in episode 2. And fun fact, the same dragon who will produce the 3 eggs that Daenerys Targaryen will receive. Now, after having her hair down last episode upon the birth of her son Joffrey, Rhaenyra's hair is now back up in a braid, matching the interlocking circles of the sigil, the Valyrian steel necklace that Daemon gave her. Her hair was also braided in episode 3 and in episode 4 when she was at that impressionable age and had some major hots for her uncle. The necklace she now wears, I could be wrong, but I think it's a modified version of that necklace. It uses the Valyrian steel rings as a base, changes out the chain, but has added more gold around that central ruby. And this is important because when she walks outside, she starts out of focus, but then becomes clear suddenly, and then the reaction shot that it cuts away to proves that the point of view of that shot was Daemon. So Rhaenyra was walking out into this cocktail hour, presenting herself directly to Daemon. But then after some stink eye from Alicent, Rhaenyra turns away and beelines for her son Jace. Just like in last episode, Rhaenyra is desperate to keep her sons in her arms whenever she senses Alicent's presence. Jace wishes they were at Harrenhal mourning his true father, but Rhaenyra tells him to comfort Rhaena and Baela. And then she catches Alicent still stink-eyeing her, and Emma Darcy does this fantastic self-conscious adjustment as if she's worried she might be leaking milk again. Bug girl Helena plays with a spider.
Hand turns new, spool of green, spool of black, dragons of flesh, weaving dragons of thread.
Oh, Bug girl sees the future from afar. Bug girl knows just who you are. That's a reference to the Disney show, Bug Juice. They'll get it. There will be one viewer who gets that. Last week, I speculated that Helena could be a Greenseer, a Warg, or a Dreamer, and this episode confirms it, especially with what happens to Aemond.
You will have a dragon one day.
You'll have to close an eye.
I may have lost an eye, but I gained a dragon.
Now Helena is repeating this phrase about a spool of green and a spool of black, referring to the Greens, Team Alicent, and the Blacks, Team Rhaenyra. The threads referring both to the wardrobe they used to define themselves, but also spiders weaving webs, the idea of weaving from a loom. These are classic symbols of fate and destiny. Helena smashes a spider in a seashell, as if trying to stop this fated dance of the dragons here at Driftmark. But we cut immediately from this shot of the spider to Larys Strong, as he closes his hand around his firefly-headed cane. Now, I know it's more likely that Helena is a Targaryen dreamer than a Westerosi greenseer, I get it, but I really do think that there is a connection between Helena's prophetic bugs and Larys's association with bugs and horticulture. Like, Larys really could be a warg or greenseer using things like rats to spy on others around the castle, whereas Helena could be a dreamer, and both these people in Alicent's orbits could produce contrasting visions. As Jace awkwardly stands behind Baela, she takes his hand. This is the same thing their mother Laena did to Laenor when she was scared at the tourney in episode 1. This little moment fortifies these two as protective siblings. Lord Corlys tells Luke that he'll inherit Driftmark one day.
Sorry, I don't want it.
Oh, like a little Jon Snow over here.
I don't want it. I never have.
Aemond nearly comes over to comfort Baela and Rhaena, but he stops short at Jace and at the fire. And then they all hear a dragon roar. This is, of course, Vhagar, and in this episode, it is Aemond's call to action. Corlys angrily tells Sir Qarl to retrieve Laenor from trying to join his sister in the sea, and this becomes another point of contention between Rhaenyra and Alicent, because every suggestion that Laenor has partners besides Rhaenyra is further evidence to Alicent that Rhaenyra is living a lie. Meanwhile, Viserys tells Daemon,
Your girls are the very image of their mother. A comfort and an anguish, as I well remember.
Yeah, telling us that Emma remains on his mind, as we saw when he kissed her ring last episode, and Rhaenyra haunts it by looking so much like Emma. Emma so consumes his thoughts that he takes a big old dump on his current wife.
I'm going to bed, Emma.
Shall I see after Queen Alicent, Your Grace?
Jesus, Harold, you had to rub it in. Daemon tells Otto,
No matter how fat the leech grows, it always wants for another meal.
yeah, pretty sharp dig at Otto and his sus connection with the Archmaester Mellos of Old Town, whose stubborn use of leeches to treat Viserys nearly killed the king. Especially noticeable now that Mellos is out of the picture and Viserys is shockingly able to hang in there. Otto finds Aegon drunk on the stairs.
Brother!
Yeah, Aegon thinks his grandfather is his younger brother, Aemond, just setting up how Aegon will eventually see his brother as the far more assertive, taller of these brothers. Rhaenys tells Corlys that she thinks the family's cursed by the gods for their ambition. Corlys responds,
What is this brief mortal life, if not the pursuit of legacy?
yeah, it's the same foolhardy quest that Viserys pondered about to Lord Lionel in episode 5, wondering what songs would be written about him. Rhaenys wants Driftmark to pass not to Luke and to Jace, but to Baela and Rhaena, since they are of true Velaryon blood. But Corlys says,
History does not remember blood. It remembers names.
and history will prove him right, because in A Song of Ice and Fire, the blood of House Lannister effectively controls the Iron Throne, despite them doing all that in the name of House Baratheon, the name history would remember. Now, at this point in the episode, you may have noticed the visuals were a bit hard to make out on your home TV. It's because Miguel Sapochnik shot the middle part of this episode using a technique called day for night, where you shoot a nighttime scene during the daytime, and then you underexpose the shot either in camera or you darken it in post-production. And they do this because shooting at night risks getting no light whatsoever into the lens and thus no visual information recorded. But the problem is, if this isn't done without sensitivity to how the content is going to be exhibited by the viewer, it might result in a lot of shots just looking too dark and you can't make out anything. You may remember a lot of viewers had this issue in the Game of Thrones episode The Long Night, which was also shot by Sapochnik. Now, some snobs may say it's on the viewers to adjust their settings, like knowing how to turn off motion smoothing. I agree, you got to turn off motion smoothing, but I don't think it's a fair comparison there, because I am someone who has adjusted my brightness to 50%, my contrast all the way up, my color temperature to warm. My TV is only like 2 years old, and I totally turn off all the lights in my room and watch this at night, but the imagery was still pretty hard to make out. And anytime HBO's massive white subtitles came on the screen, they blinded me to everything else on screen. I mean, Jordan Peele was able to use day for night shooting for Nope and produce something that looked great, even on home TV. So I beg HBO's directors to over-adjust the contrast and the color temperature and do at least one test screening on the crappiest potato TV you can find from the year 2012, just to ensure it at least looks visible. Psst, knowing your audience is assuming that most of them cannot afford OLEDs. Now, one counter argument I will entertain is that maybe they wanted to keep character motives a mystery by masking them in darkness, like when Rhaenyra asks,
Did you love her?
We were happy enough.
Well, that in itself is a great achievement.
Yeah, notice how the moonlight is behind Daemon here, keeping his face in shadow when he answers a question. So it's kind of hard to see how Matt Smith emoted that line. But I just think Matt Smith is a hell of an actor and has done a masterful job keeping his intent ambiguous, even in perfect lighting. So can we just trust the actor to play the ambiguity instead of masking his performance with bad lighting? Rhaenyra says,
Should have forbidden Sir Harwin from returning to the Riverlands. Harren's curse is said to be as strong now as it was after the conquest.
It's a ghost story.
Yes, she's referencing the ghost story of Harren the Black, whose curse is said to haunt the residents of Harrenhal since Aegon the Conqueror burned the castle. Daemon says it's a ghost story, but this whole debate over whether this ghost story is real hits at the core thematic debate of much of George R. R. Martin's text. Is there real magic in this world? And if so, is it even powerful? Or is it all really an illusion exploited by people, just trying to mask or inflate their true power status? But in this middle section, I did truly enjoy Aemond's approach to Vhagar. I love the shots angled downward from Vhagar, down upon Aemond, as if they're from the top of a tower, the seagulls squawking as they fly off the top of the dragon. Just these little details conveying the massive scale of the creature. Yet, when Aemond slightly touches the reins, Vhagar snaps awake. It's so scary for something so large to be so sensitive. Aemond commands,
Dohaira! Dohaira Vhagar! Nakeri! Nakeri!
Yeah, some new Valyrian words there. Dohairis, of course, is High Valyrian for serve, but Likiri is new, it means calm. And once he gets the dragon to purr, he now grabs the reins confidently and climbs, and then he commands,
Soves!
Yes, obviously meaning fly. Now, Aemond's flight on Vhagar is fascinating to watch because it's not the joyride that Jon Snow's first dragon flight was in season 8 of Game of Thrones. This, by contrast, is a true struggle. He gets tossed around when Vhagar shakes off the sand, and he nearly falls to his death during that vertical ascent. The kid has to painfully heave himself up on the saddle, and even once he gains control, he still nearly dies again when birds whiz past his head. This is such a realistic depiction of how hard it would be to fly a dragon like this. Only towards the very end of this flight does Aemond finally gain confidence and kind of enjoy it. And I love how composer Ramin Djawadi brings back that House Targaryen theme, but mixes in some electric strings at the very end of it. The twins and the boys confront Aemond. At first, we sympathize with Aemond for reminding us how Jace and Luke totally pranked him with the pink dread, but in the same line, he tells poor Baela that the pig would suit her, and we lose all sympathy for him. So Jace goes on the attack, but Aemond, notice, actually uses the tip Sir Criston gave his brother Aegon against Jace last episode, and uses his height as an advantage. He kicks Jace to the ground, and then Aemond hurls the worst insult.
You will die screaming in flames just as your father did! Bastards!
My father's still alive!
Doesn't know, does he?
Lord Strong.
And so this fight ends with the younger brother Luke grabbing the dagger and slicing out Aemond's eye. Now in the book, Baela and Rhaena were not present for this fight. It was actually the youngest brother, Joffrey, who was age 3 in the book's timeline. He's the one who discovers Aemond trying to climb Vhagar, and he threatens to rat out Aemond, but Aemond pushes him into a pile of dragon poo.
That is one big pile of shit.
And that leads to the flight, and then the fight goes down after that. It seems like they left out Joffrey, obviously, to him being a baby in this show's timeline, but they included Baela and Rhaena to make Aemond's taking of Vhagar more of an insult to Baela, and to ultimately draw the twins closer to Jace and to Luke. Viserys rages against the Kingsguard.
Kingsguard have never had to defend princes from princes.
That is no answer!
The balls on Sir Criston. Also, I'm pretty sure he's historically wrong. Like, there was definitely a bloody succession crisis between Prince Maegor, the future Maegor the Cruel, and his nephew and his niece, Prince Aegon and Princess Rhaena, when their father, King Aenys I, that was Maegor's half-brother, died. When that happened, Maegor crowned himself on Dragonstone and essentially forced whoever the Kingsguard was at that point to pick sides between the rightful heir and between him, essentially forcing the situation where they had to defend princes from princes. Then, as each of the parents arrive, Viserys is positioned in front of the Driftwood throne. Even here, he must preside over this dispute as king, though notice, behind him, Otto lurks closer and closer to this throne, as if eager to snatch any power from behind the king's back. Daemon, meanwhile, watches all this bickering go down, casually leaning on the door, hanging back on the sidelines, much like his mummer equivalent did in episode 4. Now, at first, Rhaenyra says Luke cutting Aemond was a regrettable accident, desperate to just move on and move out of this, even though Jace just told her that Aemond called them bastards. Though, when Alicent pushes it, notice the change Rhaenyra takes. She suddenly pipes up and says the fight was over the bastard accusation.
My sons are in line to inherit the Iron Throne, Your Grace. This is the highest of treasons.
And notice how Rhaenyra's voice drops. She takes a more commanding tone. She calls her father, Your Grace. She uses the word treason, all to reframe this trial, putting Aemond, and by extension, Aegon and Alicent, all of them, on the defensive. And it totally rattles Alicent.
You tell me, boy, where did you hear this lie?
The insult was training yard bluster. The lot of boys, it was nothing.
Aemond, I asked you a question.
Yeah, notice the camera shifts focus from Viserys to Alicent and then back to Viserys in a single shot, revealing Alicent's panic, but Viserys totally ignoring it because he was there in their training yard squabbles last episode. Alicent was not. So Alicent tries out a new tactic. She brings up Laenor because any focus on Laenor she thinks will shift the focus to his and Rhaenyra's sin, but Viserys presses on and Aemond says it was Schwartz!
Oh.
I see.
Just kidding, it was Aemond's brother Aegon. And then Aegon, instead of hearing it from his mom or from Sir Criston, he just lays it all out.
We know, Father. Everyone knows. Just look at them.
Yes, this line was directly from George R. R. Martin's text. That's probably why it hit so hard here. But Viserys ignores this and demands they all make peace, and he passes Alicent the same exact way that he did before when he went to bed and called her Emma. But whereas Alicent was silent there, now she has to speak up.
That is insufficient. There is a debt to be paid. I shall have one of her son's eyes in return.
Yes, Alicent invokes the famous real-world Code of Hammurabi, an eye for an eye. But also interesting that she doesn't initially demand Luke's eye in particular. She just says any one of the son's eyes. Just a little tell that in this moment, it's not about proper justice against Luke in particular. It's about hurting Rhaenyra and that side of the family in any way possible. But she steadies herself and she escalates.
Sir Criston, bring me the eye of Lucerys Velaryon.
Stay your hand.
No, you have sworn to me!
As your protector, my queen.
Yes, love the reaction shots to Sir Harold. For a moment, we have to wonder if Sir Harold's totally gonna have to come to blows against Sir Criston, but Sir Harold being there was likely what led Sir Criston to back down. And then, the fateful moment.
Your Grace. Alicent, stay with the king! Hold your ground! Do not, Sir Criston! Alicent! Do not, Sir Criston! Alicent! Stay your hand, Paul!
Oh, just an incredible 15 seconds that I love to zapruder over and over again. Notice how when Alicent snatches the dagger, that's what knocks over Viserys. And Sir Harold immediately has to tend to the king falling over, and that's what makes him a second behind. So as he rushes across the room to catch up with her, he has to command Sir Criston at least 3 times to stay back.
Sir Criston!
But Sir Criston does not, and that's what requires Daemon to step in, which makes us a little worried because the last time Daemon and Sir Criston squared off, Sir Criston won that fight. But everything around these two women freezes as the dagger quivers in the foreground as the fire rages behind. Now, of course, the dagger is the symbol of the divide of these two women, both practically and symbolically in so many ways. It's framed between them in the poster as Vhagar's eye, the dragon that now switches sides in this episode. And remember, flames reveal the secret of Aegon's Song of Ice and Fire that is encoded in the Valyrian steel of this blade. And remember, that is a secret prophecy that Viserys told Rhaenyra, but not to Alicent. And it is that knowledge that sobered Rhaenyra's childish impulses and makes her feel ultimately in the right to prevent Alicent from taking her birthright from her. Alicent says Rhaenyra is entitled, she has no honor. Rhaenyra says Alicent has been hiding under a cloak of her own righteousness, and she says,
but now they see you as you are.
Yikes, blood has been drawn, and Aemond says,
Do not mourn me, mother. It was a fair exchange. I may have lost an eye, but I gained a dragon.
Now in the text, Aemond does not say this right at this moment. It's actually something he says a lot later when he looks back on this moment. So for this kid to say it right now so calmly, it's truly a threat to Rhaenyra and her whole side of the family. And so the scene ends with the battle lines drawn. One side, the Blacks, Daemon, Rhaenyra, her sons, and Corlys. On the other side, the Greens, Alicent, Aemond, Sir Criston, and Otto. Later, Alicent admits her mistakes to her father, fidgeting with her fingers. Her habit of picking at her fingernails has returned. But notice, as soon as Otto commends her dirty tactics, Alicent stops picking at her fingers and repositions her hands. And Laenor finally shows up.
I should have been there.
There should be our house words.
Yeah, Rhaenyra's reply really could apply to Laenor missing the birth of Joffrey, to Rhaenyra missing her mother's death, to Rhaenyra missing Alicent moving in on her dad. Really, all these two have done is miss stuff. Rhaenyra watches the massive green Vhagar depart with Aemond on her back, and 2 other dragons, Sunfire with Aegon and Dreamfire with Helaena, leaving the Greens with 3 dragons. The Blacks at this moment have Caraxes, Syrax, Arrax, Moraxes, probably Meleys, and probably Seasmoke. So things are pretty even. Rhaenyra tells Daemon that both of their lovers were lost to fire.
Fire is a prison. The sea offers an escape.
And so they decide to imprison themselves in fire and burn together. This episode began with a funeral and it closes with a wedding between Rhaenyra and Daemon. Not a ceremony in the Faith of the Seven, but a secret Valyrian wedding. A practice until now left pretty vague in Martin's text. All it really says is that spouses are bound, quote, by blood and fire and can be officiated by women. Here it's depicted by them cutting their palms and their lips, marking each other's heads with blood, sipping a cup and kissing so that their blood mixes. They also wear these culty traditional Valyrian robes. It's all very midsummery and unsettling. revealing. But it's interesting that they keep a maester present for this scene to justify how this marriage would make its way into history. Meanwhile, they give the escape of the sea to Laenor, which is interesting because in the text, Daemon truly does bribe Sir Carl to duel Laenor to death. Laenor's dead body left bleeding out in Spicetown, but the TV series twists Laenor's fate to allow him to live with Carl and Essos. But more importantly, it poses an interesting question for the fate of Seasmoke. But here, as long as Laenor remains alive, Seasmoke will remain bonded to him, which means that Laenor will live on as a wildcard option for the Blacks in the Dance of the Dragons to come. But for now, as he and Rhaenyra have told each other, the wise sailor flees the storm as it gathers. This is a breakdown of House of the Dragon episode 8, when the Phantom of the Red Keep gets one final nice family dinner in.
Feels good to laugh.
As always, let's break down this episode shot by shot for all the Game of Thrones nods, visual details, and deeper layers of meaning you might have missed. I watched this episode like the rest of you did, with the benefit of HBO's subtitles, so I actually caught every bit of dialogue that was said in this episode, and the super amazing metaphors and deeper implications of them. This episode is titled The Lord of the Tides, one of the titles of Corlys Velaryon, whose absence, fate, and succession is the catalyst for this episode. We open in Driftmark on the backside of his driftwood throne, which the camera cranes over in the specific way to make it look like it is sinking in frame, its influence waning into the sea. And as it descends out of frame, we see Rhaenys, the queen who never was, but her power and station rising this episode. Corlys's neck was slashed in an ambush from the Triarchy, who are now in an alliance with Dorne. Maester Kelvin reports that the Ravens came in from Evenfall, which is the seat of House Tarth, across Shipwrecker Bay from Storm's End. Rhaenys clocks that he is 3 days away, establishing some logistics for the geography and travel time. Driftmark and Dragonstone are islands that are 3 days by sea from the coastal Stormlands, which is roughly the same distance as King's Landing is, yet Dragon Riders can get to King's Landing or the Stormlands in less than a day's time. All this is gonna be very important for future characters who are gonna be racing to Storm's End, trust me. Daemon says Driftmark should go to him as a trueborn Velaryon, and he assumes that the crown will side with him.
But it's not a king who sits the Iron Throne these days, good sister. It's a queen.
Rhaenys doesn't flinch because, as the queen who never was, she knows that we live in a society where a queen who speaks from the throne only has so much power. On Dragonstone, construction cranes top the battlements, showing how Rhaenyra and Daemon are currently fortifying it. The camera swoops in toward this mountaintop, which is actually a dormant volcano that formed this island. Daemon descends a massive crack, bracing like Cusco and Pacha do. But this crack matches the general shape of Aegon the Conqueror's Valyrian steel dagger, Daemon being the treacherous master of sneaks, dancing along the edge of this prophetic blade. Daemon's recovering some dragon aids from a clutch left by Syrax, that's Rhaenyra's dragon. This clutch is a massive, steamy, fleshy mound that requires you to pick at it, presumably a sack left to protect all 3 of these eggs. Now, Rhaenyra previously offered one of these eggs for Aemond as part of her pitch to Alicent in episode 6, but Fire and Blood tells us that this latest clutch, this is the one right before the Civil War begins, produces one egg that will go to Rhaena to hatch into the dragon called Morning. The others will go to Rhaenyra and Daemon's sons, Aegon and Viserys. The Dragon Keeper's clothes might look familiar. That's because Daemon and Rhaenyra were wearing Valyrian robes just like this for their wedding ceremony last episode. Jacaerys works with Maester Gerardus, speaking in Valyrian the history of Aegon the Conqueror's arrival at the Blackwater Rush, establishing that city's namesake of King's Landing.
And landed at the Blackwater Rush.
Dranyut.
The end?
The mouth.
Yeah, Jason's translation leaves out the word dranyot, or mouth, maybe setting up another kind of blindness to mouths from this kid, like the mouth of a dragon. They're using the famous painted table of the Targaryen family, formed by Aegon the Conqueror. This is the one later used by Stannis, Baratheon, and Daenerys Targaryen in Game of Thrones, meaning that this table's gonna get moved from this great hall to the higher chamber, and explaining why when we saw Daemon and Mysaria in that chamber, it wasn't there. Jace is determined to get the Valyrian right.
Aegon ordered that the tree should be killed.
Felled. It is a related word.
Yeah, this distinction between killed and felled, also worth remembering, for felling a dragon from the sky is essentially killing its rider. Rhaenyra worries...
Rhaenys flames a cord. Surely she cannot be planning to back him.
No.
Yeah, Rhaenys flew her dragon Melis to King's Landing, but Rhaenyra and Daemon leave their dragons at home and travel by sea. Why do they do this? Well, maybe they don't want to pose a threat in their humble petition for Driftmark to go to where it was supposed to, whereas Rhaenys wants to exert her power. Really though, I just think Rhaenyra wanted to be able to stay with her babies, and Rhaenys was in more of a hurry to make the trip before Corlys' return. And as they arrive, we hear...
All hail Rhaenyra, House Targaryen, Princess of Dragonstone and heir to the Iron Throne, and her royal consort, Prince Daemon Targaryen.
Yes, this is Stefan Darklin, a key ally in the Kingsguard who will play a very important role for Rhaenyra next episode. Rhaenyra is stood up at the entrance the way she and Viserys were in episode 5 at Driftmark, but greeting them is Lord Caswell. This is the lord who congratulated her on the stairs in episode 6, another very important future ally. Inside the Red Keep, throughout the castle, the dragon orgy artwork has all been taken down. In the window is now a 7-pointed star of the Faith of the Seven. In past episodes, we saw how Alicent took down the orgy art in her own chamber while leaving it up around the halls, but now we see she has taken it down everywhere. So that now, if you notice, it only remains in Viserys' chamber. Another 7-pointed star looks down over the small council chamber, matching the huge necklace worn by Alicent. Lord Beesbury is still kicking around as Master of Coin, and his chains bear a few bees.
Bees?
Beesbury discusses the Septons wanting funds for a bronze bust to celebrate the Festival of the Mother, which Alicent cuts off, proving that she's not actually that pious of a worshiper of the faith. This is all for show, just as her prayers before the Mother statue at Rhaenyra's mother's altar back in episode 2 were also false. Alicent meets a Kingsguard.
Whatever it is, Sir Erik, you need to wait.
I'm Erik, Your Grace.
Of course. My apologies, sir.
Yes, this is Erik Cargill with an E, twin brother to Arik Cargill with an A. Just some ridiculous wordplay set up by George R. R. Martin. Alicent mixing up Erik will also set up Erik to follow Sir Darklin to support Rhaenyra next episode. Misspelling Erik's name and he will never forget! Viserys' model of Valyria has collected dust and cobwebs, incense wafting smoke into the air, looking like the literal ruins of Valyria after it burned down. Viserys rots in his bed, bandages covering his emaciated head and neck. They definitely use VFX to thin out Paddy Considine's body. His teeth are rotting too, which actually might be a result of the milk of the poppy that he's been guzzling down for the pain. Paddy Considine actually confirmed to Entertainment Weekly's West of Westeros podcast that Viserys is suffering from a form of leprosy. Also, let's remember, this character is only 52 years old, which is really just a numbers reversed from 25.
You're 25?
Yes. Can you believe it? Finally old enough to rent a car!
Rhaenyra introduces her and Daemon's sons, Aegon and Viserys, named politically, perhaps to give them a stronger claim to the throne someday, should anything happen to Jace, Luke, or Joffrey, and probably as a dig at Alicent naming her son Aegon. Alicent's maid, Talia, brings before her a serving girl Aegon assaulted named Diana. Diana grovels at her feet, and with Alicent's 7-pointed star necklace and her hair tied in a tight bun, she definitely does come off like the statue of the mother that we saw in the Sept in episode 2, which is ironic considering what Alicent does in this scene. Talia, meanwhile, who's had a bigger and bigger role on this series, is played by Alexis Raven, who is married to showrunner Miguel Sapochnik. Alicent makes Diana drink the same Plan B tea that Rhaenyra was given at the end of episode 4. Rhaenyra and Daemon worry about Viserys' care.
I believe we should also consult Maester Gerardus. Perhaps if he could see the king, he'd suggest a different.
Yes, Master Gerardus again is Rhaenyra's Dragonstone Maester. In the text, Gerardus was Rhaenyra's pick to succeed Grand Maester Mellos, but Alicent denies this in favor of her own Maester. Orwyle is the one who gets picked as a compromise. Alicent enters and notices the scar on Rhaenyra's arm from the dagger cut last episode, which Gerardus stitched up. You can actually see his stitches are part of that scar tissue. And I love how Rhaenyra instinctively raises her arm to the womb, both hiding the scar and protecting her young in Alicent's presence. Alicent defends her redecorating.
The emblems of the Seven serve only to guide us on an uncertain path, to remind us of a higher authority. But be assured the Father is just and commands me to forget the accusations you have held in this room today.
Alicent refers to the Father, the member of the Seven who represents justice, but also invokes her own literal father, the Hand, Otto. In the yard, Jace and Luke watch Aemon spar with Sir Criston. At first, Luke is too short to see over the shoulder, but when Aemon turns around, Luke suddenly remembers slashing out his eye. Aemon dodging Criston's Morningstar is especially effective considering with only one eye, his depth of perception would be limited. And damn, does actor Ewan Mitchell know how to use that one visible eye.
I don't give a shit about Tawnies. Nephews?
Yes, he says nephews before his eye creepily shifts over to their eye line, showing how he definitely spotted them in the crowd moments earlier during the fight. Vaemond marches in, flanked by guards with House Hightower sigils on their chest plate, showing his allegiance with the Greens. And when Otto and Vaemond and Alicent meet in the small council chamber, notice how those punch card balls that they used to mark their presence for official meetings are all still in the central bowl, showing us how this meeting is super off the books and shady. Rhaenys accuses Rhaenyra of having Laenor killed in front of the Weirwood tree. This is the same location a young Rhaenyra had to face Alicent's accusations in episode 4. But whereas then Rhaenyra crossed in front of the tree to turn the tables and give herself the high ground with the lies she told Alicent, here Rhaenyra is able to maintain the truth that she didn't actually kill Laenor, and she merely joins Rhaenys' side so that they both face the tree together. The two women equals. Rhaenyra presses Viserys on whether Aegon's dream was true, because if not, her burden is just too heavy. And Viserys mumbles,
My only child.
Yeah, Viserys has definitely had far more children at this point with Alicent, but mentally he's back in time to he and Rhaenyra's chat about Aegon's dream in episode 1. That is the conversation he loops back to at the end of the episode. And notice how a rat is scurrying on the Valyria diorama. Since it's been 6 years, it's probably not the same rat as the one Viserys saw at the end of episode 6. Rats only live 2 or 3 years. Viserys, despite his pain, refuses milk of the poppy now, on the morning of these petitions being called, showing how it truly was this narcotic that made him so incoherent. Just think about it. If you have leprosy at 52, it doesn't mean you also have dementia. So in the throne room, we start with this overhead shot of the Iron Throne that matches the overhead shot that we ended on that showed the Driftwood throne from above. Together, these back-to-back chairs, one faces eastward toward the sea, one faces westward toward the rest of Westeros. Vaemond claims that he's the closest in kin to Corlys's blood, omitting Jace and Luke, and Rhaenyra protests, but Alicent shuts it down.
You'll have chance to make your own petition, Princess Rhaenyra. Do serve Aemon the courtesy of allowing his to be heard.
Yeah, notice how to the left, Aegon releases a smug grin. And as Vaemond talks, notice there's a little moment where Daemon looks over to Rhaenyra and she gives him the subtlest nod, giving him total approval to cut off this guy's face in a second. But Viserys surprises everyone by showing up. Vaemond exchanges panicked looks with Otto and Alicent because his whole strategy of coming to King's Landing depended on Viserys staying bedridden. Because last time everyone saw each other, Viserys threatened anyone who claimed Rhaenyra's kids were bastards would lose their tongues. We also get a close-up a bit later of Rhaenys taking this in. This is the moment she shifts her position to be in favor of supporting the strong boys. Viserys wears his half mask made of gold with a teardrop ribbon down the cheek and curved edges, altogether evoking the molten crown for a king, worn by his descendant Viserys in the Game of Thrones era. As Viserys approaches the throne, on the right we see Sir Erik and Jace are the only ones to nod their heads at first. Viserys' crown falls off his head and Daemon picks it up for him. Apparently this fall was purely an accident during the take, and Daemon helping him might have been improvised by Matt Smith. And now we get this great moment where Daemon literally crowns his brother, and it becomes such a symbolic act of respect. The rogue prince acknowledging his brother's authority and his wisdom, even the wisdom to supplant him as heir. Rhaenys decides to side with Rhaenyra and her son, supporting Rhaenyra's plan to marry Jace to Baela and Luke to Rhaena, which would settle the Driftmark dispute because a generation later, Velaryon blood would be back on the Driftwood throne. Alicent and Otto looked gut-punched because it aligns Driftmark, the whole navy, Rhaenys' dragon Melis, and Baela with her dragon Moondancer, all with the blacks. And notice how in the scene, Rhaenys and Baela previously stood closer to the green side of the room, so now this is a major realignment. Vaemond, pissed, signs his own death sentence.
I will not see it ended on the account of this. Say it. Her children are bastards!
Yeah, I love a good scream from someone with nothing to lose.
If you want to stop me, you're gonna have to kill me!
And Vaemond even goes a step further.
And she is a whore. I will have your tongue for that.
He can keep his tongue.
Wow, okay, so Daemon's sword Dark Sister is Valyrian steel, so it definitely cuts clean. Though Daemon would have to have precise aim to leave Daemon's tongue intact like that, to have that quip planned. But my favorite reaction comes from Helena. Notice how she grabs the side of her head, as if she's worried hers will get removed too. Aemond, meanwhile, smiles at this, as if to realize, good, I'm not the only casualty in this civil war, and now the ante has been upped. Otto orders Daemon to be disarmed, but red armored soldiers appear behind him facing off with the King's Guard. I don't think anyone wants to take a blow from Dark Sister, and since Viserys' dagger was drawn, I guess it's just understood that Daemon was executing the King's order, though the scene ends with Alicent closer to the Iron Throne than Rhaenyra. Orwyle tells Rhaenys,
It is ill luck to look upon the face of death.
The stranger has visited me more times than I can count, Grand Maester. I assure you, he cares little whether my eyes are open or closed.
It's Westerosi tradition for the dead to be buried with stones on their eyes, those stones painted with open eyes, so that they can greet the stranger. Remember, Rhaenyra quipped to Laenor that I should have been there could be their house words. And like the two of them, Rhaenys is just tired of missing things. She's tired of death sneaking up behind her back to claim her loved ones. And now she wants to face death head on. At the family feast, Alicent prays,
May the mother smile down on this gathering with love. May the smith mend the bonds that have been broken for far too long. And to Vaemond Velaryon, may the gods give him rest.
Yeah, citing the smith is interesting as the mender of broken things, but also a forger of weapons. Also, ironically, it was a smith who sliced off Vaemon's head, but Matt Smith, Daemon, does, by breaking up the fight at the end of the meal, mend things at least temporarily. Viserys grosses everyone out with his empty eye socket to appeal to the warring sides to make peace, and Rhaenyra and Alicent seem to genuinely toast each other. Aegon continues to insult both Jace and Baela, but Jace is able to calm himself and toast Aegon and Aemond. Meanwhile, Helena just mutters to herself,
Beware the beast beneath the boards.
Yes, more prophecy from Bug Girl. First, we gotta just hear out her toast.
I would like to toast Vela and Raina. They'll be married soon. It isn't so bad. Mostly he just ignores you. Except sometimes when he's drunk.
Yeah, you notice there was a laugh in the background? That totally came from Matt Smith Damon, because of course it did. But let's talk about our prophecy here. Beware the beast beneath the boards. It could refer generally to the monster within the house, the rot of the family. It could refer to the skull of Balerion the Black Dread beneath them in the dungeons, and the trappings of Targaryen's false prophecy. Though, let's be honest, I think at this point even Helena doesn't even know what it means. But the dinner seems merry. At one point, Rhys Ifans does this insane golf clap that seems to genuinely crack up Olivia Cook. Might be calling back to that weird clap that Otto does when Viserys arrives in the hunting camp in episode 3. Viserys watches all this pleased, but more and more of the dancing overtakes him in frame, and he leans forward in pain, forcing his exit, and as he's carried out, timed perfectly carried in at the same time, is this roasted pig that is placed directly in front of Aemond, reminding Jace and Luke and all of us of their pink dread prank on Aemond. That's what pisses him off right now. So the insults come back out.
To the health of my nephews, Jace, Luke, and Joffrey, each of them handsome, wise, strong.
Jace takes offense to this.
I dare you to say that again.
Why? It was only a compliment. Do you not think yourself strong?
Yeah, the closed captions capitalize strong on that last one, underlining this as a deliberate insult. A fight breaks out, but Daemon breaks it up.
Wait!
All of you go, now.
Yeah, you can see the math in Aemon's eye. Is this the Uncle Daemon who lost to Sir Criston in the tourney, the knight I just beat earlier? Or is this the Uncle Daemon who just killed the guy with my name plus a V? Rhaenyra and Alicent have a warm goodbye.
Let me see the children home. I'll, return on Dragonback.
Yeah, she likely will, but probably not in a friendly way. We learn that Talia, Alicent's maid who helped her cover up Aegon's assault of Diana, and likely several others, reports to Mysaria, the White Worm. It's worth remembering at the end of episode 6, when Talia entered the room with Alicent and Larys Strong, Alicent sent Talia out. So Alicent's scheming with Larys might remain undisturbed from her vulnerabilities from Talia and Mysaria. Then on to the final scene, the camera floats into Viserys' chamber over his diorama of Valyria, much like we are from the point of view of the specter of death, the stranger coming for the king. Alicent gives Viserys milk of the poppy, making him delirious. And with his one eye closed, he mistakes Alicent for his earlier conversation with Rhaenyra. The guy is so obsessed with the future, he's literally unstuck in time right now.
You wanted to know if I believe it to be true. Aegon,
Our son.
his dream, the Song of Ice and Fire. It is true. What he saw in the north. The prince that was promised.
Prince Aegon.
To unite the realm against the cold and the dark. It is you. You are the one.
So this reminds us of Viserys' chat with Alicent by the bonfire in episode 3 at the Hunt, when he told her he was a dreamer but wasn't so confident about it. Now Alicent was never told specifically about Aegon's Song of Ice and Fire like Rhaenyra was, but now Alicent's misinterpretation of his ramblings as referring to her and her son Aegon equips Alicent with the same self-righteousness that Rhaenyra has been using to justify her actions. It's this show's way of justifying both women's decisions as coming from a futurist sense of duty. But again, as I said after episode 1, since Jon Snow, who would have become Aegon VI, he isn't the one to kill the Night King. He never sits on the Iron Throne as king. All of this is arguably based in false prophecy. The show is not about what will actually happen. It's about freaked out people who misread the signs. I love how we get this close up of the Valyrian steel dagger. Yeah, I love that subtle sound there. It personifies this dagger with a malevolent sentience, as if it's a kind of cursed relic that never should have made it out of Valyria and destined to doom any Targaryen who tries to use it. Perhaps only the hands of a Westerosi stranger, as Arya did become a disciple of the many-faced god. Can the dagger be properly wielded? Viserys reaches out his hand and he gasps his final words. Yes, he's envisioning Emma here. It's her face that he's caressing. Almost a way of saying that for him, the stranger might take the form of his first wife. Really, so few characters in George R. R. Martin's world die of old age or of natural causes like this, so this reminds me of the death of Viserys' descendant, Aemon, Maester Aemon, who gave up his titles to join the Night's Watch and could have become king, but instead let it pass to his brother, Aegon V, who died tragically at Summerhall. And now, based off this show, an argument could be made that Aemon might have also known Aegon's dream. On his deathbed, he called out to his baby brother, whom he had nicknamed Egg, and talked about his own dream.
Egg, I dreamed that I was old.
This is one of my favorite moments from Game of Thrones. I love it even more now, if you consider that Aemon might have also been a Targaryen dreamer, but his dream was that he would die an old man, and thus not be the Targaryen destined to unite the realm against the cold and the dark. Episode 9, The Green Council, where the beast beneath the boards is revealed, and it's what Larys Strong wishes he was when those boards are being walked by Alicent barefoot. Ugh. I'm gonna break down all the Game of Thrones nods and visual details you might have missed. First, an opening credits update. The shot that we've seen in past weeks of the two bloodline branches representing Viserys and Daemon now tilts back to show Viserys' dial for the first time in a while, showing it now flooded with blood to mark his death. Then we follow his bloodline to the green side, joining Alicent. Her dial we now see in close-up a 7-pointed star, and that blood spills downward to 4 dials with their 4 children. Aegon, which is a nude woman with a crown because he's a deviant. Helena, a spider because she's a bug girl. Aemond, a sapphire because under that eye patch is a huge sapphire in his eye socket. And further up on that wall behind them is the 4th kid, Darren, who has been left off screen this season, but confirmed by George R. R. Martin to have been sent to Old Town. He's gonna play a bigger role next season. But then a bloodline from brother and sister Aegon and Helena flows down to their 3 kids, Jaehaerys, Jaehaera, and Maelor. Jaehaerys and Jaehaera have a 6-fingered emblem because in Fire and Blood, George R. R. Martin said Jaehaerys boasted 6 fingers on his left hand and 6 toes on each foot. This is what you get with incest. Then an overhead passing shot shows Daemon's bloodline, which branches one way to where Baela and Rhaena are, but now forks another way toward Rhaenyra's dial. Daemon's blood flows in an aqueduct bridge high over Rhaenyra's stream, maybe suggesting him being a generation older than she is, and then their combined branch flows into 2 dials for their young sons, Aegon and Viserys. This episode opens on the Iron Throne, and all of the Red Keep vacant and dead. Viserys' life truly was the one keystone of peace keeping this whole castle together, and now he is gone. Composer Ramin Djawadi opens with piano, which is not common in Game of Thrones, as it's a more modern instrument, and Djawadi first used it in Game of Thrones for the Light of the Seven in the season 6 finale, which years ago I went deep into in the breakdown script that I wrote for the channel back in 2016 when I had to give my coworkers a crash course in music theory. And back then, Light of the Seven played over a morning montage. And this montage is even earlier in the morning, in the pre-dawn hours. What the Westerosi named hours would probably call the Hour of the Nightingale, which might be the birds that we hear. Child spies like this boy in Game of Thrones when deployed by Varys were called his little birds. This is the network of spies used by Otto since episode 4. If this kid saw Viserys die with his own eyes, according to Talia, it means that this kid either camped out in the king's chamber or would routinely sneak in there to check to see if the king was breathing. This opening music is called Lament, and note the notes that Djawadi uses as the boy descends the steps. I love it. Not only does melody follow the downward action, the last note there is an example of dissonance, when 2 tones clash to create a harsh, unpleasant sound. In this case, it sounds like seconds on a scale, in which the notes are just too close together on a scale to harmonize. So with just this single note, Djawadi communicates the structural tension throughout this episode among the characters. Because this episode, despite it's focused on the green side of the family, it presents several couplets who should harmonize normally, but here are squeezed too close together so that they clash. We see this with Sir Harold and Sir Criston, the brothers Erik and Arik, brothers Aegon and Aemond, and starting here in this scene with Alicent and Otto. Alicent sits behind her father, picking at her fingers, her longtime bad habit returning with her anxiety. Talia lights the candles in the window, which is likely her way of signaling Mazaria from across the city that the king is dead. In a small council meeting, Master of Laws Jesper Wilde rolls the attendance ball to Tywin Lannister. This ball is gold, fitting for House Lannister, suggesting each of these balls represent the house or person, and also signaling that Tywin Lannister is about to take over as Master of Coin. Otto says,
"We grieve for Viserys the Peaceful."
Viserys' whole legacy is really defined in retrospect by peace, and already that era is over. Notice how Otto keeps his ball in his hand for now, but he repeats Alicent's claim that Viserys, in his final words, wanted Aegon to be king.
Yes, there is much to be done, as we've previously discussed. Now,
And just with this placement of the ball, their plans proceed. Tylan says the treasury's gold is already going to be divided for safekeeping. Very big deal for Master of Coin Lyman Beesbury. He's supposed to be in charge of the treasury, but now this Master of Ships just crept into his department. Otto says that they need to send ravens to their allies at Riverrun and Highgarden. Riverrun refers to Lord Grover Tully, mentioned in that land dispute back in episode 6. He's a supporter of the Greens. And remember, Grover has a grandson named Elmo and great-grandsons named Kermit and Oscar. Those are their real names. All these conspirators are in on it, even Maester Orwyle. And Lyman Beesbury will not stand for it. He accuses them of treason and even killing the king. And Sir Kristen steps in.
I will have no part.
Down! The ball smashes into Lyman's eye socket. It really does seem like the show invented these balls just to have something to crush into Beesbury's face. Sir Harold Westerling reprimands Sir Kristen, whose job security is as inexplicable as his agelessness. Kristen lowers his sword first, but he only sheathes it, synchronized perfectly with the movement of Sir Harold. But Otto forces them all to finish the meeting with Lyman just bleeding out on the table, his pool of blood spreading out like the bleeding dials in the opening credits. Tylan says,
Storm's End is of concern. We may not assume the loyalty of Lord Boris, but he has 4 daughters, all of them unmarried. The right proposal...
Rhaenyra.
Storm's End was shown in episode 4, where we met Boros' father, Boromund Baratheon, who was strongly aligned with Rhaenys in the tourney in episode 1. This whole outreach to Boros will end in an epic conflict that we will likely see in the finale. Harold resigns from the King's Guard, but in the text, his succession is caused by his death, not his resignation. So, like Laenor Velaryon, this leaves another major player alive to play a role in the war to come. His resignation may recall Barristan Selmy dramatically giving up his Lord Commander title in Game of Thrones. Remember, Sir Barristan went on to serve a rival queen. Helena says,
It is our fate, I think, to crave always what is given to another. If one possesses a thing, the other will take it away.
She is talking about her kids, Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, and kids' natural envy, but also a deeper comment on human nature and the power within families. Like everything Helena says, we're gonna revisit this line later, trust me. I like how on the table are candle holders with 7 pointed stars, just further example of Alicent's redecorating based on the faith of the 7. Alicent asks,
Where is Aegon?
Not here.
He's not in his rooms.
Yeah, rooms? Aegon has multiple rooms, referring to a main bedchamber, but also other rooms where he does his more messed up stuff. Helena goes silent, just refocuses on her embroidery, which at first looks like a spider. Remember, her dial's sigil in the opening credits was a spider, but this thing only has 6 legs. So maybe an insect like a beetle or a snowfly, or maybe a spider, but she just hasn't added the final 2 legs yet. On Driftmark, she talked about spools of green and black, and spiders and weavers and embroiderers are archetypal symbols of fate. The kids are also playing with these toys that look like they were woven by Helena. It looks like a fly, or maybe a dragon, or maybe a dragonfly, or a bee, or maybe a firefly. I just think that there is an insectoid connection between Helena and Larys, remember, whose cane bore the sigil of a firefly. That 6-legged spider could be a symbol for Larys, a cunning operator and a weaver in his own right, with like 75% walking capacity due to his club foot. Helena snaps again what she muttered at dinner last episode.
There is a beast beneath the boards.
This episode confirms what she meant by that. Rhaenys' dragon Melly smashing up from the depths of the dragon pit. But Helena says it here not as a worried warning, but as a bitter accusation toward her mother, as if Alicent's decision to crown Aegon and to force Rhaenys' hand like that is really to blame for all this. Otto enlists Sir Erik and Sir Auric to find Aegon in the city. Erik is Aegon's sworn protector, but he let Aegon sneak out all the time, likely because he hates the pervy prince and doesn't care if something happens to him. The light of the 7 parallels heighten as Jawadi's score shifts into a new track called Fate of the Kingdoms. Jawadi now mixes in a fuller string section in this bell chime to underscore the resolve that Rhaenys feels after being locked in her chamber. Locking her in like that will prove to be a fatal error in the final sequence. The realm needs the doors opened for Rhaenys, not closed on her. Now in the text, Rhaenys had already fled King's Landing on Dragonback at this point. Remember, we didn't see her at the Last Supper, but this series keeps her around here to set up this climactic exit and to give Eve Best a bigger redemptive hero moment. In many ways, she is the hero of this first season, but like all heroes in Game of Thrones, one who makes a huge friggin' mistake. Kristen and Aemond look for Aegon on behalf of Alicent, who wants to control this succession in a way that doesn't end in Rhaenyra's bloodshed. Aemond says Aegon took him to the Street of Silk on his 13th birthday.
He said time to get it wet. Every woman is an image of the mother.
to be spoken of with reverence.
Now, it's hard to know how sincere Kristen is when it comes to his reverence to the faith, but when he speaks to the mother, he's at least thinking of Alicent, whom he also takes personal offense when people insult her character, and this informs his love for her is not the lust that he had for Rhaenyra, but something closer to what a son feels for his mother. When we first see Otto with the gathered lords, some are already kneeling at the start of that scene, suggesting that Otto had to make little argument for some to recommit their fealty from Rhaenyra to the Greens. But one lord refuses.
I am no oath breaker. I will not bend the knee.
This is Lord Merryweather, a house from the Reach. There's sigil of the cornucopia on his chest there. Lady Fell represents Fellwood from the Stormlands. Alan Coswell is the lord who greeted Rhaenyra last episode in the yard. Larys notices that he's the last one to bend the knee and senses his reluctance and disloyalty. Erik and Erik find a children's fighting ring. The kid's fingernails and teeth are ground down. When one kid swipes at another, you can see a trail of blood mist left in the air. It's just awful. But then again, this civil war to come will be fought most viciously among the children of these family factions. Erik nods to a silver-haired kid sitting off on the side.
Aegon, one of many I'd wager.
This kid is confirmed to be Gaiman Palehair, a character from the text, Aegon's bastard raised on the street of Silk, who plays a small and pretty sad role in the royal conflicts to come. So I really hope this series gives him a more active role with a name like Game On, because as of now, the implication is that Aegon is breeding kids in order to have a gambling advantage when they fight in this Pee-wee Fight Club, which is some truly depraved shit until you realize it's basically what we do with football. Alicent watches as the Silent Sisters wrap Viserys' corpse, and she holds a handkerchief to her nose because this rotting corpse would likely stink for the several hours that they kept him in this chamber. In the text, they keep his body in this chamber for several days. Alicent asks for Rhaenys' support, telling her that the Iron Throne was hers by blood and by temperament.
We do not rule, but we may guide the men that do. Gently, away from violence and sure destruction, and instead toward peace.
This recalls the Great Council of 1-1 at the start of this series, when the Lords of Westeros chose Viserys over Rhaenys. Again, an argument could be made that the real focal character of this first season is Rhaenys, because it all began with the throne being denied from her. Alicent reveals that they're keeping Rhaenys' dragon Melis there as a safeguard to keep Rhaenyra from attacking with her dragons. Alicent says,
A true queen counts the cost to her people.
And yet you toil still in service to men. Your father, your husband, your son. You desire not to be free, but to make a window in the wall of your prison.
So here the two women outline their values. For Alicent, it's the cost. For Rhaenys, it's the freedom. And Rhaenys' complete lack of care for human cost becomes clear in this final scene when she wipes out hundreds of civilians in her pursuit of freedom. Otto meets with Mysaria, realizing that she is the White Worm.
Or are you simply a further peel in this stinking onion?
Yeah, produce comes a lot in this exchange. The stinking onion, Mysaria says when Otto's plot ripens. And as of Aegon,
I could have killed him as easily as a wasp on fruit.
So we get this visual of a rotting vegetable replaced with a new fruit on the vine and flying insects threatening it all. Mysaria is a mistress of whispers in conflict with the whispers of Larys and his fireflies. Erik and Erik find Aegon hidden in an altar in this sept, which is not the sept of Baelor because that's not built until later in history. This is a different sept, suggesting that even this sept will be destroyed so that Baelor can build a new one later. With Alicent positioning herself as a devout worshiper of the Seven, the civil war of this series may have a religious war component. Erik fights Kristen, but Erik hangs back as Aemond restrains Aegon.
Let me go, or we'll find a ship and sail away, never to be found.
He has similar proposals Sir Kristen made to Rhaenyra in episode 5 to give up royal duty and just sail away to Essos. But now Kristen knows that wasn't realistic for him, so it's not going to be realistic for the future king. Otto seals a missive to send via Raven, sealing it with green wax. This is likely going to his allies back in Old Town, where his fourth grandchild, Darren, is. Alicent and Otto argue about the game they're both playing, how Otto moved her around like a piece on a game board, but now that she has Aegon, she is calling the shots, and she chooses peace with Rhaenyra.
My husband would have desired this mercy be shown to his daughter.
Your husband? Or you, his daughter's childhood companion?
This is especially insulting to Alicent, for it was Otto who pushed her out of the role of Rhaenyra's best friend and into the role of the king's new wife. Otto even twists that insult with his final words here.
You look so much like your mother in certain lights.
Remember, it was Otto who made Alicent wear her dead mother's dresses to better seduce Viserys. Larys, we learn, has to deal with Alicent to satisfy his foot fetish in exchange for intel. Remember, in episode 6, Alicent took off her shoes when she sat down with Larys, and now we know why. The scene starts with a close-up of Larys' club foot, so it's just kind of hard not to armchair psychoanalyze his malady and his fetish as being connected. He refers to Mysaria's spy network as spiders and weavers.
And this weaver watches me.
Yeah, and as we cut back to Larys, he is the one watching her here. He's the Weaver. Mysaria is the white worm, and her kids are the little birds. Really, only Helena has been likened with spiders and with weavers. I think he's trying to deflect attention from his own spy operation, and I think Helena might be connected to it. Larys says,
"When the queen dies, the bees fly without purpose."
Yeah, another instance of Larys' connection with flying insects. It's like he's the fly, proud of being able to evade the spider's web. Erik escorts Rhaenys through the courtyard past the hanging Lord Coswell and through the dungeons past the skull of Balerion. Rhaenys stops to take in this beast beneath the boards, getting inspiration for the power move that she will make at the end of the episode. Mysaria's home burns, but we don't yet know if Mysaria herself is dead. In the dragon pit, a septon prepares for the anointing ceremony. A scroll is unfurled with his prayer script, including the refrain of 7 above, and requests to each member of the 7 to bless and protect them in various ways. The second paragraph references Aegon's conquest and how their enemy's blood runs into the soil, which is an interesting contrast with the blood rivers that flow in the opening titles imagery. They don't flow into the dirt, but onto these stone surfaces. But the blood of their enemies being in the soil means that every tree, flower, and fruit in Westeros is fed by the memory of their enemies, giving a deeper context to the weirwood trees with their blood-red leaves watching these dragon lords in judgment. The third paragraph references a cataclysm visited on the Sept. This is referring to the burning of the Sept of Remembrance during the Faith Uprising, in which Maegor the Cruel used Balerion to burn the Sept, and on its ashes, he built this dragon pit where they now stand. So this pit is a begrudging hallowed ground for the Septons, and one could argue, cursed to the Targaryens. The crown laid out is not Viserys' crown, the one also worn by Jaehaerys, but Aegon the Conqueror's iron crown with its rubies, the one last worn by Maegor the Cruel. But Alicent is trying her best to legitimize Aegon II's ascension with symbolism of the Conqueror, his crown, his sword Blackfire, and his dagger. Alicent gives Aegon this dagger in the carriage, and simply holding this dagger seems to hypnotize Aegon with a sense of destiny. Alicent begs him not to put Rhaenyra to the sword, but he seems not to hear her, similar to how Cersei and Sansa will beg the boy king Joffrey to show mercy to Eddard Stark, and Joff will ignore the wailings of women. Aegon takes the walk. Yeah, Jawadi uses the same King's March theme that he used for Viserys' long walk last episode. The Septon who anoints Aegon is Septon Eustace. This is the Septon attached to the Red Keep from this point forward during the Civil War, and the one whose historical account forms the basis of the in-universe history of Fire and Blood. Kristen is the one who crowns Aegon.
The crown of the conqueror, passed down through generations.
And with this crown, Aegon does fulfill Viserys' dream that he told Emma back in episode 1.
The dream. It was clearer than a memory. Our son was born wearing Aegon's iron crown.
And what will follow in the wars to come is what he dreamt, the sounds of thundering hooves and the splintering shields. One by one, Aegon's family members bow their heads in respect, but Aemond only gives the slightest nod. King Aegon II basks in glory, and Alicent allows herself a relieved smile, but it really just seems like that smile is the fateful trigger. Rhaenys' dragon, Melis, explodes out of the pit beneath. And I love how when she roars, you can hear a distinctive female cry there. Rhaenys walks the dragon up to the dais, and Alicent steps forward, putting Aegon behind her. Aemond and Helena, though, interestingly, hold firm. Aemond has faced down a dragon before, the largest dragon in the world, Vhagar, and Helena, as a dreamer, is empowered in this moment. She now knows that she truly is a prophetic dreamer, and because she has visions of the future, she knows that she's not going to die here. Now again, Rhaenys and Melis crashing Aegon's coronation is not in the text. This was unique to the series. Rhaenys could have ended the conflict here just by torturing everyone on the stage, but chooses not to, which I guess is a good thing for us, because otherwise there would be no more show after this. But within the context of the story, Rhaenys just made a fateful mistake that would cost countless more lives in a civil war that she knows will follow. Eve Best told Vulture in an interview that Rhaenys has respect for Alicent as a woman and a mother, and she said it's an intelligent choice not to torch a whole bunch of innocent people in the room, that it's not her battle. The writer of this episode was asked by The Hollywood Reporter how Rhaenys justifies that with killing a bunch of civilians by even busting out, and the writer said, "It's Game of Thrones, civilians don't count." But you know, it's not also Game of Thrones, it's House of the Dragon, you can make different choices. You don't have to have dragon riders wantonly killing civilians without provocation, but whatever. But this beast beneath the boards is just the start of the family's reckoning. A false sense of duty and destiny that curses every single one of these Targaryens. Arguably, Rhaenys wouldn't have had the idea to do this had she not passed the skull of Balerion beneath the castle of the Red Keep. And Aegon II wouldn't be so fortified in his resolve if this coronation wasn't embarrassed like this. And had he never been enchanted by Aegon's cursed dagger. With every generation, that message just gets further and further bastardized. This is a breakdown of House of the Dragon Dragon episode 10, the season finale, The Black Queen. This finale is exactly why I don't bring my bitey rescue dog to the dog park. Damn it, darling, now we gotta run before Karen Gulch throws you in her bike basket. Let us break down this epic finale frame by frame for the Game of Thrones connections, easy to miss details, and deeper layers of meaning. Quick detail about the opening credits. When we see the stone dials for Rhaenyra and Daemon's kids, Aegon the Younger and Viserys, there is not a third dial for Visenya, even though past instances have shown dials for unborn descendants waiting for the bloodline to reach them, already predestined on that stone. But since Visenya was never going to live, there is no dial for her. We open on Aegon the Conqueror's painted table showing the northern part of Westeros, the wall and the castle at the west end of the wall, Shadow Tower, basically the northwestern tip of the known world from the Targaryens' perspective. The camera glides down past Winterfell, White Harbor, the Barrowlands, Moat Cailin, the Neck, and other towns. This is essentially how every episode of Game of Thrones would begin, the camera gliding down over a map of Westeros. Rhaenyra's second son, Luke, runs his hand across Driftmark and restates his hesitation to take over Driftmark as Lord of the Tides, something he told Corlys back in episode 7.
If I'm the Lord of Driftmark, it means everyone's dead.
For Luke, his role as a pawn in the schemes of the adults has always haunted him. For him, with duty comes death. Rhaenyra says,
"We don't choose our destiny, Luke. It chooses us."
Again, coming back to the stone dials in the opening credits, each dial for every living descendant is preset in stone before the bloodline even reaches it. All of this is part of a destined path. The bloodline chooses the person. Rhaenyra promises Luke that she will prepare him for his duties as her father prepared her. Oh no. This scene takes on a new layer of irony after the episode's ending. Rhaenyra cannot possibly prepare Luke for his bloodshed that's to come, just as Viserys couldn't possibly prepare Rhaenyra for the treachery that would engulf the realm after his death. Sir Lawrence Marbrand, one of the few knights of the Seven Kings Guard we haven't met yet until this point, announces Rhaenys has arrived with Meleys. Rhaenys gets right to the news of Viserys' death, and she continues,
"There is more. Aegon has been crowned as his successor."
Yes, Rhaenyra winces from a contraction right as she hears the news of Aegon supplanting her. But even from the moment Rhaenys had said there is more, notice how Rhaenyra gets hit with a bit of the dizzies as if she is bracing for that other shoe to drop. It's fun to watch Daemon in the scene. Clearly all he can think about is how someone murdered his brother from the moment he sniffed that milk of the poppy in Viserys' cup in episode 8. We should note that Lyman Beesbury also jumped to the conclusion of regicide. Rhaenys says,
"The High Septon crowned Aegon in the Dragon Pit. I witnessed it myself just before I fled on Meleys."
Yeah, it seems like just the mention of Aegon's name triggers another early contraction. The rushed crowning of her half-brother syncs with the rushed crowning of her child. And I love Ramin Djawadi's music here. Yeah, it sounds like Djawadi's using some rock distortion, maybe some electric cello, electric upright bass. Recalls Hans Zimmer's music for Inception. The opening zhong zhong boom boom. The opening booms of Edith Piaf's song slow down to convey the countdown of a dream coming to an end. For Rhaenyra, time is also running out, and Viserys' dream of the dragons roaring as one is also coming to an end. Now, Daemon, who has spent most of this season silent, motor mouths through some commands in this finale than he does in the entire other 9 episodes put together.
If the Greens attack now, it will be by stealth, not directly. We don't have enough men to surround the island, but we can make ourselves appear stronger than they are.
Throughout all this, Rhaenyra's pained screams echo through the castle, distracting these lords from trying to carry out business. Now, by comparison, the Red Keep is more closed off and segmented, so the physical state of the sovereign there can be kept hidden. But here, everyone in Dragonstone knows everything. It's that open concept interior design, it always gets you. Also, Daemon is echoing his brother Viserys about the true nature of Targaryen power. It's a trick, it's an illusion, casting a large shadow to make your enemies think you're more of a threat than you actually are. Jace and Luke spar on the beach as Jace goes way too hard on his younger brother, showing how Luke is just a sweet summer child. He is not prepared for this war. The two boys are brought in front of Rhaenyra while she is in labor because she is worried she might die the way her mother Emma did, and she wants to make sure Jace knows that he is her heir, whatever happens to her. He asks,
"Where is Daemon?"
I don't know. Gone to madness. Gone to plot his war.
Yeah, plot his war. Rhaenyra recognizes that Daemon was already looking for any excuse to wage war against the Greens. Daemon's council continues to scheme with plans to reach out to allies and the Crownlands, including House Darkland, that's Sir Stefan's house from Duskendale, House Massey from Stonedance, and House Bar Aemon from Sharp Point. Daemon plans to fly to Riverrun to secure House Tully, and he refuses to check in with the Maester and ignores Jace at first. You think about it, trying to stage his own coup until he is called out. Now, the most vocal lord at all these meetings, other than Daemon, is Bartimos Celtigar, Altagar, the wealthy Lord of Claw Isle in the Crownlands and a key member of Rhaenyra's council going forward. Daemon takes Luke to force Sir Laurent and Sir Stefan to reaffirm their allegiance to Rhaenyra. And in this scene, you can see the burns on Daemon's neck, which Daemon actually received when he got hit with that flaming arrow during the prior battles for the Stepstones back at the beginning of episode 3. Just love the continuity there. Daemon uses Caraxes to intimidate the knights. Yeah, notice how Caraxes slips a little on that boulder. Just a reminder that these dragons are not perfect, majestic, godly creatures. They're awkward, somewhat clumsy oafs who are too big for this world and not entirely in control. And so we should not expect them to perfectly obey their boyish master's commands in the final battle. Daemon says that if the knights declare their loyalty to the usurper now, they'll get a clean death, but if they turn their coats later,
know that you will die. Screaming.
And we cut to Rhaenyra screaming, herself close to death. Her labor pains intercut with these shots of a dragon. We think it might be Syrax, but it actually might be another one, what she envisions her unborn child to be. Because in the text, the baby Visenya is a stillborn as it is in the show, but the biased account of Mushroom claims that the child was born with dragon-like birth defects, including a stubby scaled tail. Here, Rhaenyra does scream, "Get it out!" which is a slight change from her line in the book, "Monster, monster, get it out." Obviously, the scene is horrifying and extremely uncomfortable to watch. I'm not gonna go into the visuals of it, but I will say it looked like the umbilical cord was wrapped around the throat, as opposed to this baby having some dragon-like birth defects. But Rhaenyra's fear of giving birth to a literal dragon does remind us of her mother Emma's line in episode 1.
After this miserable pregnancy, I wouldn't be surprised if I hatched an actual dragon.
It is a reminder that dragons and dreams are the strength of this family, but they're also their own downfall. The child's remains are burned on an altar in the same spot where Rhaenyra and Daemon were married in the secret ceremony at the end of episode 7. Sir Erik Cargill arrives and presents King Viserys' crown, meaning he must have stolen it from the corpse, perhaps during Aegon's crowning in the dragon pit or in the aftermath. In the books, it's Sir Stefan Darkland who steals the crown. He reaffirms his Kingsguard vows, and Daemon takes the crown, looks at it closely. Notice to the right of the Targaryen sigil is the lion of House Lannister. On the other side of it, which we see when it's on her head, is the Tully fish and the Baratheon stag. All the major houses are represented on this crown. This was a crown worn by King Jaehaerys. Daemon crowns Rhaenyra just as he placed this crown on the head of his brother in episode 8. In both cases, you do get the sense that Daemon wanted this crown for himself, but just had to resign to hand it off to another. Daemon kneels, followed by everyone else, but not Rhaenys. She later says she must wait for her lord husband Corlys to decide the fealty of House Velaryon before she can bend the knee to anyone. But you also get the sense that as the queen who never was, she's always been queen in her own mind. Candles are lit on a tray that slid underneath the painted table to illuminate the dragon glass from beneath. Like Aegon the Conqueror's dagger, secrets were hidden by pyromancers that are only revealed by fire. Queen Rhaenyra is marched in, and she takes the same route through Dragonstone that Daenerys does in that Game of Thrones season 7 long walk promo. Remember how great that was? That was like the first footage of Game of Thrones we got after the season 6 finale. Might have been the last time everyone still liked Game of Thrones. Oh, the nostalgia. So the painted table illuminates, and we see the south end of it only extends to the Stormlands. Dorne was not included on the Conqueror's table because it was the one part of the continent that he was unable to conquer. I also love the Mufasa-ness of this. Everything the light touches is our kingdom. Jace assumes the role of placing the figurines on the map. On Dragonstone, he places the Targaryen sigil, the tallest one that's painted black. On King's Landing, the Hightower lighthouse painted green. As Rhaenyra walks in, she awkwardly has to signal her escort to stop following her. She's new to this, and she's still figuring out the protocol of moving like a ruler. We learn that Rhaena is Rhaenyra's cupbearer, as Rhaenyra was a cupbearer to Viserys. It's a very important role because Rhaenyra includes Rhaena at the table, along with her sister Baela. Moves that she clearly made to appeal to Rhaenys, whose support she is still angling to secure. Rhaenyra proves herself a very competent ruler in the way that she handles Rhaenys. For the houses already declaring their names, they mark with black figurines on the table. For their enemies, they mark with the green figurines. And for the ones that they are targeting as flippable, like Winterfell, Riverrun, the Eyrie, and Storm's End, they mark with golden ones. Daemon does some dragon math for us.
They have 3 adults, by my count. We have Syrax, Caraxes, and Meleys. Your sons have Virmax, Arax, and Tyraxes. Baela has Moondancer.
Yeah, I love that reaction shot on Rhaenys, having her dragon conscripted without her consent, just like the Greens tried to do to her in King's Landing last episode. Daemon goes on.
There are also unclaimed dragons. Seasmoke still resides on Driftmark. Vermithor and Silverwing dwell on the Dragon Mound. Still riderless. Then there are the 3 wild dragons, all of whom nest here.
Yes, confirming Laenor's dragon Seasmoke remains on Driftmark. It did not follow him to Essos. Vermithor, the Bronze Fury, was the dragon of Jaehaerys first. Silverwing was the dragon of Jaehaerys' wife, Alysanne, the dragon she famously flew to Winterfell and the Wall. Also, yes, you probably noticed we cut to Rhaena right after Daemon says some dragons are riderless because she remains the one of these kids not to be bonded with a dragon for now. So Daemon adds it up, 13 dragons for the blacks, 4 for the greens. He says 4, even though he only mentioned 3. The 4th dragon is Tessarion, the she-dragon that is ridden by Alicent's 4th child, Darren, who is left off screen this season but confirmed to have been in Old Town all this time. We're gonna meet him in season 2. Daemon says,
"We need a place to gather, a toehold, large enough to house a sizable host. Here at Harrenhal, we cut off the west, surround King's Landing with the dragons, and we could have every greenhead mounted on spikes before the moon turns."
Harrenhal was where the season began, in that Great Council of 101. Now it's interesting how Harrenhal is written on the map, but not the God's Eye Lake or any of the geographic features. Only the cities are labeled. I think it shows how the Conqueror didn't really care as much about the land or the rivers. We did learn a couple episodes back that he just cut down all the trees. Makes sense because on Dragonback, he could soar over all of this. He really only cares about the people and their castles. Sir Erik announces Otto's arrival.
A ship has been sighted offshore. A lone galleon flying a banner of a 3-headed green dragon.
Now, we do not see these ships, but the description tells us how the Greens have co-opted the Targaryen sigil of the 3-headed dragon, but instead of it being black or crimson, they made it green, which fittingly is also the color of their largest dragon, Vhagar. Daemon meets Otto on the same bridge where they faced off in episode 2, and just like in that encounter, Rhaenyra arrives late after the others on Dragonback, landing Syrax behind Otto's group and walks through these knights completely unafraid. Targaryen rulers traditionally arrived at their coronations on Dragonback, but that is something they could not manage for Aegon last episode, so Rhaenyra is proving she has a symbolic power of her own. Otto offers his terms, but Rhaenyra calls him a traitor and tosses his hand pen. Orwell produces a message sent from Alicent, the page that Rhaenyra tore out of the history book in episode 1 in the Godswood, the one describing the warrior queen in Nymeria, princess of the Rhoynar, who conquered Dorne and famously burned her fleet to keep her people in Westeros and promote peace. This page reads, "Lashed together with ropes and cables, Nymeria's fleet dispersed at the coming of the first storms, sweeping them across the sea, east, west, and south, into something invested pocket at the Basilisk Isles." Now, the Basilisk Isles are a group of islands in the Summer Sea off the coast of Sotheros. That's the southern continent of this world. Another reminder that HBO does have in the works a Nymeria spinoff, so all the mentions of Nymeria this season is probably setting that up. But with this page, Alicent is using not her own words, but a memory these two women shared when they were still friends, and a historical example of a warrior queen bravely dismantling her most prized weapon, her fleet, in the name of peace, as she prays Rhaenyra will do by restraining her use of dragons. Daemon again proposes fire against fire.
It's no easy thing for a man to be a dragon slayer. But dragons can kill dragons, and have.
And this line is spoken with Luke centered most in the background, who ends up being the first victim of dragon versus dragon conflict in the Civil War. But Rhaenyra echoes Daenerys, at least season 7 Daenerys.
When dragons flew to war, everything burned. I do not wish to rule over a kingdom of ash and bone.
And so Daemon snaps. Rhaenyra clears the room. We should note that all these conversations around the Song of Ice and Fire only come up when maesters and other witnesses are not in the room, explaining why they would not have shown up in the biased text of Fire and Blood. Daemon chokes his wife.
My brother was a slave to his omens and portents. Anything to make his feckless reign appear to have purpose. Dreams didn't make us kings. Dragons did.
Yeah, Daemon's perfectly inverting what Viserys told Rhaenyra, that dragons were not the root of their power, Daenys the Dreamer was, and dreams are. And Rhaenyra realizes...
I never told you. Does he?
Yeah, she's rubbing it in that Daemon was never seriously considered to be Viserys' heir, otherwise Viserys would have shared Aegon's dream with him. All this time Rhaenyra had assumed that Daemon must have known it too, and only now she realizes that she has this over him. Rhaenys tells Corlys,
"A stranger casts a long shadow over this family."
Now in episode 8, Rhaenys refused to look away from Vaemon's corpse, preferring to stare at the stranger directly. Remember, in the Game of Thrones era, House Velaryon isn't really around. We did go into the series knowing that we would be following a house stalked by the stranger. Corlys wants to retire and declare for no one, but Rhaenys says Rhaenyra is the one person showing restraint in all this. So when Corlys and Rhaenys join the council, they both now wear black to match Rhaenyra, both in mourning for Viserys, you could say, but also to telegraph their allegiance to the Blacks. Baela and Rhaena join Jace and Luke at the end of the table, which seems very choreographed, probably to show everyone in the room the future of the Black succession through the Velaryons. We should note this choreography also likely involved having Daemon sit out of this council meeting to avoid his hot-headedness turning off Corlys or Rhaenys. Rhaenyra hopes for the support of houses Aeryn, Stark, and Baratheon.
Hope
is the fool's ally.
Both Arryn and Baratheon share blood with my house.
Just a reminder that the Arryns married into the Targaryens through Rhaenyra's mother, Emma, who died in the first episode, and the Baratheons have always been close with the Targaryens, first through Orys Baratheon, Aegon the Conqueror's hand, and his granddaughter, Jocelyn Baratheon, married Viserys' uncle Aemon, and their daughter was Rhaenys. Corlys glances back at his betrothed grandchildren and swears support for Rhaenyra, calling her Your Grace. And from his point of view, notice how Rhaenys stands directly behind Rhaenyra. So Corlys isn't just bowing to the queen, he's also bowing to his wife, the queen who never was. And Corlys announces a big strategic advantage that they have won control over the Stepstones and can blockade shipping lanes to King's Landing. Now, this is called the Gullet. This is a body of water between Dragonstone and Driftmark and Massey's Hook, connecting the Blackwater Bay to the Narrow Sea. Rhaenys offers to patrol the Gullet with Meleys. Jace offers to send himself and his brother to the Eyrie to King's Landing and to Storm's End. And notice, as he does, Luke looks like he's about to shit bricks. So Rhaenyra agrees. She sends Jace to talk with Lady Jane Arryn, this is the Lady of the Vale, whom Daemon in episode 5 at the wedding said he wanted to talk about his claim of Runestone. In the book, Lady Jane flat out denies Daemon. And then Jace will go on to the younger Cregan Stark at Winterfell. We'll likely meet both Cregan Stark and Lady Jane in season 2. Now, Rhaenyra advises her sons.
It's been said that as Targaryens, we are closer to gods than to men. The Iron Throne puts us a touch closer, perhaps. But if we are to serve the Seven Kingdoms, we must answer to their gods.
She makes them both swear on a religious text of the faith of the Seven to not fight. Now, Aegon the Conqueror adopted the faith of the Seven for the Targaryen family to make it easier for the noble houses of Westeros to accept Valyrian invaders. Despite what would happen, the family's tradition of polygamy and incest conflicting with the Septons. This is similar pragmatism coming from Rhaenyra here. However, we should note that the Starks are more aligned with the old gods. 3 dragons depart Dragonstone, Vermax in front with Jace riding, and then I believe that's Meleys, Rhaenys' dragon, because I think you can see her white hair there. And then in the back, the noticeably smaller Arrax, ridden by Luke. You can actually see Luke nervously turning his head around to get one last look at Dragonstone, and you cannot help but worry about this small dragon and this kid as they head into storm clouds. During all this, Daemon heads into the Dragonmont, singing a Valyrian lullaby as he courts Vermithor. Again, this was Jaehaerys' dragon, and it's interesting for Daemon to be the one courting Vermithor, because in the book, it's another character who does this. Also, Targaryens don't commonly have multiple dragons at the same time, except Daenerys with her 3 dragons, though she was a weird exception in all kinds of ways. Maybe Daemon saw Caraxes slipping earlier and thought, sorry old pup, time for me to level up so I can match Vhagar. Now, as to why Daemon is singing, him courting his grandfather Jaehaerys' dragon takes us back to the opening scene of the season, the Great Council at 101, presided over by Jaehaerys at Harrenhal. And Jaehaerys likely also knew Aegon's Song of Ice and Fire. So now Daemon may be singing his own Song of Ice and Fire as he claims another part of Jaehaerys' legacy. And you can see this with Daemon reflected in Vermithor's eye and Vermithor reflected in Daemon's eye. The poster of the series made the shape of the dragon eye, Aegon's dagger. So this is kind of Daemon writing his own Song of Ice and Fire. We return to Storm's End. In the lightning, Luke sees Vhagar's massive bulk outside the castle walls, looming over the battlements like freaking Godzilla, its jowls hanging low. Inside, Aemond is already chatting with Boros' daughter, Maris. The other 3, Cassandra, Ellen, and Floris, are literally lined up as if Boros is auctioning them off to any prince who walks in. Boros calls for a maester to read Rhaenyra's message since he's illiterate. Get Lea Michele a maester. Since Luke is already betrothed, Boros sends him away. Before he goes, Aemond taunts Luke, calling him Lord Strong, neither prince nor Velaryon, and reminds him of his debt.
I want you to put out your eye.
Aemond One Eye keeps a massive sapphire in his eye socket, showing us why his opening credits dial has included a sapphire. So while Rhaenyra and Alicent have an understanding, at least for now, their sons still bear the scars from their youths. It was Luke who brought in the pink dread, Luke who cut out Aemond's eye, Luke who laughed at the roasted pig in episode 7. He said this coming. And in episode 4, in this same Storm's End round hall, we saw 2 young lords from Bracken and Blackwood draw swords on each other, spilling blood, though the younger lord was victorious there. So if you don't know what happens, this really does feel like it could go either way. But Boros forbids fighting inside the keep, but that doesn't stop Aemond from pursuing. Actually, in the book, it's Maris Baratheon who eggs on Aemond. She asks, did Lucerys remove your balls as well as your eye? Just why you gotta say anything, Maris? When Luke greets Arrax in the storm outside, now when the lightning strikes, no Vhagar is visible. It's Luce, waiting for him in the shadows. Like in Jaws or any great horror film, the monster is scariest when you don't know where it is. Director Greg Yutanis nailed this sequence with excellent usage of lighting, textures, and sound sound design. Setting heavy VFX sequences like this during rainstorms is always a smart move, despite the difficulties to the actors and the production crew, because lightning allows flashes to show the action, and water allows the surfaces to reflect the light better so that we can see everything more clearly, and the textures look more realistic that way. That's partly why the T-Rex attack in Jurassic Park and the Battle of Helm's Deep and Two Towers are so gripping and vivid. You see this usage of lighting and texturing, especially in this real wide shot as RX flaps away from Storm's End. One lightning strike shows us the tower, and then a few more reflect different parts of RX's body and wings to show it slowly moving away, like too slow. We're all watching this feeling, Jesus Christ, hurry, get the f out of there. And the storm also serves a practical function. Luke is sprayed with rain, making it impossible for him or for RX to see forward. As Luke looks around, dizzied, looking for Vagar behind him, Vagar is finally revealed, looming above them like a freaking Star Destroyer. This huge dragon passes completely overhead before Luke even sees it. And then Vagar rushes directly at them. Yeah, notice how there was no music before this point, just the terrifying sounds of the storm. But right as lightning reveals Vagar's form rushing at us, we hear this percussive clash and Jawadi's music kicks in. Aemond laughs and he taunts, "I see you!" recalling that creepy glance he gave Luke in the courtyard in episode 8. Luke takes RX through a narrow canyon where Vagar can't follow, and we get a close-up of Vagar's reins, the netting of rope that's used to climb up onto the dragon. A reminder that these loose ropes are really the only way Aemond can tug at Vagar to pilot the dragon and control it, and when ropes are wet, they're more elastic and less likely to pull taut. Luke loses control of RX, who sprays fire at Vagar. Big mistake, but an interesting layer of context that wasn't in the book. Aemond and Luke here do not want their dragons to kill each other, whereas in the book, Aemond isn't playing games, he is filled with pure homicidal rage and vengeance. This isn't a dance between the boys anymore, it's a dance of the dragons. Luke flies high above the storm clouds, and briefly he gets this heavenly view of it all, but it's a false victory. Oof, damn. And again, they deliberately include Aemond screaming, "Vagar, no," which is a huge contrast to the book Aemond, who goes even further to desecrate Luke's remains afterward. And he could just make out Luke's body falling among the bloody pieces of RX. We're reminded of Luke's brother Jace struggling to translate the High Valyrian words for killed versus felled, and not knowing the word for mouth. So Aemond screaming no is another example of this series softening these characters, making them less treacherous and bloodthirsty than they are in the text, so that we as viewers can better empathize with them as characters on several seasons of a TV series. You could read this as the producers learning lessons from Daenerys in the final episodes of Game of Thrones, who willfully committed war crimes on Dragonback, when just having Daenerys scream "Drogon, no!" as Drogon torches King's Landing might have been more true for her character. And I would argue make the conflict between her and Jon Snow in the final episode even more interesting, because he wouldn't be killing a freaking evil war criminal, he'd be killing someone whose power is just too out of control. But thematically for this series, House of the Dragon, I like how it keeps the focus on the dragon power as the chaotic threat that makes it impossible for even the most rational leaders to succeed. And it proves Viserys right, that dragons are too big for this world, and the idea that Targaryens can control dragons is a complete myth. The Targaryens are just lucky that dragons will let them ride them. This episode ends on Daemon telling Rhaenyra the news, and she stumbles a bit. Notice she clutches her stomach, as if that pain of losing her child is hitting her all over again. Also notice in the scene, Rhaenyra is not wearing the crown. She's reacting to this not as a queen here, but as a mother. And as she turns around in rage, any negotiation with the Black Queen is off the table. A painted table of Westeros, now lit from below, making it look like the continent of Westeros is on fire. And soon it will be. Okay, here we are 2 years later, and on the other side of these 10 episodes, you probably noticed that there were some alterations made from the book, and they are fascinating to track. When you compile these and group them by character, just some really interesting patterns emerge that illuminates the real agenda of this show, and some lines of theory crafting and guesswork that are not at all part of reading the book, but are entirely new for the series, and are going to be some of the most fun things to talk about in season 2 and beyond. I'm only going to be covering plot points from season 1 of the show though, so don't worry, no spoilers here. Okay, change number 1, Aegon's dream. Obviously from the premiere episode, the show introduces the idea of Aegon the Conqueror's dream, the Song of Ice and Fire, an apocalyptic vision of an icy threat coming from the north that will end all men. Viserys shares this dream with Rhaenyra shortly before he names her heir in episode 1, and it's encoded into Aegon's Valyrian steel dagger, hidden by pyromancers, revealed only by fire. This secret dream is not in Fire and Blood. It's a complete invention for the show, but the show uses this to motivate Rhaenyra's character drive for the Iron Throne, as she thinks it's her destiny to save the realm from this doom. Otherwise, she might not want the Iron Throne. Alicent does not know this dream, and in fact, the show also changes Viserys' death scene to feature Alicent misunderstanding his deathbed rambling about his vision to think that it's a sign for their shared son, Aegon. Daemon doesn't know this dream either, and dreams are significant to the Targaryen family because their very existence was made possible by their ancestor, Daenys the Dreamer, foreseeing the doom of Valyria and urging the family to escape Valyria to Dragonstone before the volcanoes destroyed that civilization. And introducing the concept of an inherited dream allows us to re-examine every Targaryen in this series and in the Game of Thrones series to wonder who else might have been a dreamer, or who might have been told this dream by their parents. On this show, we have to wonder if Rhaenyra has already told this to Jace, especially since in season 2 he will visit Cregan Stark in the north and look beyond the wall. Like, will Jace tell this to Cregan? Will this dream also affect future Stark decisions? Was the Mad King a dreamer? Is that what drove him mad? Burn them all! Was Maester Aemon in Game of Thrones a dreamer? Remember his line, "I dreamt I was old"? Did Rhaegar Targaryen know this dream before he was killed by Robert Baratheon? It's just such a fascinating concept to think about. All right, change number 2, Daemon impotency. Compared to the version of Daemon Targaryen depicted in Fire and Blood and the Rogue Prince, who was a truly reviled rat bastard, Matt Smith's depiction on House of the Dragon is a far more ambiguous, active character who's really stymied by his own impotency. Several things that Daemon is attributed to saying in the text, we do not actually see Matt Smith saying on the show. For example, in episode 1, he's credited with toasting the dead baby Balon as, quote, "heir for a day," but the episode cuts away from him before he says that exact phrase, and later to Viserys, he doesn't explicitly say whether or not he actually said it. In the show, Daemon illegally occupied Dragonstone for a time, and he steals a dragon egg from the dragon pit in King's Landing and takes it to Dragonstone. In the book, he does not do these things. He just wants to take an egg for Mysaria, who he has impregnated, but Viserys puts his foot down. And in fact, on the show, his sexual impotency is really the big issue. In the book, Mushroom alleges that Daemon actually finished the job with Rhaenyra in the Isle of Silk, but in the show, once Rhaenyra takes a higher status in that encounter, he goes soft. In the book, the death of his wife, Rhea Royce, in the Vale is left as a mystery, but the show clarifies that Daemon was the culprit, specifically after she shames him for not being able to, quote, finish. Season 1 ends with him at Rhaenyra's side when she gets the news that Lucerys is dead, but he's somewhere else in the book. Instead, on the show, he stays at Dragonstone and courts the dragon Vermithor with a Valyrian lullaby, which is not something he does in the book. And now in season 2, based on trailer footage, Daemon seems to be experiencing his own kinds of visions and dreams. So maybe it's really the Matt Smith of it all. He's an amazing actor, but Daemon on the show is just, I think, a more interesting character who supplants dragons and dragon eggs and dragonmont spelunking and other dragon-related activities for his struggles to procreate. Okay, change number 3, Rhaenyra as a hero. This show claims to not be picking a side between the greens and the blacks, making Alicent, they claim, as equally as sympathetic as Rhaenyra and equally as hateable. But while you can totally read that from the book, it's just not true based on season 1 of the show. Aegon's dream gives Rhaenyra a sympathetic justification for her determinism that just did not exist in the book. On the show, Viserys' decision to marry Alicent is depicted as a betrayal of her friendship with Rhaenyra, as the young actresses are initially depicted as roughly the same age, with Viserys as significantly older. But in the book, Viserys is only 25 at the time, Alicent is 18, and Rhaenyra is 9 years old. Therefore, Alicent is closer in age to Viserys than she is to Rhaenyra. But the show makes it seem like it's a creepy, grooming, American Beauty type relationship orchestrated by Otto and Alicent, and it is something that Rhaenyra and us should feel rightfully grossed out by. The show also invents everything we see in the Hunt episode, including Rhaenyra seeing the White Hart stag. None of that is in the book. On the show, it makes it seem like Rhaenyra has this natural divine right to the Iron Throne, and Criston Cole was there to witness it. Now, in the show, Rhaenyra and Criston Cole do have sex, but later Rhaenyra denies him when she has to do her duty and wed Laenor Velaryon. In the book, it's more nebulous whether or not they had sex and who seduced whom. But in the show, Criston Cole comes off like a total psychopathic douchebag. Instead of killing the Knight of Kisses, Joffrey Lonmouth, in a melee, an attorney, as he does in the text, and in a melee, anything goes, in the show, he snaps and does it at Rhaenyra and Laenor's wedding party. And then when he tries to kill himself afterward in the Godswood, Alicent intervenes. All of that is another invention for the show that makes Alicent look way more opportunistic for recruiting this savage spurned lover in this loose cannon. Ultimately, Emma Darcy's Rhaenyra does way more to push back against the butchery on her side of the family in the character of Daemon than Olivia Cook's Alicent does against the butchery on her side of the family from Sir Criston Cole and Aemond. Now sure, Rhaenyra on the show is not a guiltless character, but she is without a doubt the hero. And the show absolutely leans pro Team Black. And another example of that is change number 4, Rhaenys's spotlight. The queen who never was has is elevated to greater importance on this show. The opening scene of the series depicts the Great Council of 101 as a choice between Viserys and Rhaenys gets passed over. That's not the case in the book. There, it's a contest between Viserys and Laenor Velaryon, Rhaenys' son, as Rhaenys' claim had already been rejected at the time of the final vote. They also give Rhaenys a powerful moment in the penultimate episode, crashing Aegon's coronation in the dragon pit with her dragon Meleys, killing hundreds of people. This did not happen in the book at all, but by putting it in the show, they leave Rhaenys with this personal you against Aegon and gives the Blacks the reputation of not caring that much about street level destruction in King's Landing. Similar to Matt Smith, I think this show just evolved around the natural star power of Eve Best and they just wanted to give her more to do. Change number 5, green schemes. The character of Larys Strong has a much bigger role on the show. In the book, the fire at Harrenhal that kills his father Lionel Strong and his brother Harwin Strong, the biological father to Jace, Luke, and Joff, was more of a mystery, is actually thought to be the ghost of Harrenhal. But on the show, it was Larys's operation. They give Larys a cane with a firefly and this weird interest in horticulture, hinting that he might be a green seer or a warg. They also give him this creepy relationship with Alicent in this foot fetish that does not exist in the book. Just another way to make the Greens look like they just have this gross side to them and this unfair advantage. Change number 6, Helena as a dreamer. Season 1 depicts Alicent's daughter Helena from a young age as a Luna Lovegoody bug girl who makes prophetic statements that end up coming true. This is not the case in the book. The text describes her as just a happy girl who only descends into madness a bit later in her life due to very justified reasons. I think they gave the character on the show this interest in entomology and possible dreamer status to just give the character more importance and more to do on the show on the other side of those events. Also so that the Greens have a Targaryen dreamer on their side who gives them a claim to the future to challenge the dreams and claim to the future professed by Rhaenyra and Daemon. Change number 7, Laenor is still alive. In the text, Laenor Velaryon is killed by Carl Corey in Spicetown, and it's speculated that Daemon might have paid Carl to do this to get Rhaenyra out of that marriage. But on the show, that death is faked, and Laenor is last seen rowing away from Driftmark. It's potentially a pretty big game changer, as it changes the trajectory of who will ride his dragon Seasmoke in the wars to come. If he ever returns, whose side he'll join. I would assume Rhaenyra's side, but we'll see. Change number 8, Harold Westerling is still alive. Similar deal here. The Knight of the King's Guard, Harold Westerling, his servitude comes to an end when he dies in the book, but on the show, he really just resigns when the Green Council forms following Viserys' death and plots to crown Aegon instead of Rhaenyra, and he just can't stomach that treachery, so he goes to Dragonstone to serve the Blacks. And there are several other small cosmetic changes that they just made for the way they plotted the show, but the last one, and potentially the biggest one for season 2, change number 9, asshole Aemond. If Matt Smith as Daemon and the Blacks are meant to be more sympathetic, I think Aemond, whose name is an anagram for Daemon, just shifting the D to the end, is positioned to be the show's villain in the way that he isn't totally in the book. When, as a boy, he claims the dragon Vhagar, leading to a spat with Jace and Luke and the loss of his eye. In the book, it happens after he calls the boys strong bastards and pushes Joffrey in a pile of dragon dung, leading to Luke slicing out his eye. On the show, Joff is not there for that fight, but Baela and Rhaena are present, which makes Aemond claiming their late mother's dragon feel like a personal insult to them. And after getting his eye cut out, he says, "I lost an eye, but I gained a dragon," which is a line from the book, but it's something that Aemond says as an adult later in his life, looking back on his youth. Having him say it here as a kid gives him kind of this villainous sense of destiny, like it's a lifelong villain's origin moment. In Aemond's aerial scuffle with Luke and Arrax over Storm's End, the show has Aemond shouting, "Vhagar, no!" to make it seem like he lost control of his dragon and didn't want to kill Luke. And on its own, that's a fascinating change, because in the moment, it makes Aemond more sympathetic, but it also forces us to focus more on his next moves in season 2. Depending on what Aemond claims happened, he could still come off as a hated villain in season 2 if he owns up to this. But in our eyes as viewers, we're gonna know he's just a weak, weaselly piece of shit who just wants to come off as a badass, who could stop the even worse retaliatory strikes that are gonna happen by just telling the truth about his loss of control of Vhagar, but he's gonna let his ego and reputation as a bad boy get in the way of that. And it's really those personality flaws that are the true engines of this civil war. Really, I want this show to continue to explore how none of these characters have any real control over their dragons. These dragons are just a force of nature. They are too big for this world. They do whatever the hell they want. And the Targaryens are just lucky to know the Valyrian commands to make these dragons let them ride them. Thanks for tuning into this compilation, and New Rockstars is going to be doing weekly breakdowns of all the details you missed in every episode of House of the Dragon Season 2. Comment down below with your thoughts. Follow me at EA Voss. Subscribe to all 3 channels of the New Rockstars Network for breakdowns, news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching. Bye.